Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D in WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Suddenly Got a Bone-Breaking Quirk. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Shouta Aizawa never particularly cared for children. He didn't hate children. He just wasn't a fan of children. They were loud, cried way too much for his liking, high maintenance, thrived on attention, and were sticky, always so sticky. It was for these reasons that he figured he'd never have children of his own, and he was okay with that. Who needs kids when you have 4 needy cats? They were practically the same thing. Aizawa was sure of this when one of his cats woke him by smothering his face. How this cat hadn't killed him yet was beyond him. Mornin' Sora. He reached up with both of his hands and pulled his black ghost-striped cat off of his face. The moment he spoke, his other 3 cats immediately jumped up onto his bed and started to cry for his attention. Tora, a fluffy orange tabby, came up and tried to push Sora out of his way. This caused the 2 of them to start fighting with each other on the side of Aizawa. Miso, an orange, white, and black calico, just jumped over her brothers and landed directly on Aizawa's face. Oof, Aizawa couldn't suppress his grunt. Miso rubbed herself under his chin and happily smacked him in the face with her fluffy tail. Finally came Chobai, a rarity that Shouta was proud to find. A black, gray, and orange tortoiseshell male cat. Chobai, unlike the others, didn't immediately run to Aizawa. He, instead, chose to lay down and started to play with the edge of a blanket. Okay, I'm up. He grunted before finally sitting up fully. Snatching his phone up from his nightstand, Aizawa rubbed his tired eyes to look at the time. He knew it had to be early in the morning by the lack of sunlight streaming through his window, so it didn't shock him when his phone read 5:48 in the morning. Hey, 5 hours of sleep. Not bad. Aizawa stretched his arms over his head before reaching up to pet Miso under the chin. Okay, gremlins, let me get my coffee and then I'll feed you, he told his cats before he got to his feet and stalked for the kitchen. Instantly, all 4 cats raced after him to the kitchen. Tora jumped onto the counter. Miso and Chobai both stayed by his feet, crying needily like they haven't been fed in eons. And Sora decided now would be a good time to slide across the kitchen tiles like it was an ice rink. Aizawa started the coffee pot, and while that was brewing he reached under the sink for the cat food. Tiny war cries filled his kitchen and drowned out the sound of his dripping coffee pot. All the cats rushed to their food bowls, which Aizawa happily filled for them. Finally, once the last bowl was filled, silence, except for happy munching. Aizawa put the cat food back and pulled out a mug to start pouring himself a cup of coffee. Aizawa sat at his kitchen table and just enjoyed the time spent with himself. He was living his best life right now, with just him and his cats in a little 1-bedroom apartment and a job that would be considered too dangerous for most. Speaking of his job, Aizawa looked at his phone for the time. Only 20 minutes passed. I'll finish this cup and go on an early morning patrol, he decided fairly quickly. Eventually he finished his cup and got dressed and ready for the day. He said goodbye to his cats and locked the apartment door behind him. He put his goggles over his eyes and took off for the alleyways nearest him. While the pro heroes patrolled the main streets and stayed in the public eye, underground heroes, like himself, stuck to the alleyways and back streets, which he was happy for. He hated being scrutinized by the public for his every move. Using his capture weapon, a scarf made out of steel wire alloy and interwoven with nanofibers, it was flexible and did its job well. Never once did this scarf fail him. Using the scarf to latch onto a flag rod on the side of the building, Aizawa propelled himself up to the corner of a rooftop and perched himself there. He had a pretty good view spread out before him in the early morning hours as the sun was just starting to creep up over the horizon and turn the sky a baby blue. He always loved this view, even if he, himself, looked like a gargoyle on the roof. Aizawa squatted down and silently observed the view below. His eyes scanned the intersecting alleyways below him for any suspicious movements. When he saw nothing after a few moments, Aizawa jumped from the rooftop. He used his scarf to wrap around a light pole and take him to another roof. Is it too soon for a cigarette break? He half-joked when he saw nothing of interest as he rested his arms on his knees to watch down below him. Of course he didn't smoke much. Smoking would be illogical for a hero who has to keep in top physical shape for the job. That being said, sometimes a cigarette is needed to pass time. For roughly the next 10 minutes, Aizawa bounced from rooftop to rooftop looking for anything that would garner his attention. For a moment he thought maybe he would be lucky enough to have a slow and easy morning, but it soon seemed that wouldn't be the case. It was maybe 30 or so minutes into his patrol and he finally spotted something. It almost seemed like nothing. just two guys snooping around an alleyway like they've lost something important. They were looking behind trash cans, kicking boxes out of their way, and even opening dumpsters. If they were just looking around the ground, it might not have gotten Aizawa's attention, but they were making a lot of noise. Aizawa let out a yawn before quietly jumping down to a lower roof so he could assess the men a little better. He stood perched on the edge of the rooftop and looked down at the men below. The duo stayed close to one another while they looked for their missing item. The first male that was currently digging through the dumpster looked to be of average height and build. If he had a quirk, it wasn't visible. His hair was pink and color cut just below the nape of his neck. He didn't look too muscular. The only thing about him that was raising any flags to Aizawa was the fact that he was wearing a white coat, a lab coat. The other guy honestly wasn't any different, save for his brown hair. He was maybe 2 or 3 inches taller than his counterpart. But all the same, he too was frantically looking for something by knocking over trash cans and boxes all the same. As the seconds ticked on, the men were both growing increasingly more frustrated, to the point that the one with brown hair suddenly exclaimed out, "This is bullshit," as he kicked over a trash can so hard that it clattered so loudly that it scared a few stray raccoons. Aizawa was ready to turn around and look for something else to entertain him when the man with pink hair hissed out, "Be quiet. You'll draw someone to our location." Interesting. Aizawa took this moment to stealthily and quietly jump down from the rooftop and into the alleyway. Neither male heard him as he started to approach. It wasn't until he was 10 or so feet from them did he speak. "Lose something?" he inquired. Both men quickly turned to face him. Aizawa kept his hands in his pockets as he watched the two men carefully behind his goggles. Both men looked nervous, and now that Aizawa was face to face with them, he noticed something particular. The one with pink hair had brown eyes while the one with brown hair had pink eyes, and they looked identical facial-wise. It was the one with pink hair who spoke up, "You a hero." There was a tone in his voice that didn't sit right with Aizawa. "Maybe," Aizawa answered flatly. "Should I be worried?" He decided to answer back. This time the one with brown hair spoke up swiftly. "No, forgive my brother." He stepped in between the two of them and laughed nervously at Aizawa. "I'm Dr. Kiku Issa, and my brother there is Dr. Tashiro Issa. You see, this is embarrassing, but we work for the clinic up the street there." Kiku pointed towards where the alley ended, and Aizawa looked to see that there was a small clinic just up the street within walking distance. And 2 little boys managed to escape. "Excuse me." Aizawa turned back around in shock. "I know. Completely embarrassing. It was our fault. We left the door open and they ran because they were getting a shot." Kiku quickly explained in a frantic voice. "We checked the cameras and we know they ran in this direction. It was less than 5 minutes ago, and if you could help us find them, we would be just so grateful." Aizawa almost wanted to chuckle at this situation. "Children," he thought while being mildly amused. "Of course, just point me in the direction you think they went. If you could look down that way." Kiku pointed to the alley to their left that split off into 2 different directions. "We'd appreciate it." Without another word, Aizawa started walking towards the alley in question. "Are you sure?" Aizawa heard Kiku know. That had to be Tashiro asking. They sounded so alike it was almost scary. It made Aizawa's hackles start to rise. "They're hiding something," he decided fairly quickly. Aizawa stopped walking and turned back towards the brothers. Both of them had moved on away from him, and he was tempted to return to them to see what. Feeling eyes on the back of his head, Aizawa turned his head back around to where the alley split off to the right. He saw a glimpse of something purple and narrowed his eyes behind his goggles. Aizawa didn't walk towards the alley. Instead, he used his scarf to grab onto a corner of the building and propelled himself up. When he was on the side of the building, he then looked down. Sure enough, there were 2 little boys hiding in the alley. If he had to guess on the spot, they looked to both be around 5 or 6 years in age. One had wild lilac-colored hair, and the other had a mop of green curls on his head. The one with green hair looked to be unconscious, and that both boys were wearing plain white shirts and shorts and had no shoes on. Aizawa used his scarf to wrap the middle of a power line and hung himself upside down. From there, he slowly lowered himself upside. This kept his movements quiet as he got closer to the boys without startling them. The closer he got, the more he was able to see. Like how the purple-haired boy was covered in scratches, most healed, but there was one in his neck that looked pretty deep and was still bleeding. The unconscious one didn't have a scratch on him, which was odd. When he got even closer, he saw the boy with green hair was littered in freckles, but his pale face was flushed red and his breathing looked labored. Aizawa figured it out pretty quick. He's sick. Finally, Aizawa got down to his scarf's limit almost directly behind the purple-haired boy who had the green-haired boy laying in his lap. "We just have to hope he gives up, Zuchin. Me, or the doctor." The boy yelped and jumped quickly. He wrapped his arms around Zuchin, holding the other boy closer to him in an attempt to protect him. "Crap," the little boy cried out as he was now attempting to carry Zuchin. Aizawa lowered himself to the ground while the purple-haired boy tried to run away, all while dragging the other around. It was almost pitiful to watch if it weren't also slightly tragic. He could get away faster if he weren't carrying the other one. Aizawa thought before he simply used his scarf to wrap around the little boys and tried to pull them back. The kid with the purple hair wasn't letting up though as he tried to fight against the scarf, but it did nothing but tug on Aizawa's neck a little. The little purple-haired kid started to whine and cry. I don't want to go back. You can't make me. This didn't sound like a child afraid of getting a shot or seeing the doctor. This sounded like a kid scared for his life. Calm down, Aizawa slowly approached. The kid spun to look Aizawa in the eye. His own face is now tear-stained and filled with horror. No, Aizawa stopped as his mind suddenly felt blank. Let us go, turn around, and stay there. The little boy's voice resounded through his head. Aizawa's body moved on its own. He had no control over his movements as he unraveled his scarf from around the boys. What am I doing? Aizawa thought as he retracted his scarf so it was back around his neck. Instantly the boy tried to take off again. Aizawa turned his body and started to walk away from the boys until he was facing the wall completely. What am I doing? Why am I just standing here? I can't move. There you are. There was a sharp scream from the purple-haired boy. No, I won't go back. Thanks for getting rid of that hero for me. Makes this a whole lot easier. There was another scream of duress from the child, and Aizawa was just standing there with his back to the action. There were grunts and the sound of a scuffle. Damn, there was a sudden high-pitched scream from the man. He's biting me. Aizawa had to assume it was the purple-haired kid that was making almost animalistic noises as he was digging his teeth deep into this guy. Help us. The voice suddenly called and fluttered around Aizawa's brain before his mind was freed completely. Aizawa wasted no time. He turned, charged, and jumped immediately for Tashiro as his assumption was right. The purple-haired kid had the guy's arm in his mouth and was biting down hard. So hard that his teeth were sunk into Tashiro's arm and blood was splattered on the floor around them while Tashiro shrieked in pain. His boot made contact with Tashiro's face. Tashiro flew back as did the purple-haired kid. Thankfully the kid didn't land with Tashiro. Instead he landed just a few feet away. They took Zuchin. You have to stop them, please. The kid pointed down the alley before he got to his feet and started running in the same direction he was pointing. Zuchin. Whoa, Aizawa, being swift, used his scarf to bring the kid back to him before he could run headfirst into danger. Stay here. I'll get your friend back. Okay. But you should that doctor his quirk well. The one with pink hair. That one. The kid pointed to the unconscious doctor. Isn't the real doctor. It's his quirk. I can't explain it. But he can only make two of himself and each time they look a little different and they act slightly different as well. So, the one with brown hair is the real deal and Tashiro is the clone. Yes, look, he's already got rid of Kiku. True to what the kid said. When Aizawa looked, Tashiro Issa was no more than just a pile of ash. Even his clothes were gone. So, be careful. Odds are he'll make another clone of himself. Thanks for the warning, kid. I'll get Zuchin back for you and then I want an explanation. Aizawa didn't wait for a response as he took off running towards where the kid had pointed him to. I knew something wasn't right with those two men. I should have listened to my gut and used erasure on them. It would have exposed their quirk right away. Hopefully, I won't be too late. Aizawa ran up a wall in record time. He just needed a low rooftop to see his surroundings. Aizawa perched himself on the corner of the roof and lifted his goggles off of his head to get a better unobstructed view of his surrounding. There, Aizawa saw movement in a nearby alley intersection and saw Kiku making a break for the main street. He put his goggles back on his face and leapt off of the rooftop into the next one. Don't think I'll stop if you make this public, asshole. Aizawa snarled as he darted across the rooftop at an alarming speed. Kiku was thankfully still in the alley by the time Aizawa finally caught up to him. He did have Zuchin in his arms. The kid was out cold and curled up against the man's chest like a prize he wanted to protect. Aizawa leapt from the building and in midair used his scarf to wrap around Kiku's upper arms, but he didn't stop there. He kept erasure on and stared Kiku down so he couldn't make a clone of himself. Aizawa then came down, wrapping his legs around Kiku's upper body and twisting his lower body so Kiku was forced to let go of the child while he was slammed into the ground. Aizawa slapped one hand on Kiku's head and kept his knees planted into the middle of Kiku's back, keeping him pinned to the asphalt. Who are you and what do you want with these kids? Kiku seemed to grimace in pain as he started to sweat. Damn it, I'm just a pediatrician. The boys got scared and ran off. Bullshit. Aizawa snarled as he dug his knee deeper into the man's back. Kiku gasped in pain. That's a clinic, not a children's hospital for starters, and if you were really concerned about these boys you would have involved the cops. So, I'm going to ask again, and if you give me an answer I don't like, I'm going to smash your face into the asphalt over and over again. Aizawa threatened as he tightened his grip on Kiku's hair. Who are you, and what do you want with these kids? I was paid okay. I never met the guy. I was paid to watch over these brats. Aizawa smashed the man's face into the asphalt like promised. Kiku let out a grunt of pain at the sound of a sickening crack coming from his nose. We're getting somewhere now, aren't we? But I want the truth and nothing less. Okay, I was paid to watch them. I swear, I never met the boss, but it's some big underground lab. The boys got out. I wanted to get them back before anyone noticed. Aizawa picked the man's head up and smashed it into the asphalt yet again. This time the man screamed in pain. What did they want with him? I don't know. I swear. Please. Kiku started to cough and there was a small clatter. Aizawa saw blood and bits of white, several of his teeth chipped from the impact, and that's what Aizawa was seeing. Please believe me. I was just paid to watch and make sure the boys got from point A to point B. Aizawa felt his hands tremble lightly. He wanted to smash Kiku's face in just one more time for good measure, but ultimately decided against it. Underground hero or not, it wouldn't look good. Fine, I'll leave the rest of the cops to ask, then. In the meantime, it was a swift jab to the face that knocked Kiku out cold. Stay down. Finally, Aizawa was able to blink. Jesus, that has to be a record. Aizawa could only grumble as he lifted his goggles from his face and pulled out eye drops from his pocket. Lifting his head up, he allowed the drops to fall into his eyes and grant him relief. Once he was sure he would be okay, Aizawa dialed for the cops and gave them information on where to find him and the boys. It was in the middle of this important phone call did he suddenly feel something tug on his pant leg. Yeah, the villain has been restrained and I'm watching him. And Aizawa looked down to see the curly-haired boy was now up and on his feet. Zuchin looked up at Aizawa with the most innocent green eyes. His face was still flushed and he looked feverish. Have 2 little boys with me, so if you could get here quickly, I'd appreciate it. Aizawa hung up fairly quickly after that. Aizawa was never one for children, but he wasn't heartless. Hey there, buddy. He slowly crouched down so they were eye to eye. The boy said nothing for a moment as he wrapped his arms around Aizawa's leg. Is Hitchin okay? Zuchin whispered. It was almost borderline inaudible, and if Aizawa wasn't focusing on the boy he might not have even heard him. Hitchin, I take it that's the little purple-haired boy? Aizawa inquired as he automatically planted his hand into this kid's thick green curls. The little feverish boy lethargically nodded against Aizawa's leg and sniffled before he started softly sobbing. Poor kid is scared and sick on top of it. Don't cry, okay? The police are going to come and bring you back to your mom and dad. The little boy sniffled and rubbed at his eyes with one hand while he clung to Aizawa's leg with his free hand. Come on. Aizawa offered the little boy his hand and the boy took it. Let's go and find Hitchin and get you 2 reunited. We'll figure out where to go from there. After the villain was taken into custody, Aizawa only felt it right to accompany the 2 boys to the hospital as they were clearly scared. In the ambulance he finally learned their actual names, Itoshi and Izuku, and they were both 5 years old. Itoshi had been the one to fess up their names. He even gave his last name to Aizawa, but not Izuku's last name as he didn't know Izuku's last name. Almost as soon as Izuku laid down on the stretcher he was out like a light. Izuku's fever was something clearly hellish in nature, and the paramedics were trying to bring it down to the best of their abilities. What happened next almost seemed to happen out of nowhere. Poor kid. The paramedic cooed as she prepped out an IV needle to stick into Izuku's arm. It was clear she wanted to give him saline. That's a big needle. Hitoshi's voice was teetering between concern and dangerous. Aizawa, who had been dozing off, cracked an eye open. Yes, it is, but don't worry with my quirk. The paramedic suddenly stopped. Just completely and utterly stopped. She put the needle down and just sat on the ground of the ambulance. Her eyes were vacant, void of any emotion as the poor woman just sat there. What did you just do? Aizawa inquired, and he leaned forward with his arms on his knees. He could use a razor and fix this in a heartbeat, but he had to admit, he was curious about this kid's quirk. Nothing. Hitoshi tried to lie, but little children aren't particularly good at lying, especially when Hitoshi was trying his hardest to avoid eye contact with Aizawa. Now, I don't think this is nothing. Izuku needs liquids. He's really sick. But the needle is big and Zuchin doesn't like needles. Hitoshi almost seemed to whine. Aizawa sighed and rubbed his hand over his face in slight irritation. Children. He looked at the woman using a razor, and in just a moment she came back to them looking confused as all hell, but she slowly stood and got right back to work. Simir. Aizawa decided a heart-to-heart was needed between the 2 of them. He patted his knee in an invitation. He didn't think Hitoshi would actually accept this invite, but to his surprise the kid slowly climbed down from the stretcher and crawled up to Aizawa's knee. Aizawa placed a hand on Hitoshi's back to keep him steady during the ride to the hospital. I know you're scared for Izuku, and I know you must be scared as well, but you don't do that to people. I know you did the same thing to me in the alley. We just want to help. I promise. Hitoshi kept a frown on his face. Okay, I just don't want anything bad to happen. I know you don't, kid. But look. Aizawa pointed and Hitoshi looked over his shoulder. The nurse had gotten the IV in with no problems, though she did look a little more wary when she and Hitoshi shared a look. Izuku is perfectly fine, and Aizawa lightly poked Hitoshi in the chest. Owe someone an apology. Hitoshi looked at the paramedic and then back at Aizawa. I'm sorry. Hitoshi looked back at the paramedic and placed his 2 index fingers together in embarrassment. For brainwashing you, that is. Is that what happened? Talk about a powerful quirk. The paramedic breathed in shock. Brainwashing, huh? Aizawa chuckled. Yep, Izuku thinks it's really cool. He's the first to like my quirk. Most of my classmates said my quirk was scary and they stopped being my friends. Oh, are you and Izuku classmates? No, I never met him before. Hitoshi's voice died down in his throat and his look became forlorn. Before you were kidnapped. Hitoshi nodded solemnly. Aizawa pulled Hitoshi's head into his chest. Don't worry, we'll get you home to your parents before too long now. You and Izuku. Hitoshi muttered softly against Aizawa's chest. Aizawa didn't hear him, but it sounded something along the lines of, I don't think so, but thanks for trying. Poor kid sounds so tired. Aizawa didn't mind when Hitoshi just kept his head resting on Aizawa's chest with his thumb in his mouth. It really didn't take long for Hitoshi to fall asleep. Sir, the paramedic inquired after it was clear that Hitoshi was asleep. Yes, we're coming up to the hospital in 10 minutes. You could put him on the stretcher. Now would probably be the best time. Aizawa looked down at the little boy in his arms. Hitoshi looked at Peace, and did Aizawa really want to potentially wake the poor child? This was probably the first time, and God knows how long, Hitoshi was able to relax and sleep. No, I can hold him. It's no problem, Aizawa decided. Just tell me which way I need to go when we get to the hospital. The paramedic simply nodded and focused back on Izuku, but she continued to speak. That child, Hitoshi, his quirk is rather dangerous. Yeah, Aizawa breathed out. I know what you're saying, but I don't agree with you. The quirk is only as dangerous as its user. The kid's scared, so it's only natural he'd use his quirk to his advantage. The paramedic scrunched her nose up in disagreement. If you ask me, quirks like his. Well, I'm not asking you. He's a child. Aizawa didn't let her finish her sentence. His tone was clipped and cold, and it was more than enough to shut her up. The ride was rather tense after that, but Aizawa didn't care. Eventually, they made it to the hospital, and true to his word, Aizawa carried Hitoshi the whole way inside the hospital and into a room where Hitoshi was swept away by doctors and nurses alike. Aizawa watched him go and put his hands into his pockets. Good luck, you two. Aizawa then turned his heel and walked out of the hospital, wishing the children a good life and knowing that the cops will do the rest. Maybe he'll stop by and check on how they're doing after a few days. Aizawa lazily scratched behind Tora's ears. The orange cat was sitting on his lap while he watched TV. Sora was sitting on the end of the couch taking a nap. Miso was currently running around like a crackhead, and Chobai is doing something. After his hectic morning a couple of days ago, Aizawa felt at peace with his cats while he lazily watched some TV. Though, he'd be lying if he said he wouldn't occasionally hear Hitoshi's little voice in his head. Aizawa didn't know why, but those little boys just kept coming back into his mind. Zuchin doesn't like needles. Or that little whisper, the one that kept changing around in Aizawa's mind because he knows he heard Hitoshi wrong. I don't think so, but thanks for trying. I don't think so, they can't stop crying. I don't want to go, because they're lying. Aizawa sighed and used a free hand to rub at his face, and he gave his head a good shake. I'm thinking too much into things, he decided. He just wanted to watch TV. Was that too much to ask for? No sooner had he downed his cup of coffee did his work phone suddenly start to ring. Turning the TV on mute, Aizawa answered his phone. Eraserhead. He grunted in greeting. He placed his feet on the coffee table as the person on the other end started to speak. Eraserhead, this is Detective Asada. I'm currently working on the case regarding the two little boys you helped rescue a couple days prior. Tora decided now was a good time to start kneading at Aizawa's pants. Yeah, Aizawa tried to pick his cat up with one hand. But Tora dug his claws into his pants and now refused to let go. Well, some interesting details came up regarding the boys, and it's rather urgent. Do you think you can come to the hospital tomorrow morning? The sooner the better. Shit, I can come tonight if you want. Aizawa now cradled the phone between his shoulder and his cheek while he tried to free himself from Tora's grasp. The cat was winning this fight. Really? The man sounded surprised by this. I mean, if it's no trouble, because this is kinda big. Yeah, I'm not doing anything at the moment. I can be there in 40 minutes, maybe an hour at the latest. Aizawa guessed and suddenly flinched when Sora decided to jump on the couch and headbutt him for affection. All while Tora was still attached to his pants. That's great. I'll let the social worker know so they can meet us. Aizawa felt his body perk at that, and his eyes narrowed as his cats were suddenly forgotten. A social worker. Like I said, Eraserhead. It's bad. The hospital was a lot more dismal at night. Not as many people were running around, and nobody really seemed to be in a hurry. Aizawa walked towards the pediatric ward where he knew the boys would be held. This was per Detective Asada's instructions. They were to meet at the ward and talk to the boys. Apparently, Hitoshi only liked to talk to Aizawa and nobody else. Aizawa felt slightly honored that he had made an impact on the boy, but something just didn't feel right. Mr. Eraserhead. A voice from behind caused Aizawa to stop and turn. Walking up to him had to be Detective Asada, a gruff, older, and squat man with a scruffy pepper-colored beard and short hair to match in color. The man had to be a foot shorter than Aizawa, stopping just at Aizawa's shoulders. "It's fantastic to meet you." The detective offered his hand and Aizawa took it. "Likewise, I was hoping to get here before you, but got delayed by traffic," the detective told him as they started walking together. "So, what's this about?" Straight to the point, I see. Although I want to wait for the social worker, I guess I can fill you in on the major breakthroughs on the way," Asada said, and the two of them walked into an elevator together. The pediatric ward was on the 5th floor, so they did have some time to kill in the cramped space. Let's start with the easiest. Izuku. Once his fever broke, we questioned him. It wasn't easy as Hitoshi wanted to be with him. We had to constantly try and get him to leave. At one point, Hitoshi threw a tantrum and had to be locked into his room after attempting to use his quirk on an officer. Aizawa didn't know if he should smile or eye roll. That kid was going places in the future. Still, Hitoshi was going to need help with that quirk of his. Still, after questioning Izuku, it's clear the poor kid doesn't remember anything. He didn't even know his own age. He only knew his first name. It is an extreme case of amnesia from how I see it. It may or may not be quirk-related. I ran his first name and his features through a list of missing children within the last 3 years and nobody came up. Aizawa wasn't sure he heard Asada correctly. Nobody. That can't be right. He has to belong to someone. I ran it 3 times to be sure the system wasn't glitching. There is no missing child named Izuku. More yet, there's no child that looks like him that's missing. It's like Izuku just showed up out of the blue. But there's one more thing that might be the reason why. Izuku has an extra pinky toe bone. He's quirkless. That explains Hitoshi's protectiveness. Aizawa thought. Yep, so we're sure he was abandoned because of it. I guess that explains the social worker then. Partially. You see, once we were finally able to talk to Hitoshi and learn his last name, we managed to find out who his parents were in. The detective sighed as he trailed off. They were dead, Eraserhead. They've been dead for over a year, murdered, and I'm positive Hitoshi witnessed it. That's part of the reason I asked you to be here. The sooner we know what happened to his parents, the sooner we can put the people who hurt them to justice. Also, from what I'm told, Hitoshi only likes you. Finally, Aizawa managed to decipher what Hitoshi had told him in the ambulance a couple days ago. I can't go because they're dying. Shit, Aizawa sighed out. Poor kid. No wonder he's so protective of Izuku. You can say that again. But do you understand why a social worker is needed? Yeah, I figured they were just kidnapped. I didn't think it'd go down a rabbit hole. As Aizawa said this, the door to the elevator opened and they stepped out into the pediatric ward. Room 13 is where they're being held, the detective told Aizawa. The pediatric ward was rather quiet at night, though on occasion Aizawa could hear sobs or whimpers coming from the rooms. The floor wasn't exactly lively, so it didn't take long for a nurse to spot them. Can I help you, gentlemen? The nurse inquired as she made a beeline for the two of them. The pediatric ward isn't accepting visitors at this hour. She tried to shoo them away, which Aizawa found reasonable if not a bit rude and suspicious in a way. Aizawa flashed his hero license to the nurse and Asada did the same with his badge. Forgive us for this intrusion, but we need to speak to Hitoshi, Shinsu, and Izuku. I'm sorry, but it's late and the boys are probably sleeping, the nurse told them flatly. Aizawa's eyes darted to her name tag. Ruimori was her name. Aizawa looked back up at her. He had a feeling he was going to need to remember her. Black hair, blue eyes, gapped teeth, slightly heavyset, and blue freckled. He noted all of her noticeable features. Well, I'm sorry, but we need to talk to them, ma'am. You can't, I'm sorry. Aizawa proceeded to walk past the woman. We don't have time for this. He dismissed her with a hand wave. Excuse me, you're excused. 10, 11, 12 Aizawa approached door 13 with the detective not far behind him. The nurse was fuming and she suddenly shoved Aizawa with her shoulder, stopping him from opening the door. I said oh. Aizawa snatched her with his capture weapon and forced her out of his way. He then opened the door, and he saw red at what he was witnessing. Hitoshi was not only bound to his bed via bed cuffs, but the hospital staff felt it necessary to gag the boy with a wide, thick piece of cloth around his mouth. Hitoshi wasn't alone in this either, as they had done the same thing with Izuku. What the actual fuck? Aizawa hissed in anger before storming over to Hitoshi while Detective Asada went for Izuku. I'm going to touch you, okay? Asada told Izuku before he started to undo the bounds around his hands. In his anger, Aizawa nearly forgot to warn Hitoshi. Don't be scared. I'm going to touch you, but it's just to get these bonds off, he told the child before he started working on getting the cuffs off. It didn't take long for Aizawa to free Hitoshi, and instantly the boy wrapped his arms around Aizawa's neck in appreciation. Why did you think to bind these kids up like criminals? Asada demanded as he approached the nurse. We only do this at night, you have to understand. That one, she pointed to Hitoshi, has a dangerous quirk that he likes to abuse, and that one, she pointed to Izuku next, can't sit still for the life of him. He's constantly trying to get out of bed, and won't shut up. They're goddamn children. Aizawa hissed between clenched teeth as he stood, Hitoshi clinging to him like a koala. And something is telling me that Hitoshi isn't abusing his quirk as much as you like to think. He's 5. No 5-year-old has full control over their power. The nurse made a sour face at Aizawa. Oh please, don't tell me you wouldn't do the same. I wouldn't, because I'm not heartless. Are you aware that these kids are traumatized? That they're hurting? Or do you only think of yourself in these situations? Rui stuttered at this before her face flushed red. I'm doing what I'm trained to do. Neither Aizawa nor Asada spoke next, and that involves binding children. There, in the doorway stood a male. He was tall and slender with long limbs, with long electric blue hair put up in a ponytail with glasses to match the bright color of his hair. Instantly Aizawa saw what his quirk could be, as this man had 4 arms instead of 2. He was using 2 arms to write on a clipboard while the other 2 of his arms were digging into a bag. Agashi Suzuki, Social Services. He pulled a badge out of his backpack. He walked to Rui and looked at her name card. Rui Mori, is it? You can bet that CPS will be investigating the hospital after this, as well as investigating you. This is absolutely abhorrent and I will not stand by it. Higashi scowled before walking past the woman and up to Asada. Maybe it was the shame or it could be embarrassment, but Rui swiftly turned and walked out of the room after that. Aizawa was sure he saw tears. Gentlemen, as glad as I am to put this place to justice, I'm sure this isn't the main reason I was called here. Higashi inquired as he used one of his 4 hands to lightly pat Hitoshi's head. Hitoshi lifted his head off of Aizawa's chest and pouted at this sudden display of affection. Yes, there is. Asada walked over to Aizawa and Hitoshi. Hitoshi, we need to ask you some questions regarding your parents. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. We just need to know what happened. Hitoshi frowned at this as he clung to Aizawa's shirt tighter. Aye. Hitoshi stammered as he suddenly looked afraid. Aizawa took this moment to grab onto Hitoshi's little hand with his free hand. It's okay. I'll stay here with you, he told the boy. I'm not going anywhere. Suddenly, there was a tug on his pants leg. Izuku was standing beside him now, watching with an intense stare. Aizawa knew instantly what the other boy wanted. So, Aizawa sat on the bed. This allowed Izuku to climb into his lap. Oh my, these boys seem to like you. I can't even get Izuku to give me a high five, let alone get him to sit in my lap. Higashi chuckled a little as he pulled up a chair. Asada did so as well, and like Higashi he pulled out a pad and paper to write down. I can barely get the kid to talk to me, Asada commented next. Aizawa shrugged. Kids are like cats. Once one approves attention and the others will want attention as well, he told them, though he had a feeling that wasn't exactly the case. Izuku was a funny one. He wanted the best of both worlds. He sat on Aizawa's knee, while simultaneously hugging Hitoshi tightly with both of his arms, with his head laying on Hitoshi's chest. It was clear, to Aizawa at least, that both of these boys leaned heavily on one another during their entrapment and kidnapping. It's okay, Hitoshi. Like I said, you aren't in any trouble and nobody will judge you. Please, can you tell us what happened to your mommy and daddy? Asada asked once again. Yua Shinsu and Dai Shinsu were brutally murdered one sunny April day last year. What day? Hitoshi didn't remember. From what he could remember, 2 men had knocked on their door. Hitoshi sounded scarily emotionless as he retold his story. There was fighting. They were yelling at my dad about something. I didn't know what at the time, but I'm sure they were arguing about me. They wanted me. My daddy was yelling at them and told my mom to call the cops. You see, the thing about my dad is, he was quirkless, so he never stood a chance when the man with axes for hands swung. I remember watching his head roll. Jesus Christ, I never could have thought. Aizawa held onto the boys tighter. Mommy snatched me up and tried to run for the sliding door at the back, but there were more of them waiting for us. Hitoshi clutched at Aizawa's chest as he recalled this. Mommy had a quirk, unlike daddy. It wasn't strong. Mommy could make a quirk that was kind of a force field that would stop people for a small time, but it wasn't exactly strong. I remember the man with axes for hands barreling towards us. Mommy's force field wasn't strong enough to stop him, and she wrapped me in a hug and Hitoshi's emotions came back as he started to cry. She kissed me on the head and I miss my mommy and daddy. Hitoshi suddenly sobbed before covering his eyes with his hands. It was on instinct that Aizawa lightly patted Hitoshi's hair to comfort him. Izuku remained silent, but, like Aizawa, he seemed to hold Hitoshi just a little tighter. Hitoshi instantly used Izuku's shoulder to cry on. Though nobody asked him to, Hitoshi continued on with his story. After they killed her, they snatched me up and I remember the man with axe hands told me, if I tried to run he'd do to me what he did to my parents. He said between sobs, I'm sorry you had to go through that, Hitoshi, and trust me, we're going to do all we can to find the people who did this to you and your family, and Izuku, we hadn't forgotten you, young man. We'll do our best to find your family and someone to fix your memories. I swear this to both of you. The detective promised both boys. I have to ask, do you remember what any of the men who broke into your house looked like? Hitoshi thought about it for a moment before frowning. only the man with axe hands. He was really tall and had lots of muscles. His hair was cut short, down to his head, and he had a beard around his mouth. He was covered in tattoos. I remember he had a big lion that covered the entirety of his left arm. Hitoshi explained, mimicking the length of the tattoo with his hand. The detective wrote this all down. Detective, a word outside. Higashi inquired as he suddenly stood from his seat. Of course. With that, both men walked out of the hospital room. Can I lay you down? Aizawa asked the boys as it was clear to him their time was coming to an end again. Yet, Aizawa didn't want to let the boys go. He wanted to keep them safe, both of them. Hitoshi was still crying, though not as hard, yet he nodded all the same. Izuku simply nodded. Fuck this hospital. Aizawa scowled as he moved the binds so the cuffs were hanging off the side of the bed. These boys deserve so much better. Aizawa pulled the covers back and Hitoshi was the first to crawl onto the bed. Aizawa didn't even have time to stand before Izuku darted from his lap and crawled right next to Hitoshi. Izuku, don't you want to sleep in your own bed? Aizawa inquired. No, the little boy finally spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. I'll stay with Hichin. He's clearly upset if you can't tell, but thank you. And just like that, Izuku vanished under the covers with Hitoshi not far behind him. Them vanishing under the covers was their way of telling adults they wanted to be alone, and Aizawa could respect that. Still, Aizawa couldn't help it. He snorted. This kid, he thought with a small grin. All right, good night. Aizawa then left the room. There, just outside the door, was just Higashi. Higashi had all four of his arms crossed over his chest and seemed to be contemplating something. Aizawa shut the door and approached the man. He figured Asada had made his leave already. Is there anything else you may need me for? He inquired as he approached. Not unless you can fix unhealthy attachments or give Izuku a quirk. Higashi sighed. Their case isn't going to be an easy one. You see, I already tried to see if there are any family members to take Hitoshi in, but alas, his only living family member is an elderly grandmother who can't care for him, meaning both of them are going to have to go into foster care for the time being. I'm sure you noticed. Their attachment to one another isn't healthy in the slightest, a symptom of trauma. I fear putting them in the system. There's no way someone is willing to take both of them, and I've seen firsthand how Hitoshi gets when Izuku is taken away from him. Aizawa swallowed hard at this. I see. And it's not just Hitoshi. Izuku can get just as riled up as Hitoshi. They've formed such a bond that the mere idea of separating scares them. It also doesn't help that Izuku is quirkless. I hate to say it, but nobody is going to treat him well. Don't do it, Shouta. They're kids, not cats. You don't even like kids. Hospital personnel felt it needed to bind up children. Children. If they can't help these kids, then how can I possibly expect complete and utter strangers to help them? Can I really walk away from them and sleep well when I know I can train and help these kids rise up past this? I know I can foster them. I mean, what if, maybe, possibly, I can foster them? Just so you can have some time to look for a suitable home for the both of them, or, better yet, find someone to fix Izuku's memories, and you don't need to rush and throw them into a home that won't treat them right. Ha, very funny. Higashi laughed. He actually laughed at Aizawa's suggestion. When he saw that Aizawa wasn't joking, his smile dropped. Oh, you're serious. I am. Higashi narrowed his eyes now. Why? Publicity. Is your hero ranking not good enough for you? Underground hero. I stay out of the public eye. Then why? Because I'm a hero who sees two little kids who clearly need help that the foster system can't provide. If you put those kids in a foster home, they're just going to face more trauma and hardship. Higashi set his jaw tight and seemed to think about it. I will consider your proposal, Eraserhead, he said after a few minutes had passed. Expect a phone call in the morning. Higashi then turned his heel and left. Aizawa smirked and whipped out his cell phone. You see, Shouta Aizawa was never one for kids, but that wasn't going to stop him from searching for a 3-bedroom home to rent out for a while. Again, 13-year-old Izuku narrowed his eyes and focused on Hitoshi. Both boys stood in a fighting stance as they stared down one another. Izuku slowly stepped to the side and Hitoshi mirrored this movement by stepping just as well, so they were circling, but not facing away from their opponent. Finally, Izuku moved, a strike, swift and towards Hitoshi's face. But Hitoshi reacted just as quickly by making a grab for Izuku's wrist in an attempt to stop the attack, only the attack was a fake-out. The moment Hitoshi looked away to catch Izuku's wrist, Izuku swept his dominant leg and hooked it behind Hitoshi's knee. But this came with a price, as it caused both boys to suddenly lose balance and fall on top of each other. Both boys cried out in surprise as they tumbled to the ground in a heap. Aizawa sighed and shook his head. Still, though the boys couldn't see it, he had a small smile on his face as he did this. They're getting better. Still, he wiped the smile off of his face and crouched down to the bundle of limbs. Izuku, why did you think sweeping Hitoshi's leg was a good idea when he had you by the wrist? Aizawa inquired. Izuku's face went blank as he tried to think of an excuse. In my defense, I didn't think he'd grab me, he settled on saying with an awkward smile. Hitoshi started to laugh at this. Aizawa sighed again and checked his watch. Well, if we keep going we'll be late. So go and shower and get ready for school. We'll discuss more in the car. Okay, Dad. Both boys had said in sync as they both helped each other to their feet and started to dust themselves off before retreating for the house. Shouta Aizawa was never one for kids. But by some miracle he adopted 2 boys he had no plans on adopting in the first place. He had them in his care for 8 years but adopted them 5 years ago. But regardless, both boys had grown to be almost unrecognizable from all those years ago. From clinging to one another for dear life to learning how to fight. Granted, they still clung to each other, but not as intensely. Aizawa bent down and picked up a forgotten towel on the ground. Of course, Higashi and Asada had tried to do their best with Izuku. They did what they promised and brought a person who could fix or repair broken memories via their quirk. But, I'm sorry. The woman stood and bowed to them apologetically after she had touched 5-year-old Izuku's head. But after only a few short seconds, I can tell you, there's nothing there. What do you mean by that? Higashi had demanded, his eyes wide with slight shock. I mean, he has no memories to fix because he has no past memories. It's almost like they were wiped from his mind. She explained softly to them. I'm sorry, she repeated before bowing once again. Do you know anyone who could? It was Asada that tried to speak next, but the woman cut him off. If I can be honest, I don't think you're going to get his memories back. Not without confronting the person who either took them or wiped them in the first place. Aizawa smacked the towel a few times, getting any dirt and sand out of it. Particles flew and his pants got dirty. Izuku's memories eventually became a lost cause. Higashi and Asada tried. God, did they try. Izuku was the missing puzzle piece they needed to know why all of this had happened. But each and everyone they had attempted to bring in, 4 different people with memory quirks, all said the same. His memories were missing or wiped purposely. And they couldn't be repaired. It was frustrating, but nothing could be done about it. Asada had even gone as far as to put Izuku in the local paper to identify his family, but nobody came. I've got no choice, Aizawa. Asada had told him as the two met for tea one chilly December. The two of them watched as the now 8-year-old boys chased each other around the large yard in a game of tag. Izuku is officially a Yamada Taro according to the nation. No real name, no biological family. It's almost making me think of human trafficking. Still, he's officially adoptable. Hitoshi and him both, that is. Aizawa walked inside of his 3-bedroom home and shut the sliding glass door behind him. The boys had been in his care for 3 years when they were both allowed to be up for adoption. Aizawa had no plans to adopt these 2 boys. Of course, he knew by not adopting he'd be shaking the boys to their core. After all, they've only known him and only liked him. Aizawa had an interview with some potential families that were willing to adopt both boys, and he was ready for his child-free life again. Just him and his cats. It'd be illogical for him to say that he wouldn't miss the boys. Of course he would. But it was best this way. His job was dangerous. Too dangerous to care for children. And then Izuku had been the first to call him dad. It was then did Aizawa realize his biggest mistake. Not only did he allow them to get attached to him, that was inevitable, but he became attached to them. It was at that very moment at the dinner table where Izuku had asked such a mundane question. Can you pass the salt, Dad? Did Aizawa realize, I can't give them up to someone else. I just can't. Once the adoption was complete, then came Aizawa's next step. Izuku's birthday. The kid couldn't remember it and Hitoshi didn't know it either. Aizawa tried to do the math, but just confused himself, and then it was Hisashi who had an actually smart idea for once. Just give them the same birthday. They're practically twins already. And that's how Aizawa got around that little snag fairly quickly. Besides, it made both boys happy to be able to tell people that they were twins. Aizawa was now focusing on training the boys. Hitoshi's quirk was powerful, but he wasn't best in hand-to-hand and Izuku's quirkless. Knowing hand-to-hand was the best option for both boys. It was a precaution that Aizawa was more than happy to fill. After all, those that originally took the boys may come back. Well, they could try anyway. Of course it wasn't perfect. No family was. Aizawa had butted heads with both boys on more than one occasion. Hitoshi came out of his bedroom. His hair was still wet from his shower, put up in a low ponytail hanging off of his shoulder. He had changed out of his training clothes and was wearing his gakurin. The collar of his shirt was crooked and Aizawa put the towel to the side so he could fix Hitoshi's collar. Behave today, Aizawa warned. If I get a call that you've been in another fight, I swear I'm taking away anything and everything that has a screen. I'll try. Hitoshi sighed. It's not my fault they asked for a fight. Aizawa held in a snort at that. Remember what I've told you, you don't start fights. You can finish them, but you don't start them. When picking middle schools for his boys, he had a few choices with where he was located. Aizawa had narrowed it down to 2. A private middle school or Aldera Middle School. Aldera was almost chosen, but he heard horror stories from disgruntled parents of quirkless kids and ultimately chose the private middle school for Izuku's sake. I know, Just one more year and me and Izuku won't have to worry about these assholes anymore. Language. Dad, do you think we'll get into UA? Hitoshi changed the subject on a dime. If you get into another fight, I'll make sure you don't. I'm being serious, as am I. Dad. Aizawa sighed, a small smile gracing his lips. You've got a whole year until the UA exams. I think as long as you and your brother keep training, there's a possibility. Aizawa told Hitoshi. Yeah, you're right. Hitoshi laughed a little with relief. As long as we keep training. That was when Izuku came down, his own hair wet from his quick shower. Izuku, cursed with a permanent baby face, looked akin to 10 and not 13. This, coupled with the fact that he was quirkless and adopted, seemed to have made him a bit of a target amongst his peers. Hence Hitoshi's reasoning for getting into so many fights. Izuku tried to just skirt past his father, but Aizawa, after knowing this kid for so long, instantly knew that Izuku was trying to hide something from him. Quickly he stopped Izuku by grabbing the back of his collar. Vocalizing a buzzer noise, Aizawa pulled Izuku back. What's in the backpack? Nothing. Aizawa was already unzipping the All Might backpack that Izuku had. Then you won't mind if I check? Thought so. Aizawa pulled out one of his capture scarves and resisted the urge to strangle Izuku with it. A capture weapon is still a weapon, Izuku. You know you can't bring this to school. Are you trying to get expelled? Aizawa huffed and put his scarf to the side. 10 laps around the backyard when you get home. 10. Do you want to make it 30? 10 is fine. Izuku quickly shut up. Good, it's 15 now. Izuku chewed on the inside of his cheek to keep from protesting. Aizawa looked at Hitoshi. Hitoshi looked at him before putting his hands up. I don't have one, I swear. Hitoshi told him before taking his bag off. Check if you must. Aizawa looked at the bag but didn't grab it. A few passing seconds went by before Aizawa waved Hitoshi off. I trust you. Now get out of here, both of you, before you become late. He ushered them out the door. Eventually, both of his boys left the house and Aizawa let out a sigh of annoyance. Children, I should have just stuck to the cats. Speaking of cats, it was time to feed them. All right, Spill. Why'd you take Dad's scarf, Zuchin? Hitoshi asked as the two of them walked along the sidewalk. Well, Dad said not to start fights, right? Yeah, well, the fight can't start if the instigator is restrained. Hitoshi gave a sudden laugh at this. Brilliant. Shame you got caught. Yeah, next time, maybe whoa. Izuku suddenly gasped before jogging ahead of Hitoshi. Did you see that, Hichin? It looks like a villain attack. He excitedly pointed up a little ways ahead of them towards a shopping district. It did in fact look like a battle of sorts had broken out. Zuchin, wait, don't run off. Hitoshi was swift to take off right behind his brother. As they ran, Izuku was already trying to fish his journal out along with a pen. I can't wait to add more to my journal. Just don't take forever like last time. 5 minutes, I promise. It's Kamui Woods. Izuku was bouncing on the balls of his feet as he stopped to observe. Hitoshi was next to him in a second. There, a safe enough distance away, was the commotion. There stood a huge villain. He easily towered above all as he roared out in anger. His head is similar to that of a shark's head in shape and size alone. Wow, that villain is giant. Izuku gushed as he was already riding at an insane speed, muttering the whole time to himself. Hitoshi watched him before looking back at the fight. Kamui Woods was using his quirk to try and restrain the villain, and Izuku was like a kid on Christmas Day. Hitoshi watched as his brother excitedly rode, as well as analyzed Kamui Woods, and Hitoshi smiled. I'm glad he can be himself. Hitoshi could watch Izuku gush about heroes all day. Izuku just looked so happy. 5 minutes came and Hitoshi looked at his watch for the time. 1 more minute won't hurt. Maybe today won't be so bad. Hitoshi thought that just too soon. He thought that after the first period, things seemed to be going well, they weren't late for school, and people seemed to be leaving them alone. Then, lunch happened. Both boys preferred to eat on the roof of school. Less populated, plus the view was nice. It had started normal enough. Both boys were eating their bentos that they had packed earlier that day. Izuku, being the fast eater he was, finished first and was now running his hands through Hitoshi's long hair in an attempt to braid it. Have you considered wearing it short? Izuku asked. Hitoshi twinged in pain as Izuku had hit a snag with his fingers as he took the hair tie out. Nah, not really. When it's short it has a mind of its own. At least while it's long I can control it with a hair tie. Izuku hummed. Hichoi could feel him separating a few locks of hair. Hitoshi brought some rice to his mouth and chewed before chuckling. I remember when Dad had to give you the hold still. Smack on the head when he'd try to do your hair. Please, he still gives me the hold still. Smack on the head. Now it's just not for doing my hair. God, I was such a little pain when he would try to do my hair. They could only both chuckle at the memory of Izuku whining while Aizawa tried to get his to cooperate. But to be fair to you, Dad really didn't know how to care for type 3A hair at the time. Remember the time you cried because you thought you looked like Ronald McDonald? Don't remind me. Izuku barked out a loud laugh at the memory. I just can't believe your hair is type 2A. Dad knew how to deal with that, even if it is fluffier than miso. Hitoshi dipped his head back so he could look at Izuku while smiling. You're just jealous. Izuku stuck his tongue out in retaliation. Maybe. So what if I am also? Izuku lightly swatted Hitoshi's head. Hold still. Oh, Brett. Hitoshi had a grin on his face as he moved and looked forward, allowing Izuku to continue his quest to braid Hitoshi's hair. There was a bit of silence between the two of them as Izuku focused solely on making the braid perfect. His tongue was even poking out of the corner of his mouth as he did so. Hitoshi focused on finishing up his meal all while trying to keep still. Hey, Hitchin, I've been wondering. There was a curiosity in Izuku's tone now as he started to slow down on his braiding. Yeah, do you think I have what it takes to get into UA? I mean, at least you have a quirk. I'm at a huge disadvantage. Huh? Hitoshi groaned as a familiar ear-piercing laugh grated his inner ears. Akisho Shin came stalking up to the two of them with his hands in his pockets. Akisho was the cause of all of Hitoshi's and Izuku's middle school problems. If he could vanish off the face of the earth, it would make Hitoshi so happy. Akisho was taller than Hitoshi. Akisho was at least a head taller than Hitoshi. He had frizzy wild burgundy-colored hair that reached his shoulders. It seriously looked like he never brushed his hair, ever. He wasn't exactly muscular, but he didn't need muscles. His quirk did most of his talking. Honestly, for Hitoshi, Akisho's quirk wasn't all that great, but was still powerful. All Akisho needed was touch, and he could make people move like they were his puppets with his own body. He likes to call himself the marionette. Maybe Hitoshi wasn't impressed because it was an inferior version of his own quirk. Or maybe it was because Akisho nearly killed Izuku by making him walk out in the middle of traffic one day. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the double standard. Hitoshi was ostracized for his quirk, and yet Akisho was borderline praised for how useful and cool his quirk was. It pissed Hitoshi off to no end, and Akisho knows it. You think you're getting into UA? Huh. I mean, I know their standards are pretty low given the teachers that work there, but I don't think they'll let some quirkless kid in. Watch your mouth, Akisho. Hitoshi stood abruptly and placed himself between Izuku and Akisho. Akisho smiled and then dragged his fingers across his lips, mimicking a zipper. He then looked from Hitoshi to Izuku. You want to make it with the big dogs, but you need your brother here to protect you at every turn. Do you think he's going to be there for you when you have to fight villains for the first time? No, he has to focus on himself, and face it, you'll just drag him down. Just like how you dragged down your original family. I mean, they hated you so much that they didn't even care that you were missing. How sad is that? Fuck off. Hitoshi grabbed Akisho's collar only briefly before pushing him to the ground. Don't you listen to him, Suchin. You can do it. Both Dad and I believe in you, and that's all you need. The damage had been done, unfortunately. Izuku quickly looked away from his brother and curled his knees to his chest. Akisho let out a laugh and he got to his feet. Look, he knows I'm right. I'm giving you one last chance to walk away, Akisho. I promised my dad I wouldn't get into a fight today. Don't make me break it. Hitoshi raised his fists up. There you go again, Hitoshi, running to Izuku's aid. Seriously, Izuku, you need to learn to fight your own battles and not have your brother dearest do it for you. It gets old and you'll get nowhere in life. Akisho then turned and walked away, leaving the two of them alone. Asshole. Hitoshi snarled at Akisho's retreating form. One day, I'll happily rub it in his face when we both become heroes. Hitoshi walked up to Izuku and squatted down next to him. Don't take what he says to heart, Zuchin. He's just an ass who doesn't know what he's saying. Izuku let out a sigh and quietly raked his fingers through his hair, stopping his hand at the back of his head so his hair was out of his eyes. But, he's right, Izuku whispered softly. No, he's not. He is, Hitchin. At least, he's right that you do tend to jump into battles that should be mine and mine alone. I appreciate it, I really do, but if I get into UA, I can't have you jumping in to fight for me. There's no if. You're getting in. Izuku's eyes flickered up to Hitoshi as Hitoshi brought his hand out for Izuku to take. Izuku did so. He had no clue how cold his hands were until he touched Hitoshi's warm hands. And, I do jump in a lot, but that's only because I want to make sure nothing happens to you. I don't know what I'd do if. Hitoshi frowned and scratched the back of his head. Izuku leaned in and wrapped Hitoshi into a tight hug. I know. Hitoshi ran his fingers through Izuku's curly hair before leaning in and nuzzling Izuku's soft hair with his nose. Still, let's try and dial it back, please. Not everybody is trying to kill me. Hitoshi sucked in a breath through his teeth. I'll try. Maybe he's right. Izuku muttered to himself as he walked down the street. School had just gotten out not too long ago, and Izuku wanted to go to the nearest gas station before going home. Usually, Hitoshi would join Izuku on his daily walk to the gas station, but Hitoshi had to stay behind for detention. It was a previous detention from earlier this week. Izuku actually wanted to stay behind, but Hitoshi waved him off, only asking one thing of Izuku. Get me a meat bun from the gas station? Maybe I should just give up on my dream. Izuku flipped through his journal, landing on a picture of his prototype hero costume. After all, Akisho makes a point. It was a mixture of his two favorite heroes, rabbit ears hood and a fake smile over his mouth, from All Might, and slotted goggles and a capture weapon like his dad. Obviously there was a bit more to it, but those were the basics and would keep his identity hidden, something his dad pressured into them. Izuku really wanted his own capture weapon. Maybe not a scarf. The scarf was too hard for him to properly control, something more akin to a rope or, if possible, have his sleeves be capture weapons, something he could control with only his arms. Still, Akisho's words kept echoing in Izuku's mind. Even if by some miracle Izuku got into UA, it wasn't exactly going to be an easy ride. If anything, it might even be worse if all these people with super strong quirks met him. Someone with no quirk. Remember, Izuku, you can. It was like Izuku was violently and suddenly stabbed in the back of the head. Dropping his journal to the ground, Izuku grasped at his hair as he collapsed to his knees. His breath hitched and nearly died in his throat. All he could hear was a violent ringing in his ears, and he gasped out and covered his eyes as the light outside almost seemed to intensify tenfold. As soon as the pain started, it was over just as quickly. Izuku kept his eyes squeezed shut for several seconds as he tried to level his breathing. What was that? Was the first coherent thought Izuku had after the ringing and pain had stopped. I heard a voice. Izuku blinked and slowly started to stand up. His arms were shaking and his legs felt oddly numb, but he was okay. Was I hit with a stray quirk? It almost seemed possible, but it felt like a memory. That voice. Izuku knew that voice. He didn't know who it belonged to, but he knew that voice from somewhere. I have to tell Dad. Izuku suddenly started to grin madly. If this was a memory, then maybe. Ugh. Gagging at a sudden wretched smell that invaded every pore in his nose, Izuku covered his mouth. He had then turned around, ready to sprint back home and announce to his dad that he just had a memory. It was just a voice and nothing visual, but it was still something. But his happiness was short-lived. The moment he turned, he realized he wasn't exactly alone. There stood a villain that seemed to be made entirely of pollution condensed into sludge had rounded the corner, and Izuku realized his sudden predicament. He was under an overpass and basically alone. Izuku's heart rate quickened. His body is made entirely of sludge. What fighting knowledge I know will be useless. My hands will just sink into his body. If you're ever in a situation where you fear for your life and you can't fight, the best thing you can do is scream. Scream for help, that you're being attacked. Do not scream fire. It won't work, and I hate that they teach that in school. His father's voice came to his mind. Well, what have I got here? A perfect little vessel. The sludge villain suddenly rushed for Izuku at an alarming speed. Izuku opened his mouth, prepared to scream his lungs out for anybody to hear. But that's where he made his fatal mistake. Before Izuku knew it, he couldn't speak. He couldn't even breathe as the villain violated his mouth and was trying to squeeze his body down Izuku's throat. Izuku was up in the air, his limbs useless as the villain had him in a tight grip just a few feet off of the ground. The villain's sludge wrapped around his entire body, as his sludge inched deeper and deeper down Izuku's throat. Help! Help! I can't breathe. Hitchin! Dad! Someone! Izuku's mind went blank with panic as he tried to claw at the villain, but his meek attack did little to the monster made of sludge and pollution. Time was slowing down, his vision was starting to darken, and he realized that he was dying. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I want to be a hero like All Might, like my dad. The villain was talking to him, but Izuku couldn't hear him over his own moral panic. His lungs screamed in protest over the lack of oxygen, and his clawing became weaker and weaker as he pitifully kicked his legs. Dad, Hitchin, I'm sorry, was the last thought he had before he passed out. Though, before he fully passed out, Izuku was sure he heard a noise. It sounded like clattering, like something heavy and made of metal hit the ground. This move could be useful to the two of you, so I need the both of you to focus. Aizawa snapped his fingers, gaining both boys' attention. Izuku, you first. Izuku smiled and eagerly ran up so he was in front of his father. Okay, arms up like you're ready to attack. Aizawa ordered, and Izuku did just that. He raised his arms like he was prepared for a fight. Good. And now, his father paused before pulling a small butter knife out of somewhere on his person. Have a knife. What? Are you gonna spread butter on Zuchin's forehead? Hitchin couldn't help but snigger. He quickly ate his words as with a well-placed flick of his wrist, Aizawa threw the knife, and it stuck to the tree just a few inches from Hitoshi's head. Hitoshi's eyes darted from the butter knife to their father. It's still a knife, jackass. Now, toss it back, Aizawa demanded. Hitoshi did so without much complaint. Okay, Aizawa held the butter knife up once more. I have a knife. Wah. Izuku had no time to react as Aizawa suddenly grabbed him by the collar and pulled him in close, the tip of the butter knife against his neck. It was now Izuku realized why his father had chosen a butter knife as his weapon of choice. And I want everything you have. Your bag, phone, and money. Now, all of it. How do you defend yourself? Izuku was close to his father, uncomfortably so. I can't try and sweep his leg out. It'll bring the both of us down and leave me potentially open for an attack. So, I should try and hit him in the face. So, Izuku went for an uppercut. Aizawa seemed to sense this and he nodded, when Izuku mimicked an uppercut, lightly placing his closed fist on the bottom of Aizawa's jaw. Uppercut, not bad, but let me tell you the truth. You're going to be punching my jaw with your knuckles. That's going to split your knuckles open and possibly even break a bone or two in your hand. Aizawa explained, and he lowered the butter knife from Izuku's neck. So, today, I'm going to show you another form of attack. The palm strike. The palm strike is less likely to hurt your hands or break your bones, and it'll daze your opponent, giving you the opportunity to get away. Aizawa then looked at Izuku. Are you okay? Izuku blinked in surprise before nodding. I'm fine, Dad. Wake up. Dad. Fanboy. Hey, fanboy, you okay down there? Izuku opened his eyes to someone standing over him, lightly hitting his face. His training took over before his logic did. Izuku used his open palm to strike under the man's chin. The man let out a gag of surprise as a small spray of blood left his mouth. Oh, Jesus! Izuku cried out, and he jumped in surprise as he tried to scramble back away from the stranger. Then, Izuku realized just who he had struck. All Might. He struck the #1 hero in the world, directly in the face. The scream that left Izuku's mouth was so high-pitched that it could have mimicked a bird's call. Izuku clambered around, so he was bowing on his hands and knees in front of All Might. Forgive me, I was startled. Woof. All Might gave his head a good shake, a small bruise resting under his chin now. Now that woke me up. That was a good hit. Are you all right there, fanboy? Izuku looked up cautiously. You're not mad? Of course not, my boy. I'd say that's a pretty normal reaction after being attacked by a villain. Attacked by the sludge villain. Horror must have etched itself across Izuku's face because All Might suddenly let out a booming laugh and clapped Izuku on the shoulder. Not to worry, my boy. He's not going anywhere. All Might pulled a soda bottle out of his cargo pants pocket. See, inside of said bottle was the villain. The villain and Izuku locked eyes, and Izuku could hear the villain shouting through the bottle, though it was heavily muffled. Izuku then smiled with relief. That does make me feel better. Thank you, All Might. Izuku bowed in respect. If it's not too much, do you think I could get an autograph? My brother will flip when he learns I got to meet you and my dad. Izuku's smile suddenly slipped as he stood up in alarm. My dad is going to flip, he whispered in shock. What am I going to tell Dad? That I let my guard down and got attacked by a villain and nearly died. Yeah, that'll go over well. Maybe I don't have what it takes to be a hero after all, and Dad'll see it just as well. It seemed All Might didn't hear the last part. Already have. Just check your notebook. Well, this has been fun, but I should really take this guy to the police station. Maybe All Might. No, don't bother the man any more than you already have. Just one more question before he leaves. Oh no. Izuku, having been stuck in his head for too long, saw All Might getting ready to leap off into the air. Stop him. Wait, I have. Until next time. Izuku had no memory of what happened next. 1 minute he was on the ground rushing towards All Might, and then the next, he was in the air, clinging to All Might's leg like a toddler as the wind whipped at his face. Oh God, if his father heard of this, Izuku would be grounded till college. It took a painstakingly long time for All Might to even notice Izuku. What? I just have a question. I'm sorry. Izuku cried over the winds that whipped his face back at disgusting speed. All right, fanboy, just hang on. All Might seemed to sigh in annoyance at this as he planted one of his big hands on Izuku's head, most likely just to keep Izuku still and to make sure he doesn't go flying off by accident. It didn't take All Might long to find a suitable place to land, up on top of a large building. The moment they landed, Izuku fell to his butt inside out as he looked at the sky. Now, I've seen some reckless things in my day, but I have to say that was one of the most, if not the most reckless thing I've ever had the displeasure of witnessing. What if I hadn't noticed you? What if you had slipped? Getting scolded was never fun. It was doubly so when it was your own personal and favorite hero doing the scolding. I'm sorry. Izuku quickly scrambled, so he was once again bowing an apology to All Might. I know it was a stupid thing to do, but I just wanted to ask you a question and I didn't think I'd ever have this opportunity again. All Might, clearly in a hurry, cut Izuku off. I'm sorry, kid, but I can't answer any more questions you have. I have to go. He looked ready to take off again. And honestly, Izuku knew he deserved it, but damn it, he wasn't satisfied with that. He needed an answer. Please, I'm quirkless. I just need to know if I have what it takes to be a hero. To be like you. Is it possible? You're quirkless. All Might paused before he could leap away. Izuku swallowed hard. My dad and my twin both believe in me, and that's great. I couldn't be happier. But they both have quirks and they couldn't understand what it's like to be fully quirkless. Is All Might smoking? Izuku thought as he looked at All Might fully. Smoke levitated off of All Might's body like he was on fire from the inside out. That was the only thought he could have before All Might poofed into a cloud of white smoke. Another scream ripped through Izuku's throat as a different man now stood in front of him. This man was a stick, a walking skeleton, a ghoul, complete with sunken and black eyes. This man was the complete opposite of All Might in every way, shape, and form. Then he coughed and Izuku screamed again as a spray of blood left All Might's mouth. Who are you? What did you do to All Might? Oh God, did I get kidnapped? Dad's going to kill me. Calm down. All Might continued to cough until eventually his fit died down. And keep quiet. Do you want the world to hear you? He lightly hissed at Izuku. I don't understand. Izuku whispered in shock. There's no way you can be the real All Might. No way. I am All Might. The man sighed out, and in doing so even more blood seemed to pour out of his open mouth. Once again Izuku couldn't help but scream. Only now he was screaming because of how much blood All Might was losing by the second. But how can you be All Might? All Might is big and buff and you. Izuku gestured to the twig of a man before trailing off. Well, never mind. A low and loud sigh left All Might's mouth as he ran his fingers through his hair. Okay, you know how at the beach guys suck in their gut and try to buff up to impress the ladies? That's what I'm doing. Hey, Izuku honestly couldn't believe what he was hearing right now. All Might was just faking it, buffing himself up to look more intimidating. Izuku's mind was currently short-circuiting, and the only thing he could think to say at that moment was, but how? Why? A loud sigh escaped All Might's mouth as he crouched down. I guess there's no harm in showing you now. And with that declaration All Might lifted his shirt up and Izuku saw it. The wound that made Izuku's stomach churn. It stretched from All Might's stomach and webbed its way up to his torso with dull red scars. Pretty bad, right? It's much worse than it looks. All Might told him. I got into a fight 5 years ago that destroyed most of my respiratory organs and decimated my stomach. Because of it, I can only be a hero for 3 hours a day. Izuku's mind reeled as he tried to think back to the battles All Might had been in 5 years ago. 5 years. Toxic Chainsaw. Was it him? Wow, you really know your stuff, kid, but no. This never made the news. All Might finally lowered his shirt and gave his head a soft shake. You asked me if you could be a hero while quirkless. It's great that your dad and twin have faith in you, but it's a dangerous world out there, kid. To not have a quirk would leave you at a huge disadvantage and almost defenseless against those with quirks. All Might told him. You could always go into police work, although with heroes around, the police often get the short end of the stick when it comes to any hero work. Izuku sighed softly and looked down at his red shoes. That being said, although it's not realistic, that doesn't mean your dream isn't unreachable. Izuku never perked up faster at All Might's words. All Might scratched his face. It's really not my place to tell you if you have what it takes to be a hero or not because of your quirklessness. You seem bright. All Might put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. And smart to boot. Your future should be up to you. No one else. You never know if you don't try. Izuku almost wanted to cry. Granted, it wasn't exactly a yes, but it wasn't a no either. You'll have to crawl your way through hell and back, and work 10 times harder than any of your peers. Do you think you can commit to that? Izuku didn't even need to think about it. Of course, I'm willing to do anything to reach my goal of being a hero. Then, there's your answer. There was a little more mirth in All Might's smile now as he suddenly put his hand on Izuku's head and gave his curls a small ruffle. Izuku was practically vibrating because All Might was ruffling his hair. Now, I should get going. All Might ran his fingers through his own hair now. I trust you can make your way back home fine. Yes, good. In a rush, All Might was gone, down the emergency stairs of the building. Finally, Izuku's legs gave out and he collapsed onto his back to look up at the sky. Did that really just happen? He thought as he watched a cloud lazily move in the sky. It wasn't a yes or a no. It should be up to me. All Might's words were repeating in Izuku's head on loop over and over again. An explosion suddenly sounded through the air. And it made Izuku jump up to his feet. What the hell? He whispered in shock as he looked towards the noise. It looked like it was coming from the shopping district just a few blocks away. You did a good thing, Yagi. You didn't crush a kid's impossible dream. Toshinori slowly shut the door behind him. Now on the bottom level and on the outside, Toshinori just wanted to put this whole thing behind him. Really, even though a part of him felt bad. He was basically lying to that kid and to himself by default. He knows what it's like to be quirkless more than anybody, and he knows that being quirkless back then was different in today's standards. Izuku wouldn't stand a chance out there. It was the cold hard truth. Still, Toshinori just couldn't bring himself to destroy the boy's dream. A small cough left Toshinori's mouth followed by a small spray of blood. All right, Toshinori reached down for the soda bottle that should have been in his pocket, but he felt nothing but air. Fear gripped him like an ice-cold vise as he looked down at his pants. Oh no, he could only gasp out. The bottle wasn't there. The villain escaped. Off in the distance it sounded like an explosion went off. 3 missed calls from You're My Dad. Uggy Wuggy. 4 missed calls from Hypno. 1 missed call from Uncle Cockatoo. 1 missed call from Auntie Midnight. Izuku was trembling as he looked at his phone in his hands. He was walking down the street, wanting to go home. His phone had been on silent the whole time. And because he was beyond late, everyone was rightfully worried about him. He was in the middle of debating if he should call Dad or Hitchin first when an explosion sounded off not too far away from him. Oh man, did I accidentally walk towards the fight? I shouldn't. Izuku looked up at the smoke that wasn't too far away from him. The smell was almost sickening as it invaded the inside of his throat and nostrils. Still, Izuku moved to get a better view of the fight for himself. I'm already late and daddle ... kill ... me. Izuku's mind slowed to a crawl as he got into view of the fight. Kamui Woods was holding back the crowd with a web of wood that crisscrossed in every direction. Please stay back, Kamui called to the crowd in desperation. Izuku's heart absolutely sank once he saw everything. The sludge villain was in the center of the shopping plaza. The sludge was wrapped around a new victim. Whoever this victim of his was seemed to have some sort of fire quirk, as fire would burst out of the palms of his hands. No. An explosion quirk. This quirk was a dangerous one. Remember what Dad said. No such thing as a dangerous quirk. Just dangerous people, Izuku reminded himself. Regardless of if this person was dangerous or not, his quirk was the reason for the fire, and the reason why no hero could help in this situation. The area that the villain chose to attack was just small enough to where Mount Lady couldn't squeeze herself in. Because of the fires, Kamui Woods couldn't jump in and help the victim, and the other heroes were busy keeping the crowd back as well as putting out the fires. I don't understand. All Might had him trapped away in a bottle. Izuku couldn't stop his gasp of shock once he realized. He caused the sludge villain to fall out of All Might's pant pocket when he clung onto the hero's leg. This was all his doing. Izuku dropped his phone just as it lit up, indicating that someone was calling him. His hands went over his mouth in shock. You caused this. This is your fault. How can you be so damn stupid? Izuku could only stare in shock at the pure chaos in front of him. It was a bad situation that was only getting worse as the seconds ticked by. The poor person caught up in the villain. Izuku saw a glimpse of red eyes and blonde hair, and the next thing he knew he was running. What am I doing? Kid, stop. Kamui Woods yelled and tried to grab Izuku, but Izuku was too fast for him. He ducked under Kamui's makeshift barrier and booked it for the sludge villain at full speed. Why am I? Because I just can't let that kid die. He's just a kid. Like me. Izuku realized his motivation, but yet, in the back of his mind, Izuku could hear it. The voice. A mocking childlike voice that was gruff and full of contempt and borderline hatred. Izuku couldn't focus on the little voice in the back of his mind as he realized that this person couldn't breathe as sludge was oozing down his throat. Izuku would know that firsthand. The first thing he did as he ran was rip his backpack off of his shoulder, and he swung it at the villain, all while screaming himself hoarse. You again. The sludge villain let out a shriek of pain as a book from Izuku's backpack struck him right in the eye. The villain's body seemed to move as he tried to rub at his hurt eye. This allowed the teenager to rip his face free from the sludge. He let out a weak wheezing cough, spitting up sludge and slime from his face. The weak spot. Remember what Dad taught you. A villain is only as strong as his weak point. Izuku cocked his arm back and curled his hand into a fist. And he has not one but two of them. Izuku then threw his punch. He struck the sludge villain directly in his second eye. It was a soft, spongy feeling. What? Izuku heard the teen whisper so softly that it was almost inaudible with the chaos going on around them. Izuku never got a chance to look at the teenager or even talk to him. You absolute bastard. Suddenly his arm was grabbed by sludge, and before Izuku knew it, he was trapped in the disgusting oozing fluid, and the villain was lifting him off of the ground. I'll make you pay for that. It seemed the villain was able to move his eyes all around his sludge-like body, but Izuku wasn't dumb. The villain couldn't see them if he had moved his eyes behind his body, so his eyes had to be somewhere where he would be able to see both of them. And Izuku was able to find just where one of the villain's eyes were. It was peering at Izuku at the bottom of the villain's body. Weak point. It was right in the perfect kicking range for Izuku. He sprang his leg back and kicked as hard as he possibly could. He knew it did more than just hurt by the scream the villain gave, but this also came with a price on Izuku's end. The villain decided to just toss Izuku away like he was nothing but trash. It was a harsh toss that sent Izuku flying away from the action. Honestly, Izuku was lucky he didn't hit a patch of fire as he rolled to a stop near an alleyway. Ouch! Izuku's mind spun for a moment as he slowly sat up on his arms. His vision was slightly blurry, but with a quick shake of his head he was able to correct it. When he managed to get a good look at what was happening, he saw All Might, the actual All Might, buffed up in front of the villain. And that was only for a second before Izuku went flying for the second time in under 30 seconds. This gust of wind was so intense and so insane that it sent Izuku into the alleyway, and he kept on flying back farther and farther. Izuku gasped and cried out as he hit the ground more times than he'd like to count. He was desperately seeking something, anything to anchor him to the ground. Eventually, he found it, a fire exit staircase hanging on a building. Izuku had to hold onto the staircase for dear life for several long agonizing seconds until finally the insane wind died down. Izuku then hung there like a rag doll, his trembling hands clasped tightly around the bottom rail of the staircase as his legs limply dangled in the air. Holy shit, was the only coherent thought in Izuku's head. Then it started to sprinkle. Rain wasn't predicted for today. Izuku looked up at the sky in slight bewilderment. Wait a minute. Did All Might change the weather? with just a punch. Izuku blinked a little in shock before he just sighed. Incredible. Critically injured and he can still do amazing things, he whispered to himself before he finally let go of the railing of the stairway. The drop wasn't far, but it didn't exactly feel great on his ankles either. Izuku was tired, beyond tired. He just wanted to go home in all honesty, put this day behind him and focus on training for UA. He blinked at a weight in his hand and saw he had his phone. Odd. I thought I dropped this, Izuku thought before shrugging. Weird day. He chalked it up to that and that alone. He shoved his phone into his back pocket and walked up to the edge of the alleyway. As much as he wanted to go home, he needed his backpack and school supplies. His dad, though an understanding man, would not understand this, especially if he learned that Izuku actively put himself in danger. While the other heroes worked on cleaning up the scene, a couple even praising the blonde teenager for being brave during the whole attack, and All Might was busy talking to the press. Izuku watched them for a few moments. He knew if he walked out into the fray he'd probably get scolded or worse asked questions by the press, so he decided to just stay put, hidden away in the alley. Though, he realized his little hiding place wasn't as hidden as he thought, as at one point he and All Might locked eyes with one another. Izuku begged him to keep quiet by putting his fingers to his lips. All Might seemed to be understanding this as he looked away. It was then did Izuku decide to finally call his family back. He had a feeling he had time to spare with all the heroes working to clean up the place. So, he got himself situated on a rocky and unstable milk crate hidden away against the wall of the alleyway. He flipped over the milk crate and sat down before calling his father. It rang once before. Where the hell are you? His father's voice was flat as usual, but there was an underlying tone of anger deep in his voice that told Izuku he was in deep trouble. I'm sorry, Dad, Izuku whispered and shifted himself on the milk crate. Izuku, you should have been home hours ago. This is beyond I'm sorry. This is unacceptable. You had me worried, Hitoshi worried, Hizashi and Nimari just as well. I'm practically out the door ready to look for you. I know. I kind of got mixed up with a villain. There was silence on the other end of the phone. It lasted 2 seconds. 3, 4. Tell me where you are. Now, Dad. Now, Izuku. So, Izuku told him where he was. I'm sticking close to the alleyway. I just need to get my bag. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't you dare move. Aizawa hung up after that and Izuku felt a dread creep and settle into his stomach. I'm so dead. The excitement of the battle started to die down shortly after Izuku's phone call, and when the coast seemed to be clear, Izuku got up from his hiding spot. His legs ached and his arms felt oddly heavy. Still, he started to collect his things and put them away in his bag. He was maybe 30 seconds into this when suddenly a hand started to help him collect his scattered papers. Izuku looked up in alarm, but he relaxed a little when he saw it was All Might, but in his smaller form, not his buffed up one. Small Might. Makes it easier for me anyways. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered as he tapped a few papers on the ground to get them straight again. I don't know why I did what I did, he continued to whisper. As you should be. You're a bit of a troublemaker it seems. But in all reality, I also owe you an apology, Small Might told him with a grunt. Izuku stopped collecting his papers and looked up. Why would you need to apologize? Small Might handed Izuku some papers and he happily took them. Because, even though I told you it was up to you to be a hero, I didn't fully believe you had what it takes, and today, you proved to me that you do have what it takes. Izuku, you are a hero today. At least to me. A lump formed into Izuku's throat as he dropped his papers to the ground. Tears started to well into the corners of his eyes, and before he knew it he was weeping. He wasn't sobbing, just weeping. But these were weeps of happiness. I'm sorry. Izuku sucked in a loud and shaky breath. That's all I really ever wanted to hear. A small hiccup left his mouth as his weeping was threatening to turn into sobbing. And I promise. Sir, I promise you, I'm going to try and be the best hero I can be. I know you will. Because if you'll allow me, young Izuku, I want to train you. Izuku felt like he could start crying all over again as he slowly looked at All Might with wide and wet eyes. I can't explain everything here. There are too many people that could possibly overhear us. Small Might dropped his voice to a whisper so small that Izuku almost couldn't hear him. Izuku wiped his unshed tears away from his eyes as he leaned in. Can I get your phone number? I have questions about your life that I need to know in order for this to work. Izuku didn't need to think twice about it. Fishing a pen out of his bag, he scribbled his phone number down on a piece of scrap paper and handed it to Small Might. However, this moment between them didn't last when Izuku's spidey sense seemed to kick in and he lifted his head up. Off in the distance, he saw his father looking over the sea of people clearly trying to locate him. My dad is here. I have to go. If I don't respond, I might be grounded. Or dead. Small Might's face twisted in horror and Izuku quickly corrected himself. I shouldn't say that. He's a loving dad really, he is, but I need to get going. Izuku's voice was quick and hurried as collected the rest of his things and haphazardly shoved them in his bag. Oh, real quick. I go to Kaise Middle School. Izuku really wasn't sure if Small Might heard him or not, but he didn't have time to repeat himself as he waved his father down. "Dad, I'm over here. You charged at a villain. Have you lost your mind?" As much as Izuku wanted to lie to his father, he couldn't. At least, he couldn't lie about what he did as he tried to save the other teenager. He kept most of the All Might stuff a secret, save for All Might saving him the first and second time. Izuku kept his head ducked down as his father paced up and down in front of him. They were back home now in the kitchen. Hitoshi was immediately sent to his room just for the sheer fact that he may try to intervene or worse, add to the berating. Izuku eyed Tora sitting on the countertop and he went to pet the cat in an attempt to soothe his nerves. "Don't touch the cat, focus on me," Aizawa practically hissed as he continued to pace. "Just what were you thinking, Izuku?" Izuku brought his hand to his side. "I wasn't thinking. That's apparent. I saw the guy being held hostage and, Dad, he was just another teenager. He couldn't be older than me. I don't know, my feet moved before my mind did. I know what I did was stupid and I know what I did was beyond reckless. But I was the one that allowed that boy to breathe again when the heroes couldn't. So, that's why you did what you did. To gain fame because you know I do not approve. Of course I didn't do it because of fame." Izuku knew he was probably going to regret raising his voice at his father, but he couldn't help it. He started to get a little heated, so much so that his face was flushing and his heart was skipping a beat. "I did it because the heroes couldn't do anything to help that boy. He was drowning in sludge. I wasn't about to watch someone die when I could do something to help him. I didn't even know the guy. Dad, are you going to stand there and tell me you would have let him die if you were in my shoes?" This time it was Aizawa who seemed to flush a little. "Do not twist this around on me, Izuku. And if I were there, of course I would have helped the boy. But there's a difference between you and me." "What? That you have a quirk?" Aizawa stopped his pacing, and in a sudden displacement of a lost temper he slammed his fist on the countertop with such a harsh thump that it not only caused the countertop to vibrate but also caused Tora to take off running. His eyes flashed a ferocious red and his hair rose to the air. "Know that I'm a fucking pro hero. It's my job to save people, and you need to remember something important here and now. You are a child. This has nothing to do with your lack of a quirk. You aren't a pro, far from it. I understand you want to save people. Hell, Izuku, I even commend you for it because so few people actually want that these days. But what you did wasn't even reckless. It was so stupid. If you would have died because you charged into a fight that wasn't even yours to start with, did you even think of me? Or Hitoshi?" Aizawa's eyes returned to normal and his hair lowered around his face. His father put his hand on Izuku's shoulder and leaned down so they were now eye to eye. He then lowered his voice. "Don't you think your brother lost enough people in his lifetime?" Izuku sniffled and raised a hand to wipe his tears away as he did think about it. Hitoshi learning the news that he had died from the sludge villain and is now alone with only their father. How Hitoshi would probably have even more nightmares now. No one he could crawl into bed with when the nightmares got too much. It just filled Izuku with so much guilt that it caused him to lightly cry. Yet, Izuku didn't regret helping that boy from the sludge villain. He only regretted the idea of leaving Hitchin behind. Izuku sniffled lightly and wiped his tears away with the palm of his hand. Aizawa sighed. "Just go to your room. We'll discuss punishment later." Izuku went to his room as requested, but he snatched up Miso on his way. The calico mewed when he did this. Izuku shut his door, threw his stuff on his floor and plopped onto his bed with Miso on his chest. Seeming to understand that he was upset, Miso stayed in place and rubbed her head against his face while purring. Izuku quietly scratched under Miso's chin for a while as he lay there lost in his thoughts. His thoughts were everywhere while he tried to decompress from the day's event. His thoughts would be of the boy he had helped save. How the boy looked just slightly familiar to Izuku, but he couldn't figure out why. Then they would shift to the sludge villain. The feeling of the thick sludge that would coat the inside of his throat still lingered, and it made him gag every now and again. Then his memories would go to All Might and the injury. It was a lot and he couldn't even focus on one thought for too long. Eventually, Izuku dozed off. His body needed the rest after such a day and experience. He only woke up slightly to the sound of someone opening his door, probably to let Miso out. He heard a sigh before his father came in. Izuku continued to lay there and try to go back to sleep, hoping his father hadn't picked up that he had awoken. Aizawa quietly bent down and started to untie Izuku's shoes. In a few seconds he had the shoes off of his feet and down on the floor below. "What am I going to do with you?" His father then left shortly after that. It wasn't too long after that when his door opened again and he felt a weight on the edge of his bed, and before he knew it, Izuku was wrapped up into the loving arms of his brother. Hitoshi mumbled slightly as he nuzzled against the crook of Izuku's neck. "Please don't do something like that again, Zachin," Hitoshi whispered. Izuku mumbled his reply, but he really wasn't sure what he had said in response to his brother's request. Still, Izuku wrapped his arms around Hitoshi and nuzzled against his brother's chest. Izuku wished he could say it was one of the better sleeps he had, but that would be lying. He kept waking up with the fear that something was creeping, oozing down his windpipe in hopes of taking his body over, even with Hitchin holding him tight. Those dreams and those feelings refused to leave him alone. You want to go jogging after school? His father inquired, an eyebrow raised up to meet his hairline. I want to be faster. I don't want a repeat of the sludge fill-in. Aizawa shut his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest, clearly thinking it over. It took about 30 seconds before he got an answer. Fine, but give me your phone first. Izuku chewed on the inside of his cheek and did as instructed. His father opened it with ease before tapping on it a few times. I also don't want a repeat of the sludge fill-in, Aizawa commented. And because I love you, and until I can trust you properly, you now have a tracker app on your phone. This'll tell me your location if I need it. On a small bench at the local park, Toshinori was asking questions about Izuku's home life, his diet, and his father. These were all things Toshinori needed to know in order to help train Izuku to be in his top shape. Toshinori was quietly typing on his phone after each and every question. Toshinori was frowning as Izuku informed him of what his dad had done. I wanted to fight it, but my dad is stubborn and smart to boot. He would have known something was up. I see. It's not the end of the world. It seems he's just paranoid, which is good in today's world, All Might muttered. Which brings me to my next question, one I've been suspecting for a while now. Is your dad a pro hero? Yes, Izuku beamed. But he's underground, so you probably might not have heard of him. I thought as much. That explains things. And you said he trains you in the mornings. What kind of training? He teaches us basic self-defense, some martial arts, and sometimes he teaches us how to use binding cloths, though I'm not the best at it yet. Binding cloths? Heh, reminds me of someone I know. Toshinori chuckled. But I'm like 90% sure he's child-free. Oh, Izuku snapped his fingers. Dad also has us enrolled in acrobatics. He wants us to be as flexible as we can be by the end of the year. It's something he was self-taught in. So, there's that as well. Toshinori couldn't help but whistle. An underground hero and one hell of a teacher by the sounds of it. He wrote it down on his phone. Now, your diet. Oh, Dad makes sure we get all the major food groups. He makes sure our diet is pretty healthy and not too many fatty or sweet things. He wants us to be in our top form. I expected as much. Still, I want you to write down what you eat in a day so I can gauge what may or may not need to be tweaked. Izuku nodded. Understood. All right, I think that's all for now. Thank you, young. What is your last name? Izuku bit the inside of his cheek again. He hesitated. Tora. Izuku Tora. And why do I feel like that's not right? It's, well, you can guess. Izuku tapped his two index fingers together. Your dad. Izuku nodded. It's on all official school work papers, but it's not my official last name. He's scared, you see. Izuku never thought he'd ever describe his dad as scared before, but it was the best word for this situation. Aizawa was scared. He was scared of someone recognizing his name and going after his boys. So, he pulled strings. Legally, Izuku and Hitoshi had Aizawa's last name, but on paper at school and other functions needed for it, it was changed to Tora. Tora. Aizawa named them after his cat. What's interesting is that Hitoshi didn't need to have his last name changed. Hell, he could have hyphenated it, but he didn't want his last name anymore. His last name was just a reminder of what he lost. Those were Hitoshi's exact words on the subject. Very well. I won't push it. Tora it is. Izuku Tora has a nice ring to it anyways. Izuku couldn't help but beam again. All right, that should do it. Remember, text me a list of what you eat in a day. That does remind me. How is that you still have your phone? I figured it would have been confiscated. Dad gave me a choice. Either he takes away all electronics for 3 months or I run around the yard until I collapse. How low? 4 hours. Not counting how many times I stop to catch my breath or drink some water. Wow, impressive. Thank you. Anyways, I should get going now. Likewise. See you soon. Izuku waved Toshinori goodbye before standing up and stretching his body. He was in athletic wear, and after stretching his upper body, Izuku quickly did some high knee steps before taking off in a jog. He wasn't lying to his dad. Even though he was training with all might, Izuku also wanted to be faster and better. He had to be. Once Izuku gave Toshinori all he ate in a day and finished up some more questions, their training and his diet was underway. Because of Izuku's schedule, and because of the fact that his father trains him and his brother in the morning, Toshinori had Izuku after school. Izuku was a little confused when Toshinori brought them to Takoba Beach, a beach that was once beautiful but now littered with trash and pollution. I trust your father's training and flexibility and speed. My training will be focusing more on muscle. You're going to need as much muscle as you can get, young Tora. And trust me, the combination of muscle and flexibility will come in handy as a hero. I'm ready, Izuku declared loudly and proudly. Great, you are going to clean the beach. Hey, yes. In a puff of smoke All Might appeared, and it was almost like he was an entirely new person. You see, this rotting pile of trash. This is going to work out all of your major muscle groups in the upcoming months. Oh, I see. Izuku looked at all the abandoned appliances, trash, and items surrounding them. He felt a little overwhelmed by it. Who throws a refrigerator on a beach? Still, his dad didn't raise a quitter. Very well. Izuku rolled his shoulder blade in its socket. Tell me where to start. And thus, their training began and Izuku's life somehow got more chaotic in the process. It was 3 months into training when the first and most noticeable chaotic thing happened to Izuku. It was when a new kid transferred to their school. Izuku was really only half paying attention when this kid was introduced by the teacher. Really, Izuku was focusing on his grip strength under the table. It wasn't until the kid spoke did it gain Izuku's attention. Yo, the name is Denki Kaminari. But you guys can just call me Kaminari, that's how things work here. Right. Izuku whipped his head up at the loud voice of this newcomer. Kaminari stood there suddenly looking very unsure of himself. His hair was blonde, cut short, with a black lightning streak through the right of his bangs. His eyes bore the same yellow electric blonde that his hair did. It gave Izuku a sort of Pikachu vibe, but in a good way, a cute way. He had an accent, and when Izuku thought about it, it clicked. He's American. A couple of students snickered at Kaminari as he awkwardly scratched at his face in embarrassment. Well, not exactly a bright one is he. Akisho laughed a snotty laugh that made Izuku's nose scrunch. Kaminari winced at this and continued to scratch at the side of his face. Yes, that's how things work here. It was Hitoshi that came to Kaminari's aid, all while shooting a glare Akisho's way. And don't let Fuckmouth over there get the better of you. All he does is run his stupid mouth. Hitoshi Tora. The teacher snarled almost immediately. UI office, just go. I am not putting up with you and your attitude today. In a bout of frustration, the teacher pointed towards the door. Izuku rubbed his tongue against the inside of his cheek. What the hell, Hitoshi? Since when do you speak up for the new guy? Izuku inquired in his head as he watched his brother leave. Hitoshi never bothers with new kids, nor does Izuku to some extent. Mainly because the new kids want nothing to do with Izuku, him being quirkless and all, but Hitoshi was another story. Hitoshi just never liked the idea of making friends. It was easier for him to be friends with Izuku than to have someone else to worry about. So, for Hitoshi to stick up for someone else was different. It actually left Izuku a little stunned in all reality. What about you? Thing number 2. Have any smart comments? The teacher snapped in Izuku's direction. Izuku just quietly shook his head and went back to taking notes. He would have to talk to Hitoshi later. Good. Kaminari, you may take your seat now. Class continued on as normal after that. Izuku quietly mumbled under his breath as he wrote down his notes. This was much to the annoyance of his nearby classmates. He silently used the grip strength, occasionally switching hands every now and again. Thank goodness, he was ambidextrous. Finally, class ended for lunch and Izuku immediately packed up and grabbed his bento. He knew he'd be alone now that Hitoshi was, most likely, serving lunch detention for his little outburst, but that was fine. It gave Izuku more time to focus on training and what he needed to improve. He was going to move that fridge on the beach if it was the last thing he did. So, up to the rooftop Izuku went. Izuku was now following All Might's diet plan, just more on the meats and less on the carb-heavy stuff. Quietly, Izuku opened his bento once he was seated on the rooftop. It was so quiet, serene, and Izuku soaked up the quietness to the best of his abilities. It would be one of the few moments he would get. Hey, you're a rooftop kid too. And it was gone. Izuku looked over his shoulder at Kaminari. Yeah, I guess. Izuku answered politely as Kaminari came up and simply plopped down next to him. Izuku tilted his head at this before he lifted his bento up and started to eat. So, I was told that you and that purple-haired kid are, brothers, Hitoshi. And yes, we're twins actually. Kaminari's eyes lit up. No way. I've always wanted a twin. Izuku chuckled before taking another bite of his food. He chewed and then swallowed. I can't help but notice your accent. Are you from America? Ah, you picked up on that, did you? Kaminari rubbed the back of his head with an awkward lopsided smile plastered on his face. Yep, well, I'm half. My dad is American. I was living with him in America while my mom stayed in Japan. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah, they do not like each other. Kaminari then laughed. But that's fine. Fine. Izuku just simply took in another bite of food while Kaminari continued to speak. I was actually supposed to stay in America, you know. But I told my dad that I really wanted to be a hero and that the American schools just don't stack up to the school my mom went to. It took literally a whole year to get my dad to break. I see, and that's why you're in Japan now, I take it. Yeppers. Kaminari started to eat his own food and talk with his mouth full at the same time. I might go to UA. No kidding. Hitchin and I were hoping to go there as well. Izuku now smiled at Kaminari. Kaminari looked confused as he swallowed his food down. Hitchin. Oh, Hitoshi, I call him Hitchin. Izuku scrambled a bit before blushing. I see. Still, I have to ask now. Is it true? Kaminari wiggled a little closer to Izuku now as if he didn't want anybody to hear. Is what true? Izuku inquired before taking a bite of his food. That you and Hitoshi Kaminari swallowed hard and made a face before he put his 2 index fingers together pointedly. You know, our banging. Izuku spat his food out. We're brothers, he cried out in complete and total indignation. That's just the word in the schoolyard if you get me. Akisho. Izuku threw his arms up in anger. That. Fuckmyth. He stabbed his chopsticks into his bento in anger. What even is a fuckmyth? It's what Akisho is. Izuku opened his mouth and took a big bite of food. Now eating out of anger, Izuku shoveled a few more bites into his mouth, extending his cheeks out by doing so. Fuckwit, fuckface, fucking asshole. I've had just about enough of him. Kaminari rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. So you and Hitoshi aren't. Bro THers. We're brothers. Why would I even yes, we're close, but to even insinuate that we'd erg. Kaminari ducked his head at Izuku's rant. Sorry, Izuku couldn't be mad at Kaminari. It wasn't his fault that Akisho was. Well, a fuckmyth. Not your fault. You didn't know. Still, you shouldn't listen to rumors. Yeah, I really should have just thought about it before speaking. I really should think before I speak. Kaminari chuckled softly, if not, awkwardly. I just heard and I wanted to know if it was true. Hey, man, I get it. It's not as easy as people think. Izuku huffed before crossing his legs. Just know that any lewd rumors regarding me are hitchin' or lies. Understood. Now, is the other thing true? Are you really quirkless? Yep. And if that bugs you, there's the door. Izuku pointed to the rooftop doorway with his chopsticks. No, it doesn't. Kaminari waved his hands in his face drastically. Izuku must have had a look on his face because Kaminari added, I mean it. It's interesting. My grandfather on my dad's side is quirkless. Izuku chuckled. It's fine ... and I'm sorry if I came off as rude. It's no problem. I'm sure if I were in your shoes I'd be the same way. Kaminari sniffed. So, if you don't mind me asking, what is your quirk? Kaminari beamed at Izuku. Electrification. Basically, I'm a human taser. That's so cool. The rest of lunch was just the two of them talking about Kaminari's quirk. Izuku took his notebook out as he asked a boatload of questions to Kaminari, which the blonde was more than happy to answer. And that's how Izuku made friends with a chaotic, loud blonde, the exact opposite of his brother. Izuku was happy with training. Really, he was. His dad was working on getting him and Hitoshi flexible and agile while All Might trained his muscles. But man, if Izuku wasn't tired. It's been 5 months, and he still had 5 more months to go. It felt so far but so close at the same time. His stamina wasn't completely empty. He always had just enough energy to go each and every morning to night, but he still felt so drained. It was worth it. It was worth it. He was going to be a hero even if it was the last thing he did. And he wasn't going to be any hero. He was going to be the successor to All Might. He was going to get his dream and finally have a quirk, and Izuku was going to work and work until his limbs fell off, which they felt like they were doing right now as he tried to pick up a microwave. He was getting stronger. He knew he was. The microwave wasn't as heavy as it once was to him. Still, his grip slipped and the microwave tumbled to the sandy ground. Izuku, in a panic to grab it, fell but somehow managed to trip over himself because of a discarded fishing net. Izuku was now laying there with his upper body on the fridge while his legs were tangled up below him in a net. Tiredly, Izuku groaned and looked over his shoulder at All Might. His mentor wasn't even paying attention to him as he spoke to some very happy fans. Izuku wasn't lazy, not in the slightest, but damn if he wasn't tired. He laid there for a few seconds and eyed up a discarded blender on the ground just a few feet in front of him who throws a blender away on a beach. Izuku reached out in an attempt to grab the blender, but it was just out of his reach. Hey, Izuku grunted as he tried to reach for the blender with his arms outstretched as far as they could go. He opened and closed his hands like a toddler wanting something from their parents. He closed his eyes as he continued to struggle against the net, kicking and twisting his legs in an attempt to be freed. Izuku didn't know what he'd even gained from doing this. All he knew was that he was exhausted and just wanted to get this beach clean. Izuku opened his eyes. Something cool and smooth was touching his open palms. Izuku looked at the blender now resting between his hands. He then looked back at All Might, thinking maybe his mentor had something to do with this. No, All Might was still talking to his two fans. Izuku looked back at the blender and down where it once lay. The spot it was once embedded in is now an empty spot in the sand. What? Izuku breathed out in alarm. What? Izuku tried to stand, but the stupid net caused him to fall back down to his knees, nearly slamming them into the fridge. Did I bring you to me? He whispered in shock at the blender, like it was going to answer back. No, I'm quirkless. This is a fluke, a freak of nature. There's no way that Izuku swallowed. You okay over there, fanboy? All Might's voice boomed over to him. The two fans were now long gone. Izuku debated on telling his mentor what just happened, but ultimately decided not to. Not until Izuku knew exactly what had just happened. I'm fine, just caught in a net, Izuku muttered as he put the blender down on the fridge. No worries, he beamed back at his mentor. Once Izuku freed himself from the net, a process that took a painfully long time. He looked at the blender one last time before going back to his training. The first thing he was going to focus on was the net. That thing had to go. Still, even though he was focusing on finishing his training, Izuku had some serious questions. The first and most obvious one being, was he really quirkless? You'd think he'd know that question. But Izuku was still missing 5 years of his life. What are those memories hiding? Izuku had thought as he watched the sky start to turn a rusty shade of orange. And who's the one responsible for getting rid of them? He swallowed hard before physically picking up the blender. And why did they do it? Aizawa wasn't an idiot. His sons knew this but also liked to think that he was, in fact, an idiot. But he wasn't an idiot. And that's why it pisses his sons off so much when they can't get away with anything they shouldn't be doing. Like Izuku. Izuku claims to be jogging for the past 5 months. Yet he's packing on muscles on more than just his legs. He's been bringing grip strengths to school, something Aizawa knew he hadn't bought him, and he's been training with Aizawa's dumbbells. So, clearly, Izuku was being trained by someone else and it was showing. Izuku's reaction times have been picking up as well when it comes to physical combat. Granted, so has Hitoshi's. Both boys were getting faster with combat training and more flexible thanks to acrobatics classes on the weekends. Still, that wasn't the point. Izuku was training with someone else and Aizawa didn't like it. It's not even the fact that he's training with another person in his spare time. It's the fact that Izuku is keeping it a secret, which is sending red flags into Aizawa's brain. So, Aizawa decided to do what he does best in these situations, make sure his child is okay and safe. He followed Izuku from school. Aizawa stayed on the rooftops as he jogged along, keeping pace with Izuku. At one point, Aizawa had to jog on the power lines. Eventually, they both made it their destination, Takoba Beach. Aizawa kept his distance on a nearby rooftop. What on earth? Aizawa whispered as he moved his slotted goggles up onto his head to get a better look down below. Izuku was simply cleaning the beach, taking up trash and bringing it to a giant rentable dumpster no doubt awaiting pickup. Izuku was just quietly doing this by himself for a while, and Aizawa wondered if Izuku simply did research on muscle groups and how to work them all out at once. It seemed logical, at first. If that were the case, then why wouldn't he tell me that he was doing this or Hitoshi? He loves Hitoshi and would, undoubtedly, want his brother to get just as strong as him. Aizawa thought as he watched Izuku work. He's gained more muscle than I thought. Izuku was carrying a box spring mattress by himself. That thing had to be at least 60 pounds. Then, maybe 30 minutes later, the truth came out. You're early, my boy. Aizawa rubbed his tongue against the inside of his cheek as he watched Toshinori come up to Izuku on the beach. Toshinori was in his skinny form, something Aizawa, as well as the rest of the staff at UA, learned about not too long ago. Irritation started arising deep inside of Aizawa's belly. Now it makes sense, doesn't it? He gets saved by All Might, and now All Might is training him. And judging by the fact that Toshinori is in his skinny form means that Izuku already knows, and has to keep it a secret, hence why Hitoshi doesn't know. Aizawa snorted in annoyance. Yes, I wanted to get a head start today, Izuku eagerly told Toshinori, especially since we're coming up on a 2-week break in school after tomorrow. Great, I love that attitude. In a puff of smoke, Toshinori was gone, replaced by All Might. However, the puffed-up form didn't last. Clearly, he's used up his time limit for the day. Aizawa reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of gum. He no longer smoked when bored, gave up the habit when he adopted the boys. Now he replaced it with chewing gum, popping a piece into his mouth. He started to chew away, the sweetness of spearmint overloading his taste buds. Yeah, training is really going to be kicking off these next 2 weeks, between you, Dad, and acrobatic classes. But I'm ready for it. Aizawa could feel Izuku grin from his spot on the rooftop. Quietly, Aizawa popped a bubble. Excellent. Now, I want you to stop what you're doing. I want you to bench press this microwave. With no effort at all. All Might picked up a microwave with one hand. It looked heavy and expensive. No doubt 50 to 60 pounds tops. Yes, sir. Aizawa narrowed his eyes as Izuku did as he was told. He got down on the floor and All Might put the microwave on Izuku's feet. There's no support. That's insanely dangerous. His legs could give out or worse. He could get a compact fracture from the weight if he doesn't have the proper support. Oh, I'm going to kill Toshinori. Toshinori clearly had the right idea, but he's going about it all wrong. Aizawa popped another bubble. It wasn't all Izuku's fault. It's clear, to Aizawa at least, that Toshinori has no fucking clue how to teach or train. Izuku didn't break a bone. Thank God. And after about 50 reps he was back on his feet throwing trash out. All Might would coach Izuku along, make him move faster, nothing as bad as bench pressing a microwave on the sandy floor. Granted, this whole thing was dangerous and just asking for a future tetanus shot. The beach was uneven and the sand provided a danger as it hid things like glass, needles, and rusty metal. One wrong fall was all it would take. Toshinori, your idea is there but you're going about it all wrong. This is a biohazard zone at worst and a disaster at best. You are the #1 hero in the world and you couldn't afford a gym membership. Another popped bubble. Aizawa grumbled as the sticky gum got caught in his stubble. Aizawa didn't agree, not one bit. Though he had a feeling he knew why Toshinori wanted this place cleaned and it was a noble cause. Of course, there was just too much to factor in. This needed professional cleaning, not a 13-year-old boy. Finally, after a few hours of this, the two went their separate ways. Aizawa watched Izuku start jogging towards home while Toshinori walked off towards his car. Aizawa followed Toshinori and quickly jogged ahead of Toshinori. He used his scarf and hung upside down from a power line, then slowly started to lower himself down as Toshinori was, seemingly unaware of his presence. It wasn't until Aizawa was almost completely down did Toshinori stop walking. "I know you're there," Toshinori suddenly said. Of course he would pick up on someone's presence near him. He was the #1 hero after all. Shame Toshinori turned the wrong way. Aizawa lowered himself all the way when Toshinori's head was turned away. When Toshinori turned back around, his eyes widened almost comically while he took a step back. "Jesus, Aizawa." Toshinori put his hands on his chest. "Warn a guy." Aizawa shifted his body so he was now upright and on the floor. He let his scarf pull back around his neck and he grabbed his goggles from up top his head. Toshinori sucked in several deep breaths and seemed to swallow down some blood threatening to spill out of his mouth. "What are you doing?" Toshinori demanded. "Just wondering what you're doing," Aizawa responded as he brought his goggles down from the top of his head and down around his neck. "What's with the boy?" The boy, oh, you saw that." Toshinori pointed back to the beach and then looked back around at Aizawa. "That? Oh, just a fanboy is all." "A fanboy? Huh. Yep. Seemed like you knew him." "I treat everybody like I know them. After all, they know me." Toshinori grinned. Aizawa scowled behind his scarf. "Is that so?" Judging by his reaction, he has no clue I'm Izuku's father. Aizawa sized Toshinori up for a moment before shoving his hands into his pockets. "I'm going to keep it that way. Just watch yourself. Those fanboys can be dangerous." Aizawa turned away from Toshinori before vanishing up to the roof of the building. Let's see how far this goes. 3 days have passed since Aizawa made the discovery, and the three of them, Hitoshi, Izuku, and himself, were sitting down finishing up dinner. Aizawa was almost sure that Izuku was getting ready to confess to them about what he was doing with All Might. His gaze was far away, and his eyes were white in color, showing that he was lost in deep thought. It was Tuesday, meaning Hitoshi washed the dishes, Aizawa would put them away, and Izuku would take the trash out. Hitoshi had heard it first, before Aizawa, because he put the plate he was washing back into the soapy water and snapped his head towards Izuku's direction. "Dad, mutter, it's your turn," Hitoshi grumbled before he went back to washing the dishes. Aizawa looked up at the ceiling and sighed. "Izuku." He tried to get his son's attention, but it was too late. Mutter, 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 mutter. "Izuk, mutter me ace reckless, mutter, 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 mutter." Aizawa walked over to Izuku. "Mutter, mutter, ichibepasible, mutter, mutter me hands." "Mutter, mutter." Aizawa crouched down so he was at eye level with Izuku. Aizawa reached over, grabbed the top of Izuku's head with one of his hands, and twisted Izuku's head around so they were now face to face. "Izuku, come back to me." Aizawa used his free hand to snap his fingers rapidly in front of Izuku's face. Izuku blinked and the color returned to his eyes. "I was doing it again, wasn't I?" Izuku whispered. "Yes, you were. Want to talk about what's on your mind?" Aizawa inquired. Izuku blinked slowly as he frowned. "I just wanted to ask, are you sure I'm quirkless?" There was a clatter from the kitchen. Aizawa looked over his shoulder to see that Hitoshi had, seemingly, dropped a plate into the water again by accident. Aizawa narrowed his eyes at this but focused back around to Izuku. "Lest you forget," Aizawa took it upon himself to fix Izuku's collar. "We went to 3 different doctors on the subject. They all confirmed it. You have the extra toe joint." "I know. Besides, if you did have a quirk we would have known by now, wouldn't we?" Izuku licked his lips. Yeah, you're right. Sorry." A soft sigh left Izuku's mouth as he rubbed at his face. "I just thought that maybe. I'm thinking too much about it, I'm sure." Aizawa nodded at this. "Possibly. Now, could you please go and take the trash out?" "Of course." Izuku scooted out of his chair and got up. He stretched his arms above his head before going to the trash can. The trash bag was always a little heavy. Living with 3 people in a house would do that. But now, Aizawa watched as Izuku hardly struggled to lift the trash bag out of the can and tie it. Then, looking like a deranged Santa Claus, Izuku threw the bag over his shoulder and went for the front door. When the front door shut behind him, Aizawa looked over at Hitoshi. Hitoshi had his head down and was scrubbing a plate above the sink. "Are you okay?" Aizawa inquired. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" It was a fast reaction and a defensive one as well. It made Aizawa narrow his eyes slightly. "You've been washing that same plate for 5 minutes now." Hitoshi blinked in surprise, looked at the plate, and huffed. "I figured you like a thorough cleaning." "Then put the plate on the drying rack." Aizawa couldn't help but chuckle as he walked over to Hitoshi. What do you think about Izuku's question? Hitoshi suddenly asked as he started washing a set of chopsticks. Aizawa shrugged. Nerves probably. Izuku is worried about getting into UA. Which reminds me, I need to talk to Nezu. Aizawa mumbled before shrugging. Izuku thinks a quirk would be a magical cure-all for him. Hitoshi pursed his lips to the side at this. He looked like he had something on his mind, but if he did, he didn't voice it. Instead, he just finished up cleaning the dishes before retreating to his bedroom immediately after. Sweat perked and started to pour down Izuku's face. His legs were in the air, his shoulders and neck pressed firmly against the floor, the only part of him that was on the floor really. He had both of his hands against his hips while his father stood above him, hands on Izuku's shoes, keeping him balanced. His upper back was hurting, and he could feel the strain of his legs being suspended in the air for as long as they have. Aizawa tilted his head before letting go of Izuku's shoes. But Izuku didn't let his legs down. 30 seconds, Aizawa said before starting the stopwatch. Izuku bit back a groan. His back was already threatening to give out and his shoulders were screaming in pain. That was when his dad squatted down next to him, showing him the stopwatch. Now that I've got your attention, I have a question. Aizawa flatly said. You want to interrogate me now? Izuku breathed out. Yes, you're vulnerable and in an uncomfortable position. There was a familiar smile on his father's lips. The smile Aizawa would get when he knew he had just played somebody for the fool. And that he did. Izuku should have guessed his father would pull something like this. Well, at least his father was honest. Fine, ask your question. Izuku's eyes darted from his father's eyes to the stopwatch. The seconds were ticking by so slow, too slow. Izuku looked away from his dad as he looked up at the sky. His legs were threatening to buckle, to come crashing down, but Izuku was willing them to stay upright. All right, I've noticed that you've been packing on some muscle these past few months and that your diet changed. Who's training you? Shit. Izuku grunted as his left knee nearly buckled. Nobody. And why do I find that hard to believe? Izuku, I'm not dumb. You don't just gain muscle mass from only jogging. Izuku looked at the timer. Only 15 seconds had ticked by. Okay, fine, you caught me. Izuku groaned a little as his body started to ache and protested against the strain he was being put under. I've been cleaning a beach. By yourself. Izuku looked at the stopwatch. 10 more seconds to go. Yeah, I've been learning about muscle gain and I figured I can do community service on top of it. Aizawa hummed and stood up. Cleaning a beach. Aizawa then walked over to Izuku's legs. All by yourself. Why not have Hitoshi help you? Izuku grumbled something under his breath. If he was going to say something, it died in his throat. How much longer? Aizawa tilted his head and that familiar cynical smile graced over Aizawa's face as he showed off his teeth. Until you answer the question, Izuku. I just didn't want to bug him with cleaning is all. Aizawa let out a soft sigh and slapped Izuku's shoe. This caused Izuku's legs to just flop down. Izuku cried in pain as his back was adjusting to being flat on the floor now. I don't know how I feel about you going off to clean a beach by yourself. Especially not Takoba Beach. Izuku sucked in a deep breath before suddenly opening his eyes and frowning at his father. I never said I was cleaning Takoba Beach, Dad. Izuku then rolled onto his side and propped an elbow up so he could look at his father. Aizawa snorted. It's the only beach in the area that's ransacked with trash. It's pretty logical that's the beach you'd be going to. Aizawa then tossed something in Izuku's direction. Izuku quickly scrambled to grab it. It was just a water bottle. Hydrate, kid. Izuku let out a snort but did as his father asked of him. That was close. Izuku sighed out heavily as he looked over at his alarm clock. 4:27 a.m. The red light blinked at him and he was just glad that school was out for the next week and a half. He rubbed his tired eyes. Slowly, Izuku sat up and ran his fingers through his curls to get them out of his face. His eyes dropped slightly and he quietly wrapped his blanket over his shoulders and wiggled out of his bed. His stomach gurgled and Izuku decided he needed a small, moderately portioned midnight snack. His dad wasn't home so waking him wouldn't be an issue. Izuku shuffled his way into the kitchen with his all-might blanket covering his head like a hood and draped over his body imitating a cloak. Opening the fridge, Izuku looked at the leftovers for something to munch on. Fried pork. Leftover fried pork from the night before. Izuku popped open the Tupperware and shut the fridge with his hip. He placed the lid on the counter and looked for some chopsticks. He found them sticking out of the drying rack on the sink. Izuku looked at the chopsticks, then down at the leftover pork. Is it possible? Izuku wondered as he thought about the day before, when the blender magically came to his hands. He's been thinking about it since it happened. No, I'm quirkless, I have the toe joint. What happened the other day was a fluke, Izuku whispered to himself before looking back down at his food. Another loud and irritated sigh left Izuku's mouth. He then shut his eyes and extended his hand out. He stood there for a few seconds with his hands out, but for the longest time, nothing happened. So, Izuku cracked one of his eyes open. The chopsticks hadn't moved from their spot on the drying rack. Izuku couldn't stop the pout from gracing his lips. Like I said, a fluke. Izuku threw his hands up before looking down at the fried pork slices. So, it wasn't because my eyes were closed. He looked back at the chopsticks. Then, maybe. He brought his hand out and focused purely on the chopsticks just a measly few feet away. He raised his hand. Come to me. He closed his hand and opened it. The chopsticks wobbled. Izuku gasped, dropping the Tupperware of fried pork slices. He looked at the chopsticks with wide eyes. No. Izuku stared at his palms, down at the floor, then back at the chopsticks. Izuku's hands were starting to shake. He looked back at the chopsticks and with shaky hands, he raised them both up and stared at the chopsticks. With both hands raised in front of him, he opened and closed both of his hands. The set of chopsticks wobbled before slowly rising up and out of the drying rack. His breath hitched into his throat as he watched the chopsticks. Each time he opened and closed his hands, the chops moved to him. Closer and closer the chopsticks came to him until he felt the smooth wood touch against the palm of his hands. Izuku felt his eyes widen as his whole body shook from head to toe. Izuku clasped his hands around the wooden chopsticks. I just did that. Oh my god. Izuku couldn't think. He could hardly breathe. I have a quirk. Hitchin. Izuku couldn't have run faster to his brother's room. He nearly slipped on the hardwood floors as he raced as fast as his legs allowed him all the way to his brother's bedroom. Hitchin. Izuku excitedly threw his brother's door open. Hitoshi nearly jumped out of his skin as he flopped around his bed like a fish out of water. What? Hitoshi jumped and sat up swiftly, his hair puffed out around his face, his lavender-colored eyes wide with concern. Izuku was jumping on the balls of his feet. He felt excited, thrilled even. Izuku snapped his eyes open. He looked up at his ceiling with wide and confused eyes. What? Zachin Hitoshi opened Izuku's bedroom door. You ready? Hitoshi was dressed in his working-out clothes. Hitoshi tilted his head and smiled at Izuku. He then started to stretch his shoulders. Izuku looked at Hitoshi feeling rather confused. Ready? He tilted his head to the side. Training. Dad told me to wake you. Izuku brought his hand to his face and rubbed the crown of his head. But, what happened? Something happened. Hitoshi shrugged as he continued to smile an awkward lopsided smile. Izuku tried to think. What happened last night? Wasn't I? I was excited. About something. No. Yes. Earth to Izuku. You still with me? Hitoshi waved his hand in front of Izuku's face. When did I go to bed last night? Hitoshi shrugged. Around 10. Maybe a little later. I mean, you came into my room last night around 4. You looked so excited and then you had this weird blank look on your face and then you left. I thought maybe you were sleepwalking or had a night terror. So, are you getting up or do I have to drag you out of bed? Okay, I'm up. Izuku threw his arms up in defeat. I was excited about something, but Izuku wiggled out of bed before stretching his arms above his head. Shoo, let me get dressed. Izuku gestured with his hands, forcing Hitoshi out of his doorway. And, Izuku grabbed onto his door and looked at Hitoshi. I was going to tell you something. But, I forgot. If you forgot, then it wasn't important. I guess. Get dressed. Yeah, tell Dad I'll be there in 5. Izuku then shut his bedroom door and stopped. He stared intensely at his door frame before shaking his head vigorously. Am I missing another memory? Hitoshi didn't know how Izuku could put up with Kaminari. Kaminari was loud and constantly inside people's personal spaces. It often drove Hitoshi up the wall whenever Kaminari would lean in extra close while talking. Yet, it didn't seem to bug Izuku. The three of them were paired together for a history project. It was the last project of the year. They had 4 months to get it done and it was worth 20% of their final. Once again, Kaminari went to ask a question, getting right into Hitoshi's personal space. Hitoshi growled and put his index finger directly on Kaminari's forehead. Back up. Hitoshi hissed between clenched teeth before pushing Kaminari back with his finger. Hitchin, don't be mean. Izuku spoke in a deadpan voice as he started to shuffle through his notes in an attempt to find his history notes. Yeah, Hitchin, don't be a meanie. I will knock your ass out. Hitoshi let out another hiss as he lightly slammed his fist into the table. Zachin doesn't mind if I call him that. No, I mind. I just don't vocalize it. Found it. Izuku pulled out the set of notes he was looking for and placed them on the table. So, what are we doing again, exactly? Kaminari inquired as he quietly looked at the notes. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. God, you need Adderall. We're learning about the Great Quirk War between Japan and America. And, why do we have to learn about some war that took place 50-odd years ago? Well, we're here to put our opinions on the matter. On whether or not Quirk should be involved in war, Izuku started to say but was suddenly cut off by a piece of paper being thrown violently against his head. or if the quirkless should be left out of war. Akisho's smarmy voice grated on Hitoshi's ears. Which they should. By the way, Kaminari's nose scrunched up in distaste. Hitoshi swallowed hard and scowled at Akisho. He's not wrong, though, Izuku suddenly said. His voice was soft. Of course he's wrong, Zuchin. Hitoshi looked at his brother with a raised eyebrow. The quirkless shouldn't be excluded from war. I get why you'd think that, Hitchin, but you need to think about this from a logical perspective, not a biased perspective. The quirkless are a liability in this case. Those with strong and powerful quirks are best suited for the battlefield. It would be illogical to put the quirkless in the middle of a fight with quirks involved. Stop sounding like Dad. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. But I'm right. If the other side allows people with quirks to fight in a war and our side doesn't, that puts Japan at a serious disadvantage in a fight, Izuku stated. Then where does it stop? Kaminari suddenly said as he stretched himself across Izuku's desk. No doubt an attempt to gain Izuku's attention. It worked as Izuku raised an eyebrow silently urging Kaminari to continue. Where does it stop? Kaminari repeated in a softer voice. We stop putting the quirkless in the military. Then when does it stop? The quirkless can't be in the military. Well, they're useless anyways. Just ban them from being cops. Those with quirks can replace them just as well. Lawyers, nurses, doctors. Nah, those with quirks are more preferable. Do I need to keep going? Izuku sucked in a deep breath. Quietly, he brought his thumb up and started to chew on the side of his nail. You make a good point, Izuku whispered. See, Zuchin. Hitoshi lowered his head down to his desk and rested it on his folded arms. If Kaminari can make a good point, then clearly we have something to go on. Oh, I knew you loved me. Hitchin. Kaminari never got to finish his sentence before Hitoshi smacked him with a notebook. It was a gentle smack, but a smack nonetheless. Oof, Izuku snorted through his nose. This whole scenario is a lose-lose situation, Izuku then said as he leafed through his notes. We shouldn't exclude the quirkless, but we can't exclude those with quirks either. Maybe we could find a compromise, Hitoshi inquired. A compromise? Kaminari asked next. That's a good idea. It'll also set us apart from everyone else. Izuku grabbed his open notebook and flipped to a blank page. There has to be a compromise here. It shouldn't be one side or the other. There's no logic in that. Now, hear me out. The quirkless don't stay out of the military, just off the front lines. Kaminari snapped his fingers. Put them in the back. Have them be the people behind the scenes. Minimal danger that way. Exactly. Izuku beamed broadly as he started to quickly write information down. Hitoshi, can you look up the quirkless during the Great Quirk War? See if there's any of great importance. Yeah, no problem. Izuku looked at Kaminari and leaned in a little. Kami, can you? Kami. Hitoshi poked his head between Kaminari and Izuku. Yes, Kami, Hitchin. Izuku poked Hitoshi's forehead. He loves me, Kaminari grinned, and Hitoshi simply stuck his tongue out at him in response. Regardless, Kami, can you please go and research a bit of the quirk singularity theory? Yeah, but why? What does that have to do with anything? Everything. Hitoshi smiled a bit when he saw the little smile form on Izuku's face. Once the ball got rolling, it was hard for Izuku to stop. His brother was excited and it showed. We're talking about today's wars, so by quirk singularity theory it can show how much stronger quirks can get generation after generation. Izuku scrambled swiftly and grabbed a different notebook. He then quickly flipped through the pages. Okay. Kaminari smiled just as he whipped his phone out. But what about you, Zuku? Zuku. Hitoshi narrowed his eyes at Kaminari. Yes, Hitchin, Zuku. Izuku responded to Hitoshi with a little smile. But also, to answer your question, I'm going to look into the military of today. Find important quirkless figures or heroes. I'm also going to take and compare the technology of today versus back then. Where's my pen? Hitoshi sighed and raised his head from his arms. Right, I guess I should start looking for important quirkless people back then. Although Hitoshi paused to turn his back to the two of them so he could grab his bag from the floor. There were a lot more quirkless back then. Whoa, Kaminari's yell made Hitoshi quickly turn back around. What? Izuku looked at Kaminari with wide eyes. Didn't you see what you just did? Kaminari practically shouted. He sounded awestruck and elated as he got right into Izuku's personal space. Izuku jumped a little and backed up in his seat. His smile went lopsided and his eyes went wide with surprise. Hitoshi responded quickly by grabbing the back of Kaminari's collar. Back up. I'm sorry, but did you seriously miss that? Zuku, that pen just floated into your hand when you were looking away. What? Izuku blinked. I think you're mistaken. Izuku gave a little awkward laugh. No, I saw it. Well, then you must be seeing things. Hitoshi quickly joined in. Kaminari looked at Izuku. Izuku just shrugged silently and started to write. Kaminari frowned and turned to Hitoshi before looking back at Izuku. Are you sure you don't have a quirk? If I had a quirk, I would have known about it by now, Kami. But I saw. I'm going to have to agree with Hitchin. Kami, you might just be seeing things. Kaminari looked back over at Hitoshi. Hitoshi just shrugged. You, maybe I am. Kaminari calmed down and sat back in his seat. However, Hitoshi didn't miss the way Kaminari was opening and closing his hand like he was trying to pull something to him. Okay, you two problem children ready? Aizawa asked as he stood between Izuku and Hitoshi. Yes, Izuku was practically vibrating with excitement. He was jumping up and down on the balls of his feet. Meanwhile, Hitoshi was on the calmer side as he started to lower himself down. Both boys had one of Aizawa's scarves around their necks. They both had the scarf wrapped around their arms, poised and ready to strike. They were both getting better with the capture weapons. They weren't masters, far from it, but they were better. Remember, don't strangle each other, go. Aizawa jumped back swiftly. A scarf went flying. Hitoshi's scarf managed to wrap around Izuku's wrist. With a grunt, Hitoshi went to pull Izuku in. Izuku's allowing it. Aizawa wondered. Well, it turns out there was a method to Izuku's madness. He allowed Hitoshi to bring him, just so he could throw a low stomach punch. The punch looked soft. Well, as soft as a punch can be, but it still was close enough to Hitoshi's genitals that it made Hitoshi instantly double over with a loud gah. You titanic ass. Hitoshi then lowered himself to the ground while holding his pelvic area where Izuku had punched, a low groan leaving his mouth. Izuku's hands went to his mouth in shock. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hit you that hard. Aizawa's lips upturned just a little as he tried to hold back a laugh. Okay, letting out a breath, Aizawa straightened himself back up. Izuku, your movement was smart and analyzed. You let Hitoshi believe he was going to wrangle you in and you used that to his advantage. You even remembered to go for his ... weak spot. Fuck. Hitoshi let out a growl while still holding onto his pelvic area. Don't act like you aren't enjoying this, Dad. Aizawa couldn't help it. He chuckled a little. Quickly he stabilized himself before shaking his head. Nope, not enjoying it. Izuku suddenly let out a gasp before he started laughing. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. A snort left his mouth and he started to chortle. Hitoshi simply raised one hand up and then pointed his middle finger up in the air directed in Izuku's direction. All right. Aizawa walked over and offered his hand. Hitoshi took it. But you've learned a lesson, Hitoshi. Never underestimate your opponent. When you're out there fighting villains, it doesn't matter if that villain looks like a little pigtailed girl, you never underestimate what they can do. Right, good. Aizawa backed up. Now, I want you two to try again. Hitoshi nodded and started to reel the capture weapon back to his arms. Izuku jumped back several steps and lowered himself to the ground. This time it seemed Izuku was going to use his capture scarf as he let it snack down just a bit below his arms. Or he could be using it as a ruse. Aizawa stuck his hands inside his pockets and narrowed his eyes. Once both boys were in their battle stance, Aizawa took a big step back. Go. This time it was Izuku who moved first. He was charging, but that was his downfall. In one quick movement, Hitoshi had Izuku's right arm completely engulfed in his capture scarf. Hitoshi grunted, turned his heel so his back was to Izuku and used all of his weight to pull Izuku up, off of the ground, and over Hitoshi's shoulder. Izuku struck the ground shoulder first, smacking it so hard against the dirt that it made a small divot in the grass. Izuku did not give up, however. Instead, he used this to his own advantage, and when he fell, he grabbed a hold of Hitoshi's capture weapon that was still wrapped tightly around his wrist. Izuku managed to get back up on his feet and he tugged on the scarf as hard as he possibly could. Well, all the muscle gain Izuku got wasn't for naught. Izuku brought Hitoshi down to the ground. However, it seemed that Hitoshi wasn't going to go down that easily. Hitoshi somersaulted, and once his legs were close enough, he kicked Izuku's legs out from under him. Izuku crashed to the ground and Hitoshi pounced. No punches were thrown, but the two struggled, turning and tossing in a heap trying to be the one on top. Aizawa watched with interest. Hitoshi. Oh, I see now. Clever. Hitoshi was being meticulous with how he was doing this. First, he would try to pin Izuku to the ground, in which Izuku would undoubtedly find a way to twist his body and flip himself on top of Hitoshi. It was about the third or fourth time Hitoshi managed to get himself on top of Izuku when his grand plan finally came to fruition. What are you doing? Izuku had snapped out in irritation. This, with both hands wrapped around the ends of his capture scarf, Hitoshi pulled as hard as he possibly could. All of the bands of the capture scarf he managed to wrap around Izuku's limbs seized up. Izuku gasped in shock once he was completely captured, his limbs up in the air, useless in battle. You even avoided my neck. Izuku mumbled. Impressive. Impressive indeed. You managed to wrap Izuku up without him knowing. You used the fact that Izuku would try and wrestle you against him and tangled him up, giving you the opportunity. That being said, I wouldn't rely too heavily on that. Most people will kick, punch, and bite you to get out. That being said, Izuku, you aren't using your capture weapon, why? Izuku made a face. Sorry, Dad. I've just been going for more head-on approaches, but I'll try and use it a little more. I know you're apprehensive about the capture weapon because you aren't that good at it. But you can't get better if you don't try. Yeah, you're right. All right, that's enough for tonight. The sun is setting and I've got a patrol I have to be on in a few hours. Both boys sighed in relief. Hitoshi didn't let Izuku go right away, however. Oh, right before I forget, with one swift jab of his fist, Hitoshi got Izuku right in the pelvis. Then he released the capture weapon from around Izuku. Izuku let out a cry of pain. You dick. He then wrapped both arms around his pelvis. Fuck, that hurt. Aizawa wanted to be mad. Really, he did, but he couldn't. Still, what Hitoshi did was still wrong. If not a little funny. Hitoshi, that was uncalled for. Training was over, 15 laps around the yard. Worth it. Hitoshi shrugged and immediately started jogging. It took a minute or two, but Izuku eventually got back to his feet. Once the pain subsided, he approached Aizawa. Hey, Dad, can I talk to you? Of course. It's rather strange, but I don't know. Aizawa put his hands on his hips. Come on, kid. Speak actual sentences I can understand. Izuku sighed and looked at his fingers. I think I'm missing another memory. What? Aizawa stiffened almost immediately. How can you tell? Is it recent, or are you missing another childhood memory? Recent. I don't know. I'm so confused. That's the problem. Aizawa could see it written all over Izuku's face. The concern and confusion that was. Okay, when did this happen? A week ago. And you're telling me this now? Well, like I said, I'm so confused I couldn't tell if I was only dreaming or if I'm actually missing a memory. But I think I am. Izuku grabbed his hair a little and twisted a curly lock around one of his fingers. Okay. Why do you think you're missing a memory? Let's start with that. It's hard to explain really, but I have this vague feeling of being excited over something I know I was going to tell Hitchin. I don't know what though. It's not like losing a train of thought. This feels deeper than that. Izuku whispered urgently to his father. What do you remember? What part of your memory do you think is blank? I remember being really restless one night. I couldn't sleep, so I got up to get some food. Was I home? No, you were on patrol. I remember that. So, last Tuesday, I think. Aizawa made a mental note. Okay, you got some food. Well, then I woke up to Hitoshi waking me the next morning. Aizawa thought for a moment. What time did you go to eat? Izuku shook his head. Around 4:30, I think. It's all weirdly fuzzy. Izuku felt himself start to talk with his hands as he made wild movements. Wait, did you go to eat the leftover fried pork? Izuku snapped his fingers. Yes, I remember that. Okay, so here's the thing. I found that pork in the trash that morning when I returned home. Do you remember throwing it out? No. According to Hitchin, I stormed into his room, but then I got this blank look on my face and just left. That's less than ideal. That's actually horrifying to hear. We might need to set up another appointment for a memory specialist. Izuku's shoulders slumped at those words. Not another one of those specialists? I know you hate them, but it's best we make sure you don't have some sort of amnesia or disease. Yeah, but they poke and prod through my memories. It just makes me feel violated. I know, but it's for the best. Okay, just know that me and Hitoshi will be right there with you. Izuku nodded. Okay, yeah, I'll endure it. He breathed out before moving his fingers through his hair. I'm gonna go shower now. I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, Izuku went to turn, but he stopped and quickly turned back around. That was when Izuku wrapped his arms around Aizawa's torso. I won't lie, I'm a little scared. Izuku muttered softly against Aizawa's chest. A soft sigh left Aizawa's nose before he lightly raked his fingers through Izuku's wild curls. You'll be fine. Like I said, Hitoshi and I will be right there. Not about that. The mumble lightly rumbled against Aizawa's chest. What if I lose my memories of you or Hitchin too? The last thing I want is to be as confused as I was 7 years ago. No memories, no real sense of identity or worth. You won't? Aizawa started to run his fingers through Izuku's hair in a more soothing way. I'll make sure of it. They went to a memory specialist, not even a week later. Izuku groaned as he held onto his spinning head. God, how he hated memory specialists. The woman in question was someone Izuku hadn't met before. Her quirk was a little different from all the others he'd been to in the past. She could look through his memories like looking at a film, kind of like Sir Night-Eye's quirk. Ms. Watasumi was her name. She was a pretty woman, thin and tall, with deep teal-colored hair and tiger-orange eyes. In order for her quirk to work, she had to keep all 10 fingers on her client, and both of them had to be very still. She preferred to keep her fingers on her client's scalp. The downside of her quirk was that the longer she looked, the more sickly feeling her client would get. For Izuku, right now it was dizziness. Aizawa had saved her one night, and so this session was free. You had every right to come to me, Eraserhead, Watasumi said as she sat down in her own seat and started to write on a chart. A memory was removed. Watasumi sighed and rubbed at her nose. I'm not doubting you, but how can you tell? Hitoshi inquired suddenly. He walked over to Izuku and quietly grabbed his hand. I mean, the other doctors just said his memory was up and gone. Yes, well, my quirk is different. I see memory as a film. Izuku's memory from a week ago has been Burned, so to say. Burned, that's a new one. Aizawa shoved his hands in his pockets. Yes, it's not that new, at least not to me, if I can be honest with you. Matsumi reached into her drawer and pulled out a pair of thick black reading glasses. Someone took the effort to remove his memories. It's like there's something there that they don't want him to know. I just wanted to get a midnight snack. Izuku mumbled weakly. How is that grounds for a memory removal? I don't know. Matsumi pursed her lips to the side, but someone saw fit to remove it. Aizawa chewed on the inside of his cheek. Can you tell if maybe Izuku got hit by a stray quirk? Or ... it could be the same person who took his memories 7 years ago. Hitoshi offered up suddenly. That's right. Matsumi leaned down and opened her bottom drawer. It's mentioned in your file that you're missing 5 years of memories. Well, give or take 3 years. Regardless, it could be possible that someone had a long-term quirk put on Izuku. But it doesn't make much sense to me. She read through the file. Whoever did this wanted Izuku to forget something of great importance. Everyone frowned at the doctor's words. How do we fix it? Aizawa finally questioned. Because I don't want Izuku to keep losing his memories. Matsumi smiled a little. Izuku, there's a vending machine in the waiting room. Matsumi reached into her purse and pulled out a couple of yen. Go get yourself a ginger ale to clear up your dizziness. Hitoshi, go with him. Get yourself someone as well. Both boys looked at each other, shrugged, and grabbed the money. Thanks. We'll go and wait in the waiting room then, Hitoshi said before grabbing Izuku's hand and leading him away. Once the door was shut, Matsumi looked at Aizawa. Izuku isn't going to like this. I already know he doesn't like memory appointments. So he's going to hate what I have planned. Oh boy. Aizawa sighed in annoyance. Like I said, I see things in film. Izuku's film is burnt. But what I can do, that not a lot of people know, is that the longer I have with my client, I can actually fix the film myself. What? Can you? Yep. I had this little boy come in. He couldn't be older than 12. He had a younger sister. His sister had the quirk to remove and replace memories, so to say. Poor girl, it wasn't her fault, but she made him forget every single one of his family members. Like I said, I've seen burnt film before, and this is how I know Izuku's memories were taken by force. It took roughly 6 sessions, but I got the boy's memories back in order. That's incredible. When can we start the first session? Yes, I'm glad you're on board, Eraserhead, but there are things I should tell you before we start signing. What I'm doing is going to be extremely invasive. I have to go through Izuku's memories and basically stitch them back together piece by piece. This involves going into repressed memories. Also, this has to be a once-a-month deal, if not once every 2 months. Izuku got dizzy after just 10 minutes of me going through his memories. During these appointments, I'll be doing it for an hour at a time, meaning he's going to be out of commission for roughly 2 days afterwards. Yes. God. Aizawa made a face before lightly scuffing his foot against the tilted floor. But it can be done in 1 session. I mean, it only took you 6 months to get the other kid to remember his whole family. That depends on those missing 5 years of his life. I can repair those, you know. It's just gonna take a while and a lot of patience. Aizawa shoved his hands into his pocket before looking out at the waiting room. Hitoshi was sitting on a chair while Izuku sat on the floor between Hitoshi's legs. Izuku had his eyes closed while he held onto a can of ginger ale. Let's get them into UA first. We'll discuss appointments afterwards. Change, Tora, my boy. Change. Izuku ran as fast as his legs would allow him towards All Might. Izuku knew he must have looked crazed as he charged towards his mentor. Their Toshinori stood on the beach in his buffed-up form ready to start for their day. Izuku was all for it, but today was different. Today, he was being followed. Izuku could feel his heart pounding away as he made a beeline for All Might. Change back. Hurry. Toshinori didn't even question it. There was an explosion of smoke before Toshinori was back in his skinny form. It was right on time as the moment All Might disappeared, Izuku's stalker rounded the corner. Hitoshi declared, like he had caught Izuku in some great scandal. Izuku had his hands on his knees, doubled over while sucking in several greedy breaths. He looked from Izuku to Toshinori. Hitoshi sucked in his own deep breaths as he walked past Toshinori and towards Izuku. If I didn't know any better, Hitoshi swallowed hard and then pointed at Izuku. I'd say you were trying to get rid of me. Hitchin, I'm offended. Izuku jumped to his feet and put his hand on his chest. How could you even say such things? Oh, shut it, you ass. Hitoshi shoved Izuku to the sandy ground of the beach. He then turned to Toshinori. What's with Skeletor here? I don't know him. Izuku quickly stood and grabbed Hitoshi's shoulders. Really? He's smoking. It's probably his quirk. Stop harassing people, Hitchin. Hitoshi huffed. But Zuchin, stop whining. Izuku spun Hitoshi around and started to lead Hitoshi away from the beach. I jogged with you like you wanted. More like ran away from me. Now go home. But Dad's on a mission. Hitoshi whined before throwing his head back a bit. I'll be all alone for hours. Then take those hours to train, like I am. Hitoshi grunted in response. Bitch. Bastard. Now beat it. Izuku shoved Hitoshi down the alleyway. I'll be home by 6. I hate you. You love me. Once Hitoshi was finally out of sight, Izuku slumped his shoulders. Jesus Christ. He breathed out slowly. Was that your brother? Toshinori inquired after a few seconds of silence between the two of them. My twin. Yep, that's him. He's been really clingy as of late. Sorry about all that, by the way. While you two do not look alike, but at the same time I see the similarities. Izuku raised an eyebrow at Toshinori. I mean, it's there. You have green hair and green eyes. He has purple hair and purple eyes. You both have genetics that match your hair and eye color. You said it, not me. Izuku raised his hands with a smile. He then started to stretch his shoulders. Anyways, back to it. Of course, young Tora. Izuku was buzzing. 1 more month. 1 more month. His mind would constantly yell and scream at him. 1 more month until the entrance exams for UA to start. Everyone was abuzz, really. They had just finished their last projects and turned in their history project last week, so all that was left was studying for finals and bulking up to the best of their ability. The beach was getting cleaner and cleaner each day, but not clean enough, not to Izuku's liking that was. If I spend 5 hours cleaning today, I can get a small section cleaned, but not enough. No, I should spend longer if I can. 1 more month. I have 1 more month to get this beach as clean as I possibly can and to pack on more muscles. Izuku, he felt a hand on his head and his head was twisted so he was facing his father again. Pork belly, his father said softly as he showed the plate of pork belly strips in front of his nose. Yes, please. Okay. Aizawa put 3 strips of pork belly on Izuku's plate before walking away. Izuku shook his head and quietly poked at his egg yolk, breaking it and spilling the yellow nectar down the pork belly strips. Hitoshi took his seat next to Izuku and soon Aizawa sat down just as well. At first there was silence as everyone just quietly ate. Izuku dipped his pork belly into his egg yolk before putting it into his mouth. Aizawa sipped at his coffee before heavily sighing. He then placed his mug down with a soft clink against the wooden table. Okay, I think it's time we talked about UA. Izuku paused mid-bite. Hitoshi stopped with his chopsticks in his mouth. You two will not be taking the entrance exam. It's too dangerous and it's biased towards those with quirks. I wish I could get you in on recommendation, but I'll be honest with you both. Even with my recommendation, you will be laughed at out of the room. So, I talked to Nedzu about this. You are going to show your capabilities in front of Nedzu. Hitoshi, he wants to see your quirk and how far you've come along with the capture weapon, as well as how fast and capable you can handle yourself. Izuku stiffened in his seat. Nedzu knows you're quirkless, and even though he was a little apprehensive, I managed to talk him into seeing you just as well. He wants to see your capabilities in battle, just like Hitoshi, and he was interested in your reaction times. This will take place the day after UA exams so the schedules don't get mixed up. Train. I mean it, you two. I really wish I could train you guys more than I already have, but with the exams coming and finals, me, Nimuri, and Hizashi are all swamped. Focus on your strengths. Both boys looked at each other then nodded. We're going to do our best, Dad. Hitoshi grinned. Determination lit brightly behind his lavender eyes. Good, and I know you both will. The feeling of triumph was such a euphoric feeling for Izuku. He was pumped and just couldn't believe he actually managed to do it. Izuku let out a loud victorious bellow for all around to hear him. He didn't care if the sun was only just rising up and he was possibly waking or disturbing the people nearby. Izuku couldn't believe he had finally done it. He had not only cleaned the beach, but he also managed to move the fridge and brought it to the side of the road for pickup. The beach was now officially cleaned. There, Izuku stood off on the side of the road, on top of said fridge, screaming in triumph. Holy crap, you cleaned it all. Toshinori gasped as he approached Izuku swiftly. Izuku was still screaming at the top of his lungs. He felt invigorated and alive as his nerves burned from his final workout on this beach. Once Izuku finally stopped his screaming, he went to turn towards Toshinori. He felt his foot slip and next thing he knew he was tumbling down. Thankfully, All Might swooped in and caught him just before he fell. Young Izuku, I couldn't be prouder of you. Izuku felt his face heat up at the praise. Thank you, look at this. All Might put him down before fishing for his phone. After a few minutes of him tapping away, he pulled up a picture. It was one of Izuku on the first day of their training. The one where All Might was sitting up top the fridge. He had snapped a picture of Izuku while he was trying to drag the fridge with some rope. This was you just a little under a year ago. Slightly scrawny with not enough muscle, but look at you now. Izuku grinned. He felt, well, at his best. A feeling he enjoyed and made him feel more empowered than ever. He was strong. My boy, do you think you're ready to receive my quirk? All Might put a big hand on Izuku's shoulder. Yes, just tell me what I have to do. Eat this. Izuku felt at a loss of words as All Might showed him a glittering piece of his long strand of blonde hair. Hey, you want me to eat? Yes, eat my hair. Go on now. All Might dropped the hair into Izuku's palm. Izuku stared at the hair. Why? Izuku finally looked at All Might. His voice quivered lightly. My quirk can only be passed down through DNA. This is the most logical way for me to give you my quirk. He's not wrong. The only other options are spit, blood, or not gonna go there. Oh God. Izuku scrunched his face up. Try and not think about it, he tried to tell himself. Taking several deep breaths, Izuku tilted his head back, opened his mouth, and tried to just drop the hair down his throat, hoping it wouldn't be too bad this way. Oh, it was bad. The hair coiled down his throat and stuck there. It left Izuku's throat itching, and him gagging. He could feel it as it just sat at the back of his throat and refused to go down. In fact, Izuku was sure he could reach back there and pull it back out. It moved down about an inch and he gagged before coughing. Want water? Please. All Might quickly handed him his water bottle and Izuku decided to chug it down. The feeling of a hair stuck to the side of your esophagus wasn't exactly a pleasant one. It was a feeling that Izuku wanted to forget soon. Eventually, with a lot of swallowing and water, the hair dislodged and went down his throat and into his stomach. A shudder ran through his body, and Izuku shook his head vigorously. Great, now you should go and get ready. Get ready, sir. Izuku looked over his shoulder at All Might in question. Are we going to go and train together? He excitedly asked. The idea of finally getting to properly train and test this quirk made Izuku giddy with excitement. What? No, for the UA entrance exam. I took the liberty of signing you up. You best be off before you're late. Izuku's smile dropped slightly. The exam? At that moment his father's words rang back into his brain. He wasn't going to be taking the exam. Not until tomorrow, where he'd be talking to Nezu himself and showing off his skills. Izuku could have sworn he told All Might this, but there was a possibility that it could have slipped his mind. This last month was crazy. All Might, I thought. No time to argue, young Tora. You must be going. Remember this, when you want to harness the power of one for all you have to do is clench your butt cheeks and yell smash at the top of your lungs. But I must be going. All Might, I look forward to seeing you. Izuku watched as with a mighty leap All Might flew away from him immediately, with a gust of wind that sent Izuku's curly hair flying back. Then, All Might was gone completely, leaving Izuku standing there. Oh no, maybe it won't be so bad. I mean, it's not like Dad will be watching. Right, only Nezu will. Right, yeah, that makes sense. If Dad were watching the exams he'd tell us. Right. Izuku sucked in a slow deep breath and slowly crouched down to the sandy earth so he was squatting. This is a death sentence once Dad finds out. But it's what All Might wants and I can't disappoint him. So, Izuku let out a slow breath from his lungs and stood up. Let's do this. I'm ready. Against all better judgment and any common sense, Izuku decided to disobey his father. A costly risk. Izuku slipped on his sweatpants and matching jacket that he kept in his bag, over his workout shorts and rushed for UA. I can't believe I'm doing this. Those 6 words just kept playing in his head on repeat over and over again. I can't believe I'm doing this. Izuku felt like he was in a daze as he now stood in front of UAS gates. This building looked humongous as it towered above him. Izuku stepped through the gates and stood there proudly. I can do this. I refuse to let All Might down. I'll explain everything I can to my dad when it's said and done. Izuku took a step forward and accidentally stepped on his shoelace. Next thing he knew he was falling. I'm a failure. Why am I even trying? I should just turn around. Oh, a soft voice suddenly said and someone touched his back. Next thing Izuku knew he was floating. I hope you don't mind me using my quirk on you. A girl suddenly appeared in front of Izuku's vision before she let him go. She was cute with short brown hair cut into a bob that framed her face. Her cheeks were always constantly blushing it seemed and her eyes were big and doe-like. It really helped that they were brown in color, giving her an innocent look. Oh no, of course not. Thank you. Izuku jumped as he felt his face start to heat up from embarrassment. That's an impressive quirk. This time the girl blushed. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in the exam, she quickly said before taking off for the front door. Izuku breathed out for a moment before I can't believe I just talked to a girl. He would have jumped with excitement, but managed to keep his composure. Izuku never spun around faster. For a terrifying second, Izuku worried it was his father. But no, it wasn't. Izuku was face to face with Tenya. It's been so long. Izuku wasted no time hugging his friend. Ada was more than happy to hug him back. Ada and Izuku became friends in grade school. However, when middle school came around they were put into 2 separate schools, so contact has been scarce between the two. They texted on the occasion, but nothing more than that. What are you doing here? Don't tell me you're here for the exam. Ada quickly pushed Izuku back and held onto Izuku's shoulder blades. Why yeah, I am. Izuku gave Ada a shaky smile. It's a bit complicated. Izuku whispered. Tora, that's dangerous. Ada made a wild chopping motion before lightly hitting Izuku's head. You should not be here. I understand you've dreamed of being a hero, but you're... Well, Ada slowed down before dropping it entirely. Ada, I understand you're worried about me, but trust me. I can handle myself out there. He grabbed onto Ada's wrist. Ada looked skeptical. I don't know, Tora. It would be irresponsible of me to allow this. Ada, please, just trust me on this. Izuku whispered in a soft voice. I have to do this. He was 1 second away from begging his old friend not to say anything. Ada never met Izuku's father, thank goodness, but he had connections to the other teachers via his elder brother. Ada sucked in a slow breath through his nose as he thought about it for a moment. Fine, just be careful, Izuku. We don't know what this exam entails. Izuku nodded. Of course, I'm always careful. Ada gave him a look that suggested otherwise. Be careful, Ada said again, this time a little more slowly before finally walking away from Izuku. Izuku breathed in and looked at the doors. I'll be careful. I don't know what All Might's quirk really entails, but I'm ready to try it out. True to his word, All Might had taken it upon himself to sign Izuku up for the exam. He was secretly hoping that he would be denied at the door, but nope. The fact that he managed to do this without my permission or my dad's permission is insane. Izuku thought to himself. He had finished the written exam, but man, he knew if he passed it would be just barely. This was writing on the final combat exam now. Zuku, hey, Zuku, up here. Kaminari's voice suddenly rang around the auditorium and made Izuku's heart stop. Izuku looked up towards Kaminari's voice and sighed out. So much for keeping a low profile. Izuku swiftly ran up the steps and took his seat next to Kaminari. Dude, if you're here then where's Toshi? I don't think Hitchin's gonna like that nickname. It's complicated. Izuku told Kaminari as he reached into his bag and pulled out a beanie. 2 people recognized him, and that was 2 people too many, so it was time for the beanie. It was just a black beanie. He put it just above his eyes and sighed. He won't be coming. Oh, okay then. Kaminari let it drop. All right, listeners. Oh shit. Izuku whispered in shock as he tried to slink into his seat as his uncle Cockatoo came strolling out to the stage in the middle of the auditorium stage. Izuku lowered the beanie even more, to the point that it was slightly obstructing his view. You good, Zuku? Kaminari whispered as he watched Izuku. Why yeah. Kaminari clearly didn't believe him as he continued to stare at Izuku. But eventually he just shrugged and went to listen to present mic. Izuku wished he had more time to bring a notebook so he could write down all this information. It didn't help that he had to keep his muttering to a minimum so as not to get caught. But the gist was that there were 3 robots. Easy, medium, and hard. Easy robots were worth 1 point, medium worth 2, and hard were worth 3 points. Present Mike was starting to move on away from the robots when Ada suddenly shot up from his seat. Hold on. Oh no. Don't tell me he thinks this will be too hard on me. You've failed to explain what the 4th robot does, Ada urgently declared. A few scant replies mumbled in agreement with him. Izuku couldn't help but blink in surprise. How could I have missed it? He wondered as he bit on one of his knuckles to stop himself from muttering. The more paranoid part of himself knew that they were keeping that robot a secret for a reason. Oh, that old thing. You don't need to worry about it. It's a 0-pointer, meaning it's worth absolutely 0 points. Then why have it? Izuku narrowed his eyes as he stared at the robot silhouette in question. There's got to be something more to it. Izuku hummed in his thoughts. That was when Kaminari nudged him. You good, man? You've been gnawing on your index finger for a while now. Kaminari leaned in and whispered softly. He looked fully concerned at Izuku as he asked this. Izuku took his finger out of his mouth. He could feel the indents of where his teeth were digging in. I'm fine. I'm just nervous and trying not to mutter. Yeah, I'm nervous too, man. Here, just chew on my pencil. Kaminari offered the wooden pencil up and Izuku took it. Thanks. Izuku then started to gnaw on the pencil. The feeling of his teeth sinking into the wood was a welcomed one at that moment. He just hoped he wouldn't swallow lead or splinters. Oh God, what am I doing? Is it too late to back out? Maybe I should. At one point during his talk, Present Mike turned in Izuku's direction. He knows it's me. I should just walk out. Present Mike then turned away, enthusiastically pointing to the screen, explaining how many points they needed to get in order to pass and how many seats were there to fill. There are only 40 seats for the hero course in UA. That was a low percentage of passing. The pencil snapped in half inside of his mouth. Izuku spat out the splitters and lead into the palm of his hand. Oh geez, Izuku thought before he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Is it too late to back out? No, I can do this. I have to do this. For All Might. And it's time. I wish you all the best of luck. I can do this. I will do this. Hey man, good luck. Okay. Kaminari offered up a closed fist for a fist bump. I'm rooting for you. He smiled at Izuku. Izuku returned the fist bump in full, though his hands were shaky. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in the hero course. You, Hitchin, and me. Then, they went their separate ways as they had to go to different gyms. He wondered if it was because they went to the same middle school. That was something All Might needed to know in order to sign Izuku up after all. So, off he went. There are so many people waiting at the doors that it made Izuku a little overwhelmed. He started to pace around in a circle, his muttering finally catching up to him as he muttered and muttered and muttered. There was just so much all at once. The fear, the excitement, and the sheer thrill of it all. It was almost like the sludge villain all over again, only 10 times more intense. It was exhilarating. Tora. Suddenly a hand was on his shoulder and he looked at Ida. Calm down, you're getting looks, Ida whispered to him. Sure enough, when Izuku looked, he saw that people were staring at him. Why wouldn't they? He almost wanted to laugh with how nervous he was. Are you sure you can handle this? If you can't, you can just back out. It's fine. Huh? The laugh came out a little more aggressive than Izuku would like to admit. Nope, I made a commitment. He put both of his fists on his hips proudly. You're putting yourself in danger. Ida reprimanded him. As he spoke, Ida pulled his glasses off and started to wipe them on his shirt. Izuku, I'm the only one here that knows the truth. You're quirkless. You're my friend, yes, but I can ignore this. Those robots. Look, Ida dropped his glasses by accident and both of them bent down to pick them up off of the ground. The glasses gravitated into Izuku's hand in less than a second. Both boys stared at the glasses. You were saying? Izuku couldn't help but grin as he handed Ida his glasses back. When did it manifest? You're putting yourself in danger. Izuku clutched at the side of his head at the sudden voice that reverberated through his head. It felt like it was piercing his skull, cracking it in two. But like before, when it happened before the sludge villain attack, the pain was gone as soon as it happened. There was no intense ringing this time though, but that didn't mean it was welcome. Izuku swallowed a lump and looked at Ida as confusion rose to his mind. Izuku never got to finish his sentence as there was a buzzer that rang so loud that it made the ground shake just a little. Then the doors to the gym opened up like a grand curtain ready to start a show. Hey, good luck in there. Izuku skipped a few steps before turning and grinning at Ida. I'll see you in the hero course. Izuku, wait. Izuku took off full speed inside the gym. All Might never mentioned that he could levitate objects. I don't think he can. I would remember that. Meaning, this is my quirk. No, I've never had a quirk. It doesn't matter right now. Let's see what this new power can do. Izuku charged in head first with the rest of the crowd. Most if not everyone was already laying claims to robots as they took them down quickly and efficiently with their quirks. Izuku was impressed and wished that he had time to analyze some of these quirks for himself. He didn't have the time. A robot skirted right in front of him. Izuku nearly slid to a stop as he stared at the massive thing. For a moment fear was instilled into his heart as he stared this robot down. I have an attraction quirk and it's part of All Might's quirk. He raised both of his hands up. He remembered Ada's glasses, how they just flew into his hands. If I can attract things to myself, then it's only logical that I can attract things I reach out for or things I want. He thought, and he reached both of his hands out for the robot. Izuku knew exactly what he wanted from this beast. He wanted its engine. There was a rattling from deep inside the beast as the robot's body started to freeze and stutter. Then it happened. An electrical explosion of oil and wires as the engine was violently ripped out of its chest cavity. Dodge. Izuku dropped his hands and jumped to the side as the engine came barreling towards him. The engine dropped dead at his feet the moment he stopped focusing on it. Holy shit, I just did that. The robot fell down. Wake me up when something interesting happens. Aizawa grunted as he snuggled into his sleeping bag. Hazashi had gifted it to him as a joke, but the joke was on Hazashi because Aizawa uses it every day. All the teachers stood inside the monitor room. It was that time of year again, the time to watch applicants fight against robots and determine who was the best. I must say, Nedzu turned in his chair, a cup of piping hot tea in his little furry paw. These applicants this year are something else. Some of their quirks are quite impressive, I'll say. Toshinori nodded in agreement as he stood off to the side watching the cameras with a weird glint in his eyes. A glint that Aizawa didn't like. He's planning something with Izuku. But what? Aizawa wondered in his thoughts as he watched the back of Toshinori's head. Hazashi was the next one to speak as he shoved his face in front of Aizawa's. Come on, Shu. Don't you want to see the new potential applicants? I'll see them in my classroom. Aizawa grumbled. No point in possibly getting attached now. Don't be like that, Shu. Look, I see the Ida boy. He's really kicking some robot butt. Aizawa could feel Nimuri's grin. It's all a turn on. She wiggled in her spot. Whoa, look at that kid. He just ripped the robot's head off. Hazashi happily exclaimed. Explosion boy looks promising. Vlad spoke up. Aizawa sighed and just wriggled deeper into his sleeping bag. They'll entertain themselves for the next few minutes. Now, that's funny, Toshinori suddenly said, and for some reason that caught Aizawa's attention. He cracked an eye open and waited. When? I thought. Toshinori sounded confused and Hazashi came over to Toshinori. You're watching that one? Hazashi inquired as he pointed at the screen. Yeah, his, quirk. He just ripped the motor out of the robot. I wasn't expecting it. Oh, yeah, it looks like he has some sort of telekinesis quirk. He just did it again. He looks, Shu. Aizawa opened his other eye. What? He lazily drawled out. Am I crazy? Is that your son? Hazashi inquired as he pointed at the screen. Kashinori made a noise. It sounded like he had just swallowed a golf ball. It better not be. I told my children that they weren't taking the exams. Aizawa started to remove himself from the sleeping bag. This, of course, caused the others to crowd around the screen in question. Nimiri started to squirm in delight. Yeah, the beanie is slipping off. I'm seeing green. It must be Izuku. Oh, the disobedience. Nothing gets me turned on more. Move. Aizawa shoved himself past the other teachers, so he was now in front of the monitor that they were all looking at. Izuku knows better than to disobey me. Besides, I told him it was way too dangerous to do the entrance exam. Aizawa hissed as he crossed his arms over his chest. They're mistaken, Aizawa thought as he scanned the screen. Finally, he saw it. The kid was running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Yet, any robot that came his way. He was using his quirk, some sort of object attraction quirk, to violently rip the robot's motor engine out of its metal body. Yes, the body type could be Izuku. Yes, the beanie was slipping, showing green hair, but the hair didn't look curly. And yes, Izuku owned those exact same clothes, but it wasn't Izuku. It's not Izuku. He doesn't have a right. As Aizawa was talking, the beanie slipped off fully when the kid was sprinting. Curly hair, green curly hair, and freckles. So many freckles. This was Izuku. His face was towards the camera, so there was no denying it now. What the fuck? Aizawa felt his hair start to rise. He shouldn't have been able to get in. You need permission to do the exam, and I never gave him permission. Aizawa snarled as his anger started to rise. Not only that, but we should have been able to detect his application based on his last name alone. Nedzu hummed as he swiftly turned towards his computer and started to type away. Let me see real quick. Aizawa's hair lowered as he leaned in to watch the screen. I don't understand, he grumbled. Where did that quirk come from? Another robot crossed paths with Izuku, but someone with a naval laser managed to defeat it before Izuku could. Aizawa's eyes flickered towards the points. Izuku had only 6 points to his name. It wasn't a lot, but still, Aizawa didn't like this. Not one bit. Izuku betrayed him, and not only that, he's been hiding the fact that he had a quirk. He was quirkless this morning. I know that. If he had an object attraction quirk, I would know. He's never used it around me. Ah, that would explain it. Nedzu suddenly spoke up, making everyone look at him. It seems Izuku went under his pseudo-last name of Tora, not Aizawa. Let's see who signed the permission form if you didn't. Nedzu never got to that part. The time was ticking by, and it was time for the zero-pointers to emerge. It was all part of their plan, to test and see who would react best out of fear, to help those when they may or may not need it. Obviously, mostly everyone in the gym with Izuku went the opposite way. The robots were worth 0 points and they were massive. No one wanted to risk getting hurt. Aizawa could see it. Izuku was freaking out. But there was a problem. Someone was stuck. Help me. Izuku, who was ready to flee and never look back, turned his head to see the girl that had helped him earlier. She was calling out for anyone who would listen as she reached out towards the fleeting crowd. I'm stuck, she cried out in fear. Her lower body had been pinned between a piece of rubble from a building that the robot knocked into in the ground. That robot is getting closer to her, she'll be pulverized. Izuku came to the conclusion fairly quickly. The girl was doing her best to wiggle free, but even still, it was like the sludge villain all over again. Only this time, Izuku had the advantage. Izuku ran for the girl. Hang on, he cried out as he reached out for her. He wanted to use his newfound quirk to yank her out and take off running. But he came to a realization. I'd have to get the debris off of her first and foremost. That'll take too much time. She'll never get out in time. No, Izuku clenched his fist in determination. I'll just have to take it down myself. A power surged violently through his whole body. He could feel it just under his skin, ready to burst. He didn't care about the points, not when someone's life was on the line. When you want to harness the power of one for all you have to do is clench your butt cheeks and yell, smash. Aizawa was a strong man. He prided himself in being stoic and unable to show his true emotions even in the most serious of times. But for the first time in his life, Aizawa Shouta felt faint. His legs nearly gave out when he saw Izuku jump up and punch the zero-pointer. Oh, but that wasn't the worst. The punch was strong enough to smash in the zero-pointer's face and send it crumpling back like it was made of paper. It was also strong enough to break Izuku's arm, and the jump broke both of his legs. Stop. Aizawa had actually screamed out, his hair raised and his eyes fully red in color. He had tried to subconsciously stop Izuku's quirk before it got this far. Izuku went limp in the air before he started to fall. The attack had left him unconscious. For Aizawa, he thought Izuku was falling in slow motion. He thought, oh my god, Hitoshi is going to be crushed. As Izuku was plummeting towards his death, the breath that Aizawa had been holding in left his mouth when two things happened. A boy with engines in his legs had leapt to Izuku, using the fallen debris to his advantage. He wrapped Izuku in a hug in an attempt to shield him from the ground. That was when the girl that was originally stuck managed to free herself and came to both of their aids. She floated up to them and managed to quickly smack the other boy on the shoulder right before they were to hit the unforgiving ground. They floated there for several seconds before the girl released her quirk and all three of them gently hit the ground. Holy shit. Is Izuku okay? Hisashi inquired, but Aizawa was, strangely, having a hard time hearing Hisashi at that moment. We gotta send recovery girl in there. 3 broken limbs. For Aizawa, Hisashi started to fade out as he stared directly at Toshinori. Smash. Izuku screamed smash before he struck the zero-pointer. That quirk was almost directly like All Might's. He was training with All Might. Aizawa had Toshinori in his sights and it seemed Toshinori knew this. Toshinori was doing everything he could to avoid eye contact with Aizawa at that moment. In fact, Toshinori was inching for the door. Izuku trained with All Might. All Might saved Izuku. Izuku's moves were a lot like All Might's. Izuku needs permission to do the exam. Aizawa's head slowly turned towards Netsu's monitor. From where he was standing he could see it. The reason why Izuku's name was never caught. It was under Tora, and Aizawa could say with certainty by looking at the photocopy of the information slip that Izuku did not fill anything out. That wasn't Izuku's handwriting. At the bottom of the photocopy was who signed granting permission, Toshinori Yagi. Aizawa snarled, turning towards Toshinori. Ew. Both of his fists were clenched to his side. I had no clue. Toshinori whispered with wide eyes. I swear to God. He was quirkless this morning. Aizawa felt his upper lip raise a bit as he took a step towards Toshinori. His capture weapon started to rise around him and slither into his hands. Aizawa was itching for a fight. Toshinori put his hands up in defense. Let's talk about this in private. Please, I know you're a reasonable man. My son has 3 broken limbs. 3, and you want to talk. Aizawa took another step towards Toshinori. Shoo, maybe you should calm down before you do anything. Hisashi came up and pulled on one of Aizawa's arms to bring him back just a step. Nimuri came over just the same and pulled on his other arm. Both of them kept Aizawa back from potentially attacking the #1 hero in the world. Shouta, look, Izuku's fine. Nimuri pointed towards the screen in question. Aizawa looked over his shoulder and saw that recovery girl had made her way into the gym. With one big smooch to the forehead, Izuku's bones started to heal and reset. It was nice to see Izuku whole again. His bones went back into place. He was going to be sore for a day or two, but otherwise he was okay. Somebody tell recovery girl to send him to the infirmary. Aizawa grunted as he nodded towards the screen. Yui turned and pointed at Toshinori. Teacher's lounge, now. He hissed between clenched teeth while pointing out of the room. Toshinori nodded. Okay. He kept his hands up and slowly backed out of the doorway, never once taking his eyes off of Aizawa. Despite his anger, Aizawa couldn't help but think, smart man, keep Izuku with recovery girl. Nobody else talked to him until I had the chance to talk to him. Aizawa growled as he took his arms away from Hisashi and Nimuri. I'll be back. He stalked out of the room. As he walked up towards the teacher lounge, Aizawa only felt rage course through his veins. The image of Izuku breaking his bones played in his head over and over again. The half-second he feared that Izuku was dead as he limply fell through the air. Aizawa approached the door to the teacher's lounge and felt his hands start to tremble in rage. Finally, he threw the door open so hard that he was afraid he broke it. What the fuck was that back there? Aizawa hissed as he approached Toshinori. Aizawa grabbed Toshinori's tie and forced the elder hero down to his level so they were eye to eye. My son was quirkless when he left this morning. Do you think I'm dumb? You've been training with Izuku for almost a year. You knew I was training him. If you call what you did training, that was just glorified community service at best. You didn't teach him any fighting moves, or self-defense techniques, or how to use the quirk you gave him. The most you did was almost give him tetanus, although at this point I would have preferred the tetanus. Aizawa, I had no clue he was your son. He kept your privacy and his real last name a complete and utter secret from me. If I would have known, I would have reconsidered. What does it entail? The quirk. Tell me, I want to know everything. Aizawa hissed as he let go of Toshinori's tie. He allowed Toshinori to stand up straight. Toshinori rubbed his neck uncomfortably. I can't. Toshinori didn't get to say another word. Aizawa turned. Both ends of his capture weapons wrapped around Toshinori's skinny neck. That wasn't a suggestion. Aizawa hissed between clenched teeth. You are going to tell me everything about this quirk. I know you've already gone over your limit for today, Toshinori. I read the news. I will beat your ass from here to next Friday if you even try to refuse me again. That was my son broken on the floor. My son. No quirk is without its downside. What's yours? Aizawa's hair rose up above his shoulders and his eyes turned red as he stared Toshinori down. Toshinori's mouth twitched. Aizawa, I am truly sorry. His voice wheezed from the pressure that the capture scarf was putting him under. It wasn't painful, yet, but one wrong word and Toshinori was going to choke. Toshinori felt blood well up in his throat and had no choice but to cough it up. But I can't, it has to be a secret. Aizawa tightened his capture weapon around Toshinori's neck. I don't care. Aizawa seethed in anger. You're going to tell me, Toshinori, I bashed a guy's head into the pavement for my children's safety. Don't think I won't do the same to you. Toshinori's eyes went wide behind their sunken sockets. Toshinori sounded short of breath as his face started to turn red. His big hands went up towards the captured weapon out of desperation. Can't. I love my children, Toshinori. They are my world, my everything. Adopting them was the happiest day of my life. And one of them nearly died because of you. Aizawa cut himself off and quickly put his hand to his mouth. He could feel it. Tears building behind his eyes, threatening to overpour and leave. His eyes were burning, but that may have been because of his quirk. Aizawa lowered his hand. So you better start talking. This is the last chance I'm giving you, Toshinori. Aizawa felt a tear leave his eye as he stared Toshinori down. There was a silence between the two men. It's Toshinori coughed out, leaving blood flecks on Aizawa's scarf. It's called One for All. It's a quirk that gets more powerful with each user. My master passed it on to me and I passed it on to Izuku. Aizawa relaxed his shoulders just a bit before he let his scarf go limp around Toshinori's neck. Okay, why him? Aizawa used his finger to quickly wipe the tears out of his eyes. I saw myself in him and I know he can do it. He can rise up and be the next symbol of peace. You didn't actually tell him that, did you? Of course I did. Fucking idiot. That's too much pressure at once. Getting a new quirk and being told that he is going to be the next symbol of peace. No, I know Izuku. He'll be upset that he's not immediately great at this quirk. Speaking of this quirk, did you ever train him on how to use it? I didn't have time when I gave it to him this morning. The scarf was back around Toshinori's neck, causing the elder to gag out in surprise. Let me get this whole story straight. You, a celebrity that my son idolizes, decide to privately train my underage son for a year and force him to keep this all quiet. And when the training is done, you put Izuku in the entrance exam and put yourself as his guardian because you gave him a quirk this morning and didn't even bother training him on how to use it. To say Aizawa was pissed was an understatement. He was so mad he had spittle flying from his mouth at the end. When you word it that way, take it back. What? The quirk? Take it back. If you're too busy to properly train my son, a dangerous quirk that you gifted him, then I don't want him to have it. Aizawa, it doesn't work that way. Once it's been passed on, it's been passed. I can't take it back. Toshinori wheezed. Are you fucking kidding me, Yagi? Aizawa had half a mind to just strangle Toshinori here and now. He was too stupid to live, a danger to society at this point. It was tempting, but he restrained himself. Fine, fine. Aizawa reeled his capture scarf back around his neck. His hair still stayed high above his head and his eyes were really burning at this point. You better clear your schedule, because you're about to be unbusy. Aizawa allowed his hair to lower and he blinked. Because you made the decision to give my son this quirk, you're solely responsible for training him until he learns it. Oh, and don't think I'll be giving you privacy anytime soon either. I'll be there just as well. You made your bed, Toshinori. Now you get to lay in it. Aizawa, no, now because of you everything has been messed up. I don't even know if he'll be admitted into UA at this point. You better hope he gets in. He saved a girl. He'll get in. Toshinori, he was supposed to meet with Nedzu tomorrow. We had a test set up for him and everything. This looks horrible. What you did very well could shift Nedzu's view on Izuku. I hope you know that you messed up, big time. There was a knock on the teacher's lounge door and Hizashi cautiously opened the door just a crack so he could peek in. There was a moment as both Aizawa and Toshinori looked at him. Izuku is awake. His arm is in a sling, but aside from that his other limbs seem to be fine. Hizashi told Aizawa. He was keeping his distance, which was probably for the best. I'll be there in a moment, Hizashi. Thank you. I expected the lounge to be destroyed, or to see you mutilating Toshi. Blood is hard to wash out of clothes. Besides, Aizawa turned away from Toshinori. We're done here. You best stay out of my line of sight for the rest of the day, Toshinori. I might change my mind on hurting you. Now if you don't mind, I have a child to yell at. Izuku stood by the open window of the infirmary. He peered down wondering if the drop would kill him or not. It might break my leg, he thought as he adjusted the sling on his arm. Izuku could feel the dread fill into the pit of his stomach. The dread telling him that he was absolutely fucked and should be planning his own funeral now. His dad knew. Oh, Izuku didn't need anybody to tell him that. He could tell by the atmosphere that surrounded all of UA. There was murder in the air. This would be so much easier if I had a capture scarf. The door of the infirmary slammed open. Izuku screamed and all he saw were red eyes and raised black hair. At that very moment he decided fuck it and attempted to jump out of the window. Yeah, that plan went as well as, well, the entrance exam. His father's capture weapon got to him before he could climb up the windowsill. Izuku gasped as the scarf wrapped tightly around his torso, forcing his good arm to the side and his bad arm to squish painfully against his chest. Why wait? Panic settled in as Izuku fell onto his back. Inch by inch he was pulled against the floor. Dad, I'm sensing you might be upset. You deliberately disobeyed me. You broke 3 limbs, Izuku. 3. Please, just let me expo. What the fuck were you thinking? Aizawa hissed between his tightly clenched teeth. Izuku made an attempt to stop his father, but all he did was just pitifully kick his feet as he tried, and failed, to get back up from the ground. Inch by inch he was being pulled in and deliberately. His father wanted him to squirm. PL, please don't kill me. I know it looks bad. His father stopped pulling him in. That terrified Izuku more than being pulled in. It looks bad, Aizawa repeated in a slow tone. Although was all Izuku could say before Aizawa yanked him, and before Izuku knew it he slid directly to Aizawa's feet. Aizawa then pulled on his capture weapon. Izuku felt all the air in his lungs get squeezed out of him from that one tug alone. This doesn't just look bad, Izuku. I'm sorry. Izuku wheezed while his legs started to instinctively kick against the floor. I'm sorry. I swear. I can explain. Okay, suddenly Izuku was off of the ground as his dad held him up with his capture weapon. The two of them were face to face now. Izuku could see just how pissed his father was. This wasn't like the sludge villain. This was a different kind of anger. One that Izuku couldn't properly place. It was an anger that his father had never expressed to him before, and it terrified Izuku down to his core. Explain. Now, I will. Good. Oh, and before you give me some half-baked lie, Toshinori already explained that he gave you the quirk. So, let me ask, why would you willingly take a quirk from someone and not even think about the consequences? How'd he know I got it from All Might? Izuku gasped out as he felt a sharp pain dig into his side from the capture scarf. He could barely breathe, only given just enough room to let in swift and shallow breaths. I just wanted to be a hero. He managed to rasp out weakly. I just wanted a chance. I was giving you a chance. Nedzu was going to give you a chance. No, I mean a chance to be normal, to fit in. You don't know what it's like to be quirkless. His father opened his mouth, clearly ready to dispute this. For once in his life, Izuku cut his father off. No, I know exactly what you're going to say, Dad. I fight quirkless. Or Hitoshi has to fight quirkless. No, it's not the same. You have a quirk. Hitchin has a quirk. I don't have a quirk. Well, I didn't. Now I have a quirk. Aizawa's mouth shut with an audible snap of his teeth. You said it yourself, Dad. Nedzu was apprehensive about me because of my quirklessness. Aizawa felt his lips turn down into a frown. Slowly, he placed Izuku back on the ground. He then reeled his scarf back into his hands. Izuku let out an immediate breath of relief once he was able to breathe normally again. He wouldn't say it, but he almost felt like he was going to pass out for a second there. Aizawa crossed his arms over his chest and scowled down at his son. Fine, I can see your reasoning there, and maybe it's my fault for being so blunt with you ... but that doesn't excuse what you did. You still accepted a quirk without knowing the consequences. This quirk is dangerous. Anyone with a brain can see that, and because of that I now have to help train you to learn how to use it. Your body is barely able to handle this power. Izuku looked down at his shoes. I know. That was when 2 hands suddenly cradled the sides of his face before he was forced to look back up at his father. I thought you died, Izuku. There was a moment of silence before Izuku placed his head on Aizawa's chest. I think using the telekinesis quirk combined with the punch and jumping over did it. Where did that telekinesis quirk come from? Dunno. I didn't even know I had it until it caused Ada's glasses to fly into my hand. Aizawa frowned. He didn't like the sound of that. Not one bit. Now, for my next question. Aizawa moved on from the subject and grabbed onto both of Izuku's shoulders. Why the fuck would you squander your chance with Nedzu and go to the entrance exam against my personal wishes? I told both you and Hitoshi that the entrance exam was way too dangerous. Not only that, but you just got this weird quirk that Toshinori gave you and you decided that the exam would be the best way to test it out. No, that's not really. I didn't want to. I didn't want to upset All Might. He sprung it on me, and I know I shouldn't have gone, but I just wanted to show him that I can do it. I didn't think that you'd be watching. Aizawa took his hands off of Izuku's shoulders and sucked in a slow and deep breath. Not all the blame is on you, some is also on me. Most of it is on Toshinori. Why would you get any blame? Because I've known you've been training with Toshinori for months now. I knew he was planning something, but I didn't know what. I should have either put a stop to it or demanded to know what he was doing. If it were up to me, Izuku, you would be giving Toshinori that quirk back this second. Izuku bit his lip. The idea of giving back the quirk so soon after getting it made him unbelievably disappointed. However, Toshinori has gracefully informed me that once the quirk has been passed on, there's no way for him to take it back. So, we're going to have to train you and get you into quirk counseling, and we now have to pray you get into UA after this stunt. Wait, Izuku put a hand up. What do you mean we're going to have to train you? If you think for a damn second that I'm allowing you to keep being alone with Toshinori after this, you're wrong. Neither you nor Toshinori can be trusted, so I'm going to help train you. Besides, I'm probably your best bet here. That quirk is dangerous, and until you get a good enough handle on it, I don't want you using it unless we're training. Understood. Izuku swallowed hard but nodded all the same. Okay, that's fair. Good. Also, you're grounded. Izuku, do you want to try that again? Aizawa now leaned in so they were almost eye to eye. Sorry. He ducked his head down and looked down at the shoes. The fact that you even thought you weren't going to be grounded is astonishing to me. Aizawa narrowed his eyes as he put his hands on his hips. Also, since I'm here, give me your phone. Aizawa brought his hand out and made a give me gesture with his right hand. You aren't going to need it for a while. Izuku grumbled under his breath before fishing into his pockets. He eventually pulled out his cell phone and placed it into his father's palm. Thank you. After a moment, Aizawa put the phone into his own back pocket. And when we get home, you can say goodbye to your TV and laptop. Oh, and you won't be going anywhere without telling me. No more spontaneous gas station trips or secret training with All Might. Izuku bit his lip to keep from protesting, knowing that if he did it'd only get worse. Aizawa interlocked his fingers before cracking them. I'm leaving Hitoshi up to you. Consider that a punishment in itself as well. I'm sure this'll go over real well with him. What the fuck happened? Those were the first words out of Hitoshi's mouth when Izuku and Aizawa walked through the front door. Hitoshi's eyes were wide as he looked at Izuku's bandaged arm that rested in a sling. Izuku's grounded until I say otherwise. That's what happened. Aizawa responded as he immediately walked past Hitoshi. He went straight for the coffee pot. All he had to do was press a button and his coffee pot started to brew. Hitoshi walked over to Izuku. What did you do? He whispered to his brother in a soft voice. Izuku looked past his brother and into the kitchen where his father stood there waiting by his coffee pot. Aizawa just stared back at Izuku with a raised eyebrow, but he said nothing. It's nothing. I just broke my arm. Izuku looked away from his father and now away from Hitoshi as he just stared at the ceiling. And maybe both of my legs as well. Izuku might as well as told Hitoshi that he snapped his neck in two by the look of absolute horror that etched on Hitoshi's face. But those were healed, and my arm is healed too. Just not all the way. Recovery girl couldn't heal at all. Hitoshi cut him off. Recovery girl. You went to UA. Aizawa chuckled and grabbed his finished coffee. He started to pour the hot liquid into a mug. Here we go. Both boys looked at their father before back at each other. Yeah, I did. With a slow breath in, Izuku held onto his arm in the sling as he looked at Hitoshi. Hitoshi's eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. Why would you go to UA? We're not supposed to go till tomorrow. There was suddenly a loud slurping, and once again both boys looked at their father. Aizawa was leaning against the counter, obnoxiously slurping the top of his coffee. He's loving this, was all Izuku could think as he watched Aizawa for a few more seconds. Izuku tapped his foot for a moment. This was a band-aid, one that Izuku was trying to slowly peel off, but now it was time to just rip it off. I have a quirk. Hitoshi's face crumbled. No you don't. Hitoshi then forced out a laugh. You almost got me there, but come on, you're quirkless, Zuchin. No, I have a quirk ... now. No, Izuku, that's not funny. Aizawa's obnoxious slurping stopped dead. Izuku's mind stalled for a good second or two as he stared at Hitoshi. Did he just call me Izuku? Never in their years of being brothers has Hitoshi ever called Izuku by his full first name. It was almost surreal to hear it. Izuku ran his free hand through his hair. Sorry, but I'm not joking. We've discussed this. It's impossible for you to have a quirk. Izuku blinked. When did we discuss this, Hitchin? Hitoshi paused for a moment and then cleared his throat. I dunno, he mumbled and ran his own fingers through his thick hair. A month ago at the dinner table, right, Dad? Hitoshi looked back at their father. 3 doctors and whatnot. Izuku nodded. Right, well, their diagnosis wasn't wrong. I am supposed to be quirkless, but I'm not. Hitoshi walked over and grabbed a mug for himself. He was shaking his head the whole time, clearly trying to deny it in his mind. Izuku felt like he was slowly pulling the band-aid off again, so Izuku decided to try to be as honest as he can, without revealing that it was All Might that gave him the quirk. Hitoshi grabbed the coffee pot and poured the rest of the coffee into his own cup. Hitoshi, someone gave me a quirk. There was a smash, as Hitoshi dropped the pot of coffee on the floor. Shit. Aizawa was quick and grabbed the nearest towel. Aizawa quickly got to the floor and picked the shards up with a towel. He was thankful that Hitoshi just emptied the coffee pot. When Aizawa stood, the first thing he noticed was the silence and the fact that Hitoshi hadn't moved from his spot from the coffee pot. He was just standing there, staring at the countertop. He looked murderous. Then Aizawa turned his head to Izuku. Izuku's eyes were completely blank, void of life and white in color. His glassy eyes just stared at nothing while his mouth hung slightly open. Brainwashing. Hitoshi ... let him go. Aizawa could only hiss as he threw the towel, glass shards and all, into the trash can. We've discussed this. You can't just brainwash people when you're angry with them. Hitoshi's fist shook at his sides, his brow furrowed, and he folded his lips. He then started to violently shake his head. No, I won't do it, he whispered. I won't go back. I can't go back. I don't want to go back. You can't make me. A little 5-year-old Hitoshi Shinsu screamed at Aizawa as he tried to desperately flee with Izuku. The memory is still fresh in Aizawa's mind. Hitoshi, you aren't going back. Aizawa reached out to touch Hitoshi's shoulder, but surprising Hitoshi jerked away. No, he'll find us. If Izuku sought him out, he'll find us for sure. I can't go back. It was like Hitoshi regressed, like he was 5 again. All of those fears clearly rushed back to him. Hitoshi started to smack the sides of his head with his closed fists. They're going to take us. Well, Aizawa, now acting quick before Hitoshi could hurt himself, grabbed onto both of Hitoshi's wrists and held them still. Nobody is taking you or Izuku anywhere. Do you hear me? If they even attempt, they're going to have to go through me. That is not an easy feat. And you can relax. It wasn't who you think it was. I can assure you that. Still ... This is the first time I'm hearing of a he. Aizawa kept his thoughts a secret for now. He'd question Hitoshi about it when he wasn't so distressed. Hitoshi bit his lip and vigorously started to shake his head. He shook his head so hard that his hair flew with the movement. No, it was. He's the only one. It was All Might. Aizawa said in a soft voice. Izuku, I'm sorry. I know you wanted to keep it a secret, but we can't. He turned to Izuku, who was still under brainwashing, and apologized. That was when he activated Erasure on Izuku. Izuku blinked before shaking his head for a moment. All Might. Hitoshi breathed out, his eyes wet with unshed tears. All Might. I don't understand. His quirk is super strength or super punch. Nobody knows what his quirk is, until now. It's called One for All. Izuku joined in. I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd freak out this badly. I know it's a shock to hear, but it is All Might's quirk. I never went to. I don't know who. All for One. Hitoshi whispered in shock as his eyes grew wide with fear. No, One for All. Aizawa corrected him. Apparently, from what I was told about after the fact, it gets stronger with each user, and Izuku here is the 9th one. Trust me, I'm not happy about this either, Hitoshi, but Izuku can't give the quirk back to Toshinori, so we're stuck with this. Hitoshi licked his dry lips before shaking his head. He looked at Izuku. He just shook his head. You may have just doomed us all, was the last thing Hitoshi said before he walked away and out of the kitchen. His coffee was now long forgotten on the countertop. Wow, Aizawa whispered. I had no clue. Clearly we need to up therapy for him. 3 times a month is excessive, however. I should talk to him, alone as well. As Aizawa rambled to himself, he turned and grabbed the broom to sweep up any glass shards left behind from the coffee pot. While Aizawa swept the floor, he noticed that Izuku was just standing there, and for a moment he wondered if Hitoshi had brainwashed him again. No, it didn't seem like it. He was staring hard at the countertop. His jaw set and his lips pursed. All for one, Izuku whispered. Aizawa rolled his eyes. One for all. No, Izuku shut his eyes and squeezed them shut while rubbing at his temples. It just sounds. I think I need to lay down, Izuku whispered as he turned away from his dad briskly. Several pain gasps left his mouth as he squeezed the bridge of his nose. I'm suddenly not feeling that hot. Before Aizawa could stop him, Izuku walked away from the kitchen. This just left Aizawa alone trying to figure out what the fuck was going on with his 2 sons. Aizawa gave Hitoshi space before confronting him. 2 hours felt long enough. So, cautiously, Aizawa knocked on the door. There wasn't a response from the other side. So, Aizawa turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. Opening the door, Aizawa knocked again. Hitoshi was lying on his stomach, earbuds in his ears. A pillow was under his chest while he stared at his phone. Music, metal by the sounds of it, was playing loudly through his earphones. His eyes darted from his phone to Aizawa. Hitoshi shut his eyes before sighing out loudly and yanking out one earbud. I don't want to talk about it, was the first thing out of Hitoshi's mouth. Sorry, but not talking about it isn't an option. Aizawa came in and shut the door behind him. He sat on the edge of Hitoshi's bed. Hitoshi grumbled and shifted so he was now lying lazily on his side. Dad, I appreciate your concern. Good, then you'll listen to me. Aizawa leaned back so his back was to the wall. What's the problem? Why do you think we're doomed? Hitoshi's mouth turned down into a frown. Call it intuition. I'll call it what it really is. Paranoia. Hitoshi swallowed. There was an audible click in his throat as his Adam's apple bobbed with the movement. I thought I was over it. Really, I can handle the nightmares that plague my mind every night. But I'm scared again. Because Izuku did something dumb. It's more than that. Hitoshi, I agree. Izuku did something insanely dumb, more than dumb, moronic actually. But nobody is going to be banging down the front door over this. They'd be fools to try anyways. His words did nothing to ease Hitoshi's mood. Hitoshi kept the frown on his face as he picked at the end of his pillow. Be honest with me. Do we need to up your therapy appointments? Hitoshi scrunched his nose at that. I see that therapist more than he sees his family. I don't think so. Aizawa absent-mindedly reached over and placed a hand on Hitoshi's head. Okay, he breathed out softly. Hitoshi, I want to help you. You went through something horrific 8 years ago. You watched your family being slaughtered in front of you in the lab. Hitoshi winced at the mention of the lab. but I still want to help ease your mind. You can't. Forgetting the lab for a minute, I still see the man with axe hands in my mind sometimes. He said he was going to come after me if I tried to run. I ran, and I still expect him to come through that door. Aizawa ran his fingers through Hitoshi's fluffy hair. Hitoshi leaned into Aizawa's touch absent-mindedly. Aizawa shut his eyes as he thought to himself for a moment. I know it's not much, but if it'll ease your mind even just a little bit, what if I placed cameras around the house, both inside and out? Hitoshi perked his head up a little bit at that. Cameras. Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about for a while now anyways. I'm thinking of motion-censored ones that'll stream to my phone. This way, when I'm away on missions or off with UA, I'll be able to know you two are safe. Hitoshi licked his dry lips as he thought about it. That doesn't sound too bad actually. Yeah, I thought the same thing. Also, this way I can watch your dumbass brother and make sure he doesn't try and sneak away without me knowing. A snort left Hitoshi's nose at this. Wow, he's grounded, isn't he? Oh, you have no fucking idea. We can only hope he gets into UA. I hope he does. I hope I do too. As long as you stick to your training, I'm sure you'll do fine. Hitoshi hummed at this as he laid back down on his stomach. I'm nervous. His voice was muffled through his pillow. Not illogical. Aizawa sat there for a moment or two before standing up. I guess I should start looking for cameras online. Are you good by yourself? Yeah, I should be fine. And it shouldn't be said, but if you ever feel unsafe, just tell me. Hitoshi looked up at his dad with soft eyes. I know, he whispered back to Aizawa before placing his earbud into his ear and resuming his metal music. Aizawa turned and walked out of Hitoshi's bedroom. Once the door clicked shut, Aizawa leaned his back against Hitoshi's door before rubbing vigorously at his eyes. God, what a day. Aizawa sighed out and looked up at the ceiling. He didn't look up for long when he felt something rub against his leg. Looking down, Aizawa smiled at Tora. Hey, kitty. Leaning down, he picked his cat up. Aizawa frowned. Tora felt lighter than usual. Have you lost weight? We can't have that. Aizawa sighed as he leaned heavily against the back of his couch. He should be asleep. Looking at time on the wall clock, it showed that it was currently 4:30 in the morning. He needed to rest, especially when he had Hitoshi's entrance exam in the morning tomorrow. Hitoshi was going to want him there, but Aizawa couldn't sleep, not with everything weighing heavily on his mind. Izuku's new quirk, Hitoshi's freak out and paranoia, and UA, whether or not his boys would get in. It was a lot to think about all at once. He shifted in his seat and looked up at the spackled ceiling. Dark brown dust popped out at him and he knew he should dust it. Maybe he could make Izuku dust it as punishment. With a soft mewling noise, Miso and Chobai both jumped on the couch. Hey guys. Aizawa lazily smiled as he extended his hand out to them. An open invitation for them to sit on his lap. They happily did so. I miss the days when it was just us four. If you guys messed up or broke something, it wasn't as bad. Aizawa couldn't help but chuckle. Miso purred and rubbed her cheek against Aizawa's scruffy chin. You're looking a little gray there, aren't ya? Aizawa scratched under Miso's chin. Miso, though a calico with lots of different colored patches, had a black patch around her whole nose and muzzle. Once in Kai black, now peppered with gray. Chobai wasn't any better with gray dotting around his own muzzle and eyes. His eyes drooped slightly, as did his whiskers. We're all getting old. There was another soft mew before Sora jumped up to join her siblings. Sora had no interest in sucking up to Aizawa as she started to groom her privates then and there. Her grays were more prominent as her top coat was mostly black. How I wish you guys could live forever with me and the boys. Aizawa couldn't help but coo as he picked Miso up so they were face to face. He couldn't help himself as he made soft kissing noises to Miso as the cat dangled above him limply. The soft moment was abruptly ruined by an audible click of a cell phone camera. Aizawa brought Miso down to his lap and looked at Hitoshi. Hitoshi grinned before he snapped another photo. Why aren't you in bed? Probably the same reason you aren't, by the way. Say hi to my new lock screen. Hitoshi smiled as he flashed his phone screen to his dad. No surprise, it was the picture he just snapped a few moments prior. Hitoshi then walked over to the couch and scooped Sora up into his arms. He then sat down on the empty seat. You have to get some sleep, Hitoshi. The exam is in 3 hours. I've slept plenty. Hitoshi shrugged as he started to scratch under Sora's chin. Sora purred at this. And if you try to send me to my room, I'll just lay in bed and watch TikTok until 7. Aizawa gave a snort at this. Smartass. He couldn't help but give a small smile. How is it that you aren't even biologically mine and you act so much like me? Nature versus nurture. Aizawa grinned a little as he ruffled Hitoshi's hair. He looked back over at the clock on the wall before standing. I would make coffee, but the pot is broken. Sorry. Regardless, I'm going to make some hot chocolate. Want some? Nothing better than 4 a.m. hot chocolate. He's not wrong, Aizawa thought as he shuffled his way into the kitchen. The moment he stepped foot into the kitchen, his cats were at his feet, whining and mewling. All except one. Hitoshi. Aizawa called and reached into the cabinet to grab the box of hot chocolate. Yeah, Hitoshi called from the living room. Where's Tora? In Zuchin's room, I think. Aizawa hummed and put the kettle on the stove. Izuku has always been that cat's favorite, even though I adopted the cat. He was talking more to himself than to Hitoshi at this point. Seeing how he was up, he decided to treat his cats while waiting for the kettle to finish. He grabbed the can of tuna and his cats went wild. He no longer had cats, but wailing, screaming babies all wanting a piece of what he had. All right. Hooking his finger into the tab on the top, he opened the can of tuna with ease and went to place it on the ground. He hardly got it there before Sora, Miso, and Chobai lunged for the treat. Animals, I swear. I hope you're happy. He was stopped by his cell phone going off in his pocket. Who on earth? Aizawa grabbed his phone and resisted the urge to roll his eyes as the name Higashi Suzuki flashed on his screen. With a click of a button, he answered the call. It's a little late to be calling me, don't you think? Ah, but I knew you'd be up. It would be, how you say, illogical to call you during the daytime, as that's when you sleep and are the busiest. Aizawa wouldn't be lying if he said he wasn't impressed with Higashi's impression of his voice. It was almost spot on. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're mocking me. Me mocking? Never. Higashi feigned ignorance, and Aizawa could just imagine him putting one of his 4 hands on his chest. Surely you didn't call me at 4 in the morning just to lie to my ears, and I know the next home visit isn't for another 6 weeks. Aizawa reached into the cabinet and pulled out 2 mugs. He cradled the phone between his ear and his shoulder as he started to open the hot chocolate packets. And you'd be right. I have sad news. Oh, it's Ishii Shinsu. Aizawa stopped. Hitoshi's biological grandmother. The very same. Higashi sighed heavily on the other line. She hasn't got long, Aizawa. I'm saying a week max. She wants to see him. It's literally her dying wish. Great, was the only thought in Aizawa's head. Does she want to see her grandson? Or does she want to see her son? There's a difference. This time Higashi sighed heavily on the other side. The kettle started to whistle and Aizawa took it off of the heat to silence it. He kept the kettle in his hand. Dai. She wants to see Dai. As far as I know, she doesn't even know or remembers that Hitoshi exists. Then no, I'm sorry, but you know how he feels about going to see her. He hates being mixed up with his father. This is a 90-year-old woman's dying wish, Aizawa. A bit of anger flared through Aizawa's veins. Higashi, not to be too rude here, but I have to keep my own mother at bay when it comes to my children. What makes you think I care about a 90-year-old with no relation to me? Are you talking about Ishii? Jesus. Aizawa couldn't help but jump at Hitoshi's voice that came from directly behind him. Don't do that. Aizawa held the kettle up to show Hitoshi, who was only a foot or so away from him. I'm holding a kettle. I could have hurt you. He put the kettle down on a cold stovetop. Hitoshi wasn't fazed by this as he pursed his lips to the side. He then re-asked his question. Are you talking about Ishii? Aizawa sucked in a breath. Hold on. Higashi, he put his hand over the receiver and focused on Hitoshi. Yes, we were. She's got less than a week and she wants to see. The words died on Aizawa's tongue. He couldn't say it. Dai. Hitoshi started to gnaw at his bottom lip. I dunno. You don't have to. But she's dying. Dad. Before it was different, but now. She's. Hitoshi looked at his feet as his face started to flush. She's the last Shinsu. Aizawa sadly thought. You don't have to make a decision right now. I know, but I have to make one soon because she only has a week left, if that. How about today? After my entrance exam. I can see her then. If that's okay with you, that is. But I want Zuchin with me. If that's okay with you. Seeing how he's grounded and all. Aizawa hoped he wasn't making a face. He didn't care that Hitoshi wanted to bring Izuku with him. That was to be expected, but he didn't know how he felt about Hitoshi wanting to see her after the exam. Aizawa, personally, felt it might be too much pressure during an already stressful time. Hitoshi already wasn't sleeping when he needed to. Not today. You have too much going on as is. I'd rather it be tomorrow. Hitoshi wrung the bottom of his shirt in his hands. He seemed to think about it before nodding. Tomorrow then. Aizawa put his phone back to his ear. You there? I thought you forgot about me there for a minute. You got a date. Tomorrow. Aizawa could hear Higashi visibly brighten at this news. Is that so? That's great. How's? Around 5 p.m. After school. That should be fine. Thank you, Eraserhead. How many times have I told you to call me Aizawa? Aizawa could feel Higashi's smile bloom across his face. One too many, I'm sure. Have a good rest of your morning. And with that, Higashi hung up the phone. He saw movement out of the corner of his eye and didn't need to look. He knew Hitoshi was wiping tears away from his eyes. So, he just grabbed the kettle and filled the mugs with hot water. After giving each mug a good stir with a spoon, he grabbed the first mug and turned to Hitoshi. Hitoshi took it. Thank you, he whispered. Come on, kid. Let's go watch cat videos in the living room until you inevitably pass out. I'm not going to pass out. He passed out with his head in Aizawa's lap after 30 minutes. You got this, Hitchin. Izuku cheered his brother on as they approached the gates of UA. It was pretty dead compared to yesterday, as expected. Usually, Nobody would be in on a Sunday, but seeing how this was Hitoshi's own exam, there was an exception. Hitoshi asked if he would be allowed to have a capture weapon, but no dice. The entrance exam is about your quirk and how good you can be to UA as a hero. Hitoshi shook his hands vigorously before wiping the sweat on his pants. I'm ready. Good. You'll do fine. Aizawa patted Hitoshi's hair. I can't go in with you past the doors, sadly. Hitoshi nodded frantically, almost like he was trying to reassure himself above anyone else at that moment. I'll do fine. He wheezed. I really wish you were with me, Zuchin. Even if he was, your tests would have been separate. Aizawa swiftly told Hitoshi. That was when the doors to UA opened. Right on time. I expected nothing less from you, Aizawa. Nezu beamed as he walked through the front doors. Hitoshi was starting to vibrate with equal parts excitement and fear coursing through his veins. Come right this way, Hitoshi, so we can get you started as soon as possible. Why, yes, sir. Hitoshi scrambled swiftly towards Nezu. He gave one last look towards his dad and Izuku. Izuku was grinning and he flashed Hitoshi a thumbs up with his good arm. Aizawa simply waved. The doors shut obediently behind them. This left Hitoshi with only Nezu. Hitoshi felt himself being angry at Izuku for going to the official entrance exam. Really, Hitoshi was just mad that he didn't have his brother's hand to hold now. He needed that comforting feeling now more than ever, but this was fine. He was fine. So, your exam is a little different from our usual entrance exams, given your quirk isn't physical-based. So, we're going to be testing your physical strength in a different way, as well as testing your quirk. Hitoshi nodded eagerly as he constantly had to adjust his walking speed to match Nezu's. It wasn't as easy as it looked with how long Hitoshi's legs were, and Nezu seemed to know this as the principal suddenly looked at Hitoshi and gave a little grin, causing his whiskers to twitch. You're so tall, he complimented Hitoshi. Thanks. Hitoshi awkwardly grinned back at Nezu. Eventually, after that little exchange, they walked out to the back of the school where the gyms sat. Once the gyms were in eyesight, Nezu continued to speak to Hitoshi. Now, your goal today is to get from the start to the finish. The finish line is at the very end of Gym Beta. It has a banner with my face on it. Hitoshi nodded along. Sounds easy, but I have a feeling it won't be that simple. Okay, anything else I need to know? He asked once they approached the doors to the fake city. The fact that this is a gym to them, insane. Just to be careful, good luck. Hitoshi couldn't help but gasp when Nezu pushed him through the giant doors. Hitoshi didn't even get to finish when the doors practically slammed shut behind him. This only left a vast emptiness in return. Hitoshi blinked and looked at the giant door before focusing back at the city before him. If I remember what Dad said about these gyms, they're all mini-functional cities. Hitoshi stood there. He shut his eyes and he could hear the hum of electricity running through the city. Be careful and good luck, Hitoshi repeated with a sigh. Make it from point A to point B. All right, let's do this. He could see his goal right there just before him at the very end of the gym. So, he started to walk. Not only did he wish for his brother, but he also wished for his father's capture weapon. It would have provided some comfort. He felt like someone, or something, was going to pop out at him any minute now. Maybe I should run it, he thought as he stared at the goal ahead of him. He narrowed his eyes and picked up speed from a walk to a leisurely jog. Too easy. Way too easy. Something isn't right. Hitoshi's mind just couldn't catch up with what happened to him next. There was a blinding white light. Hitoshi's body was flung back a few feet, and he lost his hearing all at once. Crying out, he grabbed onto his ears as they rang. He heard nothing except intense ringing for several long agonizing seconds. It was only when the ringing started to die down did it fully hit Hitoshi what had happened. He stepped on a bomb. A bomb. The bombs were weak. They had to be. They were more akin to flashbangs with just a little more blast force. Oh my god, I'm in a minefield. He could see it once the dust had started to settle. Little piles of raised dirt littered all down his path. He couldn't help but smirk as he started to rise up, being sure to look all around him so he didn't step on another mine by accident. His legs shook as he stood up fully. No amount of coffee could ever wake him up as much as that just did. So, they booby-trapped the main road. I guess the next best thing to do is to go off the road. Try from the alleyways, or I can try and brave the road. I'm flexible, but am I flexible enough to avoid every bomb? And something is telling me I should try to avoid as many bombs as I can. I bet they're keeping score on that. Hitoshi stood there and thought about what to do next. Should he take the easy way and go off the road, or try and brave it? Alleyways are more cramped. If there are bombs there, I'd be more likely to find them. That thought alone made up Hitoshi's mind. Keeping mindful of where he stepped, he skirted off of the main road and ran for the nearest alleyway. Each alley should be connected. It's like a maze, yes, but if I play my cards right, it should lead me right to the exit, he declared to no one. Jumping over a lump buried in the dirt, Hitoshi had to duck before a fire escape ladder nearly clonked him right in the head. He stopped for a moment, just a moment, and looked up at the ladder with interest. Unless, a Cheshire-like grin suddenly appeared on his face. He grabbed onto the ladder with eagerness and started to climb up it. Thank goodness, Hitoshi was never afraid of heights. Up the ladder he went until he was on the rooftop of the building. It was maybe 3 stories high. He looked around before climbing up the very edge of the roof. There was another building just within jumping distance, so he prepared himself mentally and jumped. For just a brief moment he was weightless before he made contact with the other building. Hitoshi made sure to land on his side and roll to a stop. That worked. He grinned before popping back up to his feet. He had a new plan, one he liked a lot better. Hitoshi turned his heel and ran to the edge of this building. There were 3 buildings surrounding this one, and they were all too high for him to land on the roof. The one closest to him had a fire escape that he could possibly jump to. Though he wouldn't land on the fire escape, he'd probably have to grab the bars and hoist himself up. It was risky if he missed. I'm not here to play it safe. No hero is. I'm going to be a hero with such, and if it's the last thing I do. He felt excitement coursing through his veins, and he started to jog in place to try and calm down some of those nerves building up. I got this. So, he stepped back a bit, then took a small running start and charged. He jumped once he was at the very edge of the building. The fire escape was actually closer than he expected it to be. His ribs took a harsh hit the moment they made contact with the metal. Oof, he cried out. That was going to hurt in the morning. Hitoshi managed to hook his feet into the slots of the bars and hoist himself up and over the railing. The moment his feet were on somewhat solid ground, he sighed out to himself and rubbed his ribs. Okay, now let's scale this thing. He put his pain to the side and got himself on top of the railing. Instead of climbing the stairs up the fire escape, he decided to climb the side of the fire escape. It felt faster than climbing stairs. He had a pretty good strategy going. He would hook his fingers up the railing, using his upper body strength to hoist himself up to where he stood on top of the railing. Once he got that far up, with his height to his advantage, he could just grab the bottom of the next railing up and repeat the process. He did this until he got to the end of the railing. From there it was a quick jump and he was on top of the roof. Once he was on the roof, he immediately landed on his back and looked up at the sky. He needed a minute. His arms were absolutely aching and he had sweat starting to bead at the crown of his head. That took a lot out of him. But you're not done yet. The voice in his head told him. Yeah, shut up. Hitoshi, begrudgingly, forced himself off of his back and up to his feet. He cautiously walked up to the edge of the building he was standing on. It's pretty tall, so hopefully there will be small buildings around. There was only one building close enough to him for him to jump, but the jump was far. It wasn't undoable, but he'd have to get a running start and make sure he footed it right, otherwise he'd have a broken leg. The drop was pretty long as well. Maybe I should just try and brave the ground. It might be faster. Boom. Hitoshi whipped his head around so fast he was afraid he'd give himself whiplash. He had to move his long hair from his face to get a good look at what was in front of him. Apparently, this was Nedzu's way of telling him to hurry up as a massive robot was coming his way. Oh, it set off every bomb in its path and it wasn't even phased. Hitoshi turned back around and looked at how much farther he was from the exit. 3 buildings away at least. Then he could gun it from the ground and try to avoid as many bombs as he could. Oh, fuck me. Hitoshi grabbed his hair tie from his wrist and swiftly tied his hair up so it was out of his face. Still, he couldn't help but smirk a little. I knew it wasn't going to be this easy. Skirting back a few steps, Hitoshi bent down in the starting position for track runners. The world almost seemed to slow down for him, and for a brief moment the only thing he could hear was his own breath as he exhaled a slow and shaky breath. Then he ran. Hitoshi ran like he never had before. This run was brief, but it did the job. He got to the edge of the building and jumped. He was weightless for a lot longer than he expected. He felt like he was flying, if only for a few short seconds. The edge of the other building came a lot sooner than expected. Hitoshi realized, almost too late, that he wasn't going to land correctly. He had to protect his head. And on instinct he curled up on his side so that took the brunt of the impact. It knocked the wind directly out of him and he was sure he blacked out for a microsecond. A low groan left his mouth like a ghostly wail. Fuck, that one hurt. He curled his arm around his ribs before shaking his head to clear it. Robot, move now, think later. His brain reminded him that there was a giant robot out for his blood, and if he didn't move he was probably going to be crushed. Hitoshi scrambled to his feet once he realized he could feel this behemoth coming his way. Thank goodness the next couple of roofs were short ones and easy to reach. He ignored any and all pain as he jumped from one roof to the next. The robot was closing in, closer and closer still. Little bright explosions at its wheels. But it didn't care one bit about that. Almost there. He felt joy as he slid down the last roof and onto the fire escape. He did the same thing he had done before, only in reverse. Instead of climbing up the railings, he was doing his best to scale down without hurting himself even farther. Adrenaline keeping his pain at bay for the time being. The moment his feet touched the ground, Hitoshi did a quick look around to make sure he was away from any bombs and started to gun it for the exit. Help me. Oh, come on. Hitoshi threw his arms up and spun around on his heel. It sounded like the voice, a little girl's voice. It came from the opposite way of the exit down the alley. What the hell is a little girl doing here? He could only ask himself before puffing out in irritation. Fuck it, no, do the right thing, Hitoshi. Why? Right thing. Right thing. What would Sachin do? Do I even need to ask? With an eye roll, Hitoshi ran towards the voice. Over here, he called out to the child. Follow my voice, quickly. There's a robot. He looked back over his shoulder. The robot was getting closer and closer by the second. Not only was it setting off bombs, but it was hitting and destroying buildings in its path. Hitoshi's anxiety was picking up to a dangerous level. I'm scared, the girl wailed. Oh, for Hitoshi ran his hands down his face before running deeper into the alley. Keep talking to me. Why are you here? He called as he ran. I managed to sneak in. I was just so curious. Hitoshi turned down a connecting alley. There you are, he called as he skidded to a halt. Little girl, blonde, no older than 9. He took her description briefly before running to her. Come on. Before we're crushed, he grabbed her. No, I don't want to go that way. She immediately whined and tried to pull her arm out of Hitoshi's hand. It's towards the robot. Stop it. We need to go this way. That's where the exit is. I'm scared. I don't want to. She continued to whine and cry. Hitoshi gritted his teeth. The robot was almost uncomfortably close. Pieces of buildings were flying in every which direction. If they didn't leave soon, they'd be crushed by either the robot or the debris. Less than a minute. Okay, think. Only one option, that wasn't leaving the child behind, came to his mind. Can I use my quirk on you? What? My quirk? I can make it so you won't be scared. Okay, a lie. He was going to make it so she was still. But she didn't need to know that. A high-pitched whine left her mouth. Okay, that's all he needed. The child immediately stilled. Hitoshi picked her up bridal style and ran. He ran like his life absolutely depended on it, which it kinda did. When he finally freed himself from the alleyway, he didn't even stop to see how close the robot was to him now. He knew it was right there, so close that he could smell the oil and obnoxious fumes that radiated off its stinky metal body. He kept the little girl close to his chest as he made it back on the main road. The exit was maybe 50 yards away from him. He was working on adrenaline and his own wits. He jumped past almost every bomb coming his way. A flying piece of building came down in front of him and set off a bomb only inches away from his face. Hitoshi shut his eyes from the brightness, but didn't dare stop running. Too slow. Child, heavy. He feared he wasn't going to make it. He was right there. The exit was right there. I won't give up. Not now. Not ever. I'll be a hero. I'll protect everyone when the time comes. Hitoshi's legs seemed to speed up on their own. He actually felt like he was running on air. His mind only saw the goal before him, and once he was close enough, he leaped through the exit gates. He used his own body to shield the girl from the blow on the ground. Together, the two of them rolled to a stop. Holy shit. He breathed out and let go of the little girl. They were safe, and that's all that mattered right now. He put his hands to his face and sucked in several loud and deep breaths. The robot had stopped just at the gates. Any longer and he wouldn't have made it. How was that safer than the entrance exam? Then he heard it. Clapping. Good job, Hitoshi. Impressive and effective. He looked up at Nenzu. Thank you. He gave the principal a thumbs up from his spot on the ground. Realizing he left the little girl under his quirk, he released her before he slowly sat up. Are you okay? He asked her. The girl's lower lip wobbled before she put her hands on her hips. You lied. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get us both out of there safely. I hope you understand. She only let out a loud HMPH. Before turning away from him, Nenzu let out a squeaking sound before he fully approached Hitoshi and offered his paw. Now what? Hitoshi inquired as he started to stand. At that moment, all of his pain came rushing back to him and he instinctively curled his arm around his ribs. Now we're going to send you to recovery, girl. Seems like you hurt yourself a bit. It must run in the family. Hitoshi didn't laugh. Then the rest is up to me. Nenzu's whiskers twitched a bit at this. Come on, I'll lead you to recovery, girl. Hitoshi smiled a bit as he awkwardly followed Nenzu, but he stopped for the moment. The little girl. He looked around for her, but she seemed to have vanished in thin air. No need to worry about her. But we can't keep recovery girl waiting, Hitoshi. While Hitoshi took his exam, and after Izuku got his arm healed, the two of them waited outside of UA in the car. Aizawa had shifted in his own seat, wishing for his sleeping bag right about now. He was laying down with the driver's seat all the way back. Izuku looked at his dad before looking out of the windshield. He was bored and starting to feel restless, as well as nervous for Hitchin. He needed something to take his mind off of his nerves. Looking away from his dad, he focused on the bits of change in the cup holder. He thought about looking at the years. He saw some really old coins from the early 2000s the other day and liked the design. So, he shifted in his seat and reached out to grab some change. All the change immediately shot up into his open palm. I don't think I can get used to this. What did I say about using your quirk? His father grunted in annoyance. You do it again, I'll make you run laps around the yard. I didn't mean to. I have no control over this, Izuku softly said in his own defense. However, grabbing the lever to the passenger seat, Izuku lowered himself all the way down so he and his dad were eye to eye. No, just a bit of training, you and me. No, it won't be much. I just want to test the object attraction quirk. Not all mites. No, Izuku pouted. Nothing major like the robot motors. Just change. He opened his palm to show all the change he had. Just to pass the time. You don't even need to sit up. Just watch so I don't mess up somehow. Aizawa sighed out heavily. Fine, he wouldn't admit it. But he was also rather curious about his son's object attraction quirk. Izuku lazily let all the change drop back into the cup holder. Okay, I don't want all of the change, he decided as he let his hand hover over the change. I want the yen. He eyed the golden coin up and down as he held his hand steady. There was a small rattle as the yen moved some coins to the side as it shot up into Izuku's palm. Not bad. What else can you do? Aizawa rested his head on his open palm while he propped his elbow up. Izuku prepared himself for a moment and he opened his palm. The coin fell into the cup holder with a soft tink. Izuku closed his palm before he opened it again. The golden yen coin started to slowly float to him. He shut his hand halfway and for a brief moment it paused in midair. He held it like that. It stayed there for roughly 2 seconds before it completely fell back into the cup holder. So you can slow it down or speed it up. Yes, and I can stop it if I wanted. How do you know to do that? Do what? Aizawa lazily opened and closed his palm, mimicking Izuku's moves. I don't know. It just sort of came to me. Like it was something I was supposed to do. Izuku explained. Aizawa seemed to ponder this before shrugging it off. Okay. He rolled his eyes and forced himself to sit up. He pulled the seat up just as well. Come on, I'm curious. He then opened the door and got out. Oh, Izuku happily pulled his own seat up and got out of the car eagerly. Izuku and his dad met in the middle. Stay there, his father ordered and Izuku stopped. They were maybe 10 feet away from each other. Take something off my person. Anything. Izuku analyzed what his father had on. His usual black outfit, capture scarf, and goggles hidden under the scarf. At first, Izuku wanted to take his father's capture scarf. It was the biggest and easiest thing for him to try and grab. Dad'll be expecting that. Izuku swung his right arm out and focused on his father's yellow goggles in his mind. It happened so quickly. His father, expecting the scarf, grabbed onto it tightly in an attempt to keep it. His goggles went flying off from around his neck and smacked Izuku's open palm. Izuku beamed at his father's confused face. Good job, now give them back. Izuku tossed the goggles back to his father. That quirk'll come in handy, I'm sure. Just be careful using it, so I can use it. Yes, it doesn't seem like it's hurting you. Don't abuse it and get lazy. I won't. Hello. Both Izuku and Aizawa looked over to see Hitoshi returning with Nenzu. Hichin. Izuku waved to his brother. How'd you do? Hitoshi picked up his walk to a jog. Good. The two brothers met and they shared a brief hug. Okay, you two. Aizawa came in between and lightly pushed the two apart. It's only been 30 minutes. Dad, it was awesome. I broke 2 ribs. What? Izuku grinned. Did Recovery Girl heal you? Yep. Her quirk is so cool. Hitoshi rubbed the back of his head as he smiled. Izuku, Hitoshi, I wish I can tell you that you'd both been accepted, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that. I must review your test results just like everybody else. You'll both know your results in a week and it'll come in the mail. Nenzu smiled at the two boys. Thank you, Principal Nenzu. Izuku bowed respectfully. And I do apologize about yesterday. Yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Hitoshi bowed next to Izuku. Of course, Aizawa, I'll be seeing you tomorrow morning. You know it. Aizawa came up behind his two boys and grabbed each of their shoulders with each hand. Nenzu's whiskers twitched as he turned towards Yue. He raised one of his furry paws and gave the trio one last wave. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, boys.